Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the What If Guy, back with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Issei Had Throne of Heroes. Now before starting, please give this video a like, and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Issei, I know you're sad about what happened to your mother, but try to have a good time, for Irina's sake. Remember their family's moving tomorrow, requested his father. I'll try Dad, replied the 10-year-old Issei as he approached his friend Irina. Come on Issei-kun, let's go, cried Irina as he rushed towards the festival stands. Issei was going to follow him when a specific stand caught the boy's attention, the Throne of Heroes. Shrugging, he walked over to it and was immediately greeted by an old man whom quickly offered Issei a seat. Hello boy, what can this humble magician do for you, greeted the man. I was just wondering what this stand does, replied Issei. The man just gained a smug smile. We make heroes, boy. Would you like me to do the same to you? Issei's eyes widened and he nodded eagerly. He wanted to become strong, and heroes were strong, weren't they? He would definitely do it so that when Irina came back he would be strong enough to protect himself. He wouldn't have to rely on his friend to bail him out all the time. Very well then, let's begin, shall we, grinned the man before he chanted something in a strange language Issei couldn't recognize and reached into his pocket to pull out several objects. The boy looked at the old man in confusion as he held up 7 cards that reminded Issei of tarot cards and placed them along the table. There are many types of heroes in this world, and I wonder which one are you, The old man then pointed at the first card, showing a knight with what looked like a claymore drawn and ready. First there is the saber class, fighters whose skill with swords were so great that they rivaled even the gods. So they're like noble knights protecting the innocents, asked Issei. The man nodded with a frown. Some are, but not all. Don't forget, knights aren't the only ones skilled with a sword, young man, and not all knights are noble ones. In fact, there is one who is even called the Knight of Treachery. Even if they weren't noble, I'm sure they had reasons for doing what they did. Knights are people too, after all, argued the boy as he looked up to the old man with a determined expression, not noticing the saber card light up slightly at his reply. The man just raised an eyebrow at this as he replied, Indeed, they did have reasons, but what is better, boy, to do the wrong things for the right reasons, or doing the right thing for the wrong reasons? If you truly want to be a hero, then you need to learn this. The boy just frowned as he stared at the saber card, almost feeling his hand closing around the hilt of an imaginary sword before nodding in understanding. Seeing this, the old man moved on to the next card that had a man holding a long spear ready to strike. Next we have the Lancer class, heroes that like the saber class have mastered spears to godly levels. An amused grin spread across his face as he leaned forward and whispered to Issei, but just between you and me, they seem to have the worst luck of the bunch. Who needs luck when you have skill? After all, they wouldn't have been able to become heroes if something as minor as bad luck stopped them, replied Issei as he looked down on the Lancer card, the image of a red spear appearing in his mind as he touched it. Quite so, agreed his companion, snapping Issei out of his daze and drawing his attention back to the conversation, the boy once again not noticing a small light coming of the Lancer card. The man seemed to frown slightly in confusion as he examined the 2 cards, but the moment passed quickly and Issei was left wondering if he had imagined it as the old man moved on to the 3rd card with a smile on his face. Looking down on the 3rd card, Issei saw it appeared to be a rider in some kind of chariot, preparing to ride after his enemies. Now we come to the rider class. They are heroes who are known for their amazing mastery of mounted combat, or have a mount so famous they can't be pictured without it, continued the old man. What does that mean? Asked Issei in confusion. I got it. Tell me, when you think of Batman, what do you picture? Asked the man. Batman riding down the street in his Batmobile, chasing after the bad guys, replied the boy, eagerly. Exactly, you see, Batman would be considered a rider hero, he explained, giving Issei an approving nod. So I could be Batman, shouted Issei in excitement, drawing the attention of others celebrating the festival. Indeed, laughed the man before fixing a stare on Issei. However, be aware that riders are usually at a disadvantage in most fights. After all, most circumstances don't let them use their mounts. Issei just looked up at him with an eager smile as the feeling of reins appeared in his hands and he heard the booming of thunder. The harder the fight, the greater the prize. After all, that's what conquering is all about. Like the 2 before it, the rider card glowed softly at this while the man nodded as his grin grew wider and he led Issei over to the next card. Examining it, Issei saw what appeared to be a man with his bow and arrow drawn, sighting down on some imaginary enemy. This is the archer class, the masters of ranged combat. Simply give them a target and they will be able to hit it even from miles away. They usually are very independent from others though, grinned the man, eager to see the response he would get. So they're like solitary hunters, the ultimate hunters, able to catch anything that they put their mind to. Too wild and free to be held down by others, and yet at the same time one of the loneliest heroes to exist, replied Issei sadly as images of a lone figure hunting in the woods and running in foot races faded out of his mind. The old man nearly jumped for joy as he eyed the card beneath Issei's hand and watched as it glowed softly. The man then quickly drew the boy's attention to the next card before Issei noticed the light. The boy looked down and saw what appeared to be a cloaked old man holding a book of some kind and giving off a very wise aura. Next we have the caster class, embodying the best magic users that have ever existed. They can do spells that most mages today could only dream of, and then some, definitely not one to be looked down upon for its lack of physical strength, explained the man, cheerfully. Magic is real, cried the boy in wonder. His companion nodded in amusement. That's right, and speaking from personal experience, it is very useful. Wouldn't you want to use it too? Of course, then I could do my own magic show, as his thoughts were filled with childish wonder at the possibilities. However, his thoughts soon turned into something odd. He felt his body growing hot, and yet it was comforting, almost like the sun. Next, images of a large building, almost like a palace, filled his head, and he saw a group of angry men rushing towards him before the images shattered and were replaced by an ornate mirror hovering in front of him. "Oi boy," shouted a male voice, snapping Issei back to the present as the man watched him with an intrigued expression. "Sorry, I zoned out for a second," apologized the boy. His companion just waved him off and pointed to the next card, causing Issei to freeze as he followed the man's gaze and examined the card. Issei frowned as he saw the picture of what could only be described as a monstrosity or mad beast on the card. What is that?" he asked, fearfully. Now, don't be so quick to judge," berated the old man with a smile. "This is the Berserker class, heroes that have gone mad with grief, rage, or lust. They are one of the strongest, but at the cost of their sanity. Heroes that have lost their loved ones, I know how that feels," replied Issei as he stared at the card with sympathy. "So you can understand why they did what they did?" questioned the man in surprise. The boy just nodded with a weary look in his eyes that didn't belong on a child's face. "Yeah, honestly, I probably would have done the same." The boy's eyes widened, however, as he saw the card glow and a stone axe or it seemed to appear in his hand before fading away. Alarmed, Issei quickly looked up at the old man, who just smiled, and continued on to the final card, which showed a man with a skull mask performing a mid-air backflip. And finally we come to the last one, the assassin class. Now I know what you are thinking. How could an assassin ever be a hero? Well, have you ever seen the Ninja Turtles? They are assassins, and yet people still consider them to be heroes, he quickly explained, seeing Issei's horrified expression. Issei was silent as he just picked up the card and stared at it, clearly conflicted about the choice, until finally he placed it down on the table and looked up at the man with a serious expression that completely contrasted his childish face. "No one respects life more than someone who has to take it away. If I had to do it, I would never enjoy it, but at least I could make it painless," he decided as the card gave off a soft glow, and as Issei looked back at the old man, his eyes widened. For just an instant he could have sworn he saw a giant ornate guillotine behind the old man. Blinking, Issei frowned, and the image faded away as he let go of the assassin card. The man just laughed before he picked up all 7 cards and examined them with growing excitement. "Incredible, in all the worlds I've been to, no one has been compatible with more than one, let alone all 7, not even your counterparts, boy." Came Issei's reply to this apparently madman's ravings. The man just smiled as he handed the 7 cards to Issei, who nearly dropped them as all 7 began glowing at his touch. "Alright boy, listen carefully. These cards will help you become strong enough to be a hero. Now you just need to pick one. So which will it be? What kind of hero do you want to become?" he asked, eagerly. Issei just looked at the 7 cards and frowned as he examined them. The 2 of them were silent for a solid 10 minutes until the boy looked up at the man. "So these cards will help me become stronger." Seeing the man nod, Issei continued, "And I can pick any one of them and you'll give me the one I pick." "That's right," replied the man, looking even more curious than before. Issei just put all 7 cards on the table and stared at his companion with a determined expression. "Then I'd pick all of them," he announced. The man's face became a textbook expression of shock before he suddenly burst out laughing. "Well, aren't you the greedy one? I can't believe it. A child managing to shock me, the master of kaleidoscope kisher Zelretch Schweinorg." The newly named Zelretch finally stopped laughing as he handed the cards back to Issei. "Looks like I've found a new world to be my playground after all. Congratulations, Issei Hayao, come and claim your prizes." Issei grinned happily as he examined the cards and ran off to show his friend Irina. Zelretch smiled as he watched him go. "I have high hopes for you, Issei Hayao, and I can't wait to see how you evolve this time around." As Issei dragged his friend Irina back to the stand to show him the old man, they were both shocked to see nothing there. No Zelretch, no festival stand, nothing but an empty space. "Issei-kun, it's not nice to tease people," pouted Irina as they walked off. For his part, Issei just looked down at the cards in his hands, trying to piece together what had just happened. Eventually shrugging, he placed them in his pocket, not noticing them beginning to glow briefly as 7 ghostly figures appeared above him before disappearing. Issei sighed as he found himself in the same place as usual and climbed up off the stone ground before taking note of his surroundings. The area looked like the Roman Colosseum, with an arena floor as well as bleachers reaching up into the sky. Where the emperor's throne sat was a massive red dragon statue, cradling the throne protectively. Issei stood on the ground floor in the arena area, sighing as he saw the 7 sealed doorways leading out of the arena. Each of the doorways had a different symbol above it, showing one of the class cards he had received all those years ago. "Man, I really hate this place," sighed Issei as he once again found himself trapped on the arena floor like usual. "Zelretch, you bastard, these cards are useless. They've done nothing but trap me in my dreams since I got the damn things." As soon as he finished his rant, Issei had to duck as a piece of the stands above broke off and nearly hit him in the head. "You were responsible for that, weren't you, Zelretch? Come out, I know you can hear me, you bastard." There was only silence in reply, causing Issei to growl in frustration before laying back down on the floor as he closed his eyes and waited for the dream to end. I will get stronger, with or without his help. Even if I'm dealt the worst luck in the world, I'll definitely get stronger, he thought, determined as the dream began to end. However, right before he left, Issei could have sworn he heard the sound of something cracking and crumbling near one of the sealed doorways. Opening his eyes, Issei found himself once again in the comfort of his room and yawned as he did his daily stretches. Unfortunately, as he did so, Issei failed to keep track of the time, and when his alarm rang again, the teen froze as he stared at the clock before getting changed and bolting from his room and out the door. "Issei, where are you going? What about breakfast?" his dad called from inside. "Sorry, Dad, there should be some leftovers from last night you can heat up," replied Issei before he slammed the door behind him and rushed towards school. Looking at his watch, Issei began picking up the pace. "Oh man, I'm going to be late." Memories of the student council president's last punishment for being late filled his mind, making Issei reach speeds that would make even the Flash himself impressed as he desperately tried to beat the clock. Finally, Issei allowed himself to feel some form of relief as he saw Kyo Academy appear in the distance, bringing tears of happiness to his eyes. Cheering with joy, Issei made it into the school grounds just as the bell rang, making Sona Shitori sigh as she ticked me off the list. "You're cutting it a bit close, Hayao-san. In the future, I would recommend you keep a better track of the time," she commented, glaring at him. "Alright, I'll get right on that, Kaichu," assured Issei as a chill ran down his spine. Dismissing him with a wave, Issei ran towards his first class, desperate to get there on time and not get himself further in the student council's bad books. He was in such a rush that the teen didn't notice the person in front of him until it was too late and the two of them collided into each other. Groaning, Issei got up from the ground and froze as he saw whom he had knocked over. Yudo Kiba, otherwise known as the Prince of Kyo Academy, rubbed the back of his head as the school mascot Kaneko Taoju helped him up from the ground. "Good morning, Hayao-san. I hope you're not injured," greeted Kiba. Before Issei could reply, he was immediately tackled by the horde of Kiba fangirls. "Issei, Hayao, how dare you hurt our prince?" Seeing this, Kiba just sighed before he and Kaneko turned and left, trying to ignore the cries of pain coming from Issei as the fangirls continued their beating. "Kiba-kun," said Kaneko, breaking the silence. "What is it, Konkachan?" asked Kiba as he turned to face her. "Hayao-senpai has a large number of different scents coming from him, but the strongest is of a dragon," stated the girl, causing her companion to stumble. "Could he have a sacred gear?" he replied with a frown. "Possible," replied Kaneko. Kiba sighed before heading to the clubroom. "We'd better tell Butchu about this." Issei sighed as he rubbed his recent wounds from the fangirl beating and headed home as the last bell of the day mercifully rung. Excuse me, are you Issei Hayao?" asked a female voice. Spinning around, he saw a female teen in a uniform he didn't recognize standing shyly in front of school gate. "That depends. Why are you looking for him?" he replied, cautiously. God knows he'd had enough with the girls here beating him up for touching their prince, and he was in no mood for the beatings to continue. "Well, my name is Yuuma and I was wondering if you're seeing anyone right now," she asked, hopefully. "No, not right now. Why?" frowned Issei. "I was hoping we could go on a date," she replied, cheerfully. Issei's brain literally came to a crashing halt at this, a girl who he has never met before asking him out on a date. If he were part of those perverted duo, he would have leapt at the opportunity to go on a date with a woman like that. Don't get him wrong, he loved Oppai as much as the next guy, but it was tempered by common sense, something that is apparently sorely lacking in those two perverts. As it was, this was definitely odd and a little suspicious, but his mother did always tell him to give people a chance. Besides, what's the worst that could happen? Giving her a smile, he nodded. Sure, why not? Is Sunday at the shopping district any good for you? Yes, I'll see you there, she shouted, happily, before running off. Well, maybe my abysmal luck is finally about to change, grinned Issei happily, not noticing the watchful eyes of Kaneko as the girl emerged from her hiding place with a frown. All in all, the date was going rather well. It had started off a bit weird with some cosplayer giving him a flyer which he then placed in his card holder, but after that, everything seemed to be going great. In fact, Issei couldn't remember the last time he'd had this much fun. "Hey Issei-kun, could you do me a favor?" said Yuuma as the two stopped by the park water fountain. "Sure, you imagine. What is it?" he asked, although an uneasy feeling began spreading throughout his body. "Could you please die for me?" she replied with a sickeningly sweet smile as black crow-like wings appeared on her back. Issei's eyes widened and he immediately dodged to the side as his instinct screamed at him to move, only to cry out in shock as a light spear hit the spot he had been standing previously. Issei quickly backed up and glanced at the spot had just vacated and blanched as he saw a smoking creator remaining. "Yuuma, what the hell are you doing?" he shouted, fearfully. "I'm sorry, Issei, but you're a threat to us and need to be eliminated. If you want something to blame, then blame your own terrible luck for having being born with that sacred gear inside you," replied Yuuma uncaringly as she readied another light spear. Issei once again dived to the side as the light spear was sent over his head and stripped the nearby plants of their leaves. Why do always get the worst luck, damn it, he thought angrily as Yuuma began laughing at his pathetic attempts to survive. "Who needs luck when you have skill?" For the briefest moment, Issei froze as he heard his own 10-year-old's voice echo across his head. "That's right, I forgot, didn't I?" he murmured before stopping and turning to face Yuuma with a determined expression. "My own terrible luck. How well, a true hero doesn't need luck. A true hero is strong enough to overcome it, or they wouldn't be heroes to begin with," grinned Issei as he reached into his belt card holder and pulled out the Lancer card, which for the first time in years began glowing. Looking back up at Yuuma, Issei's grin widened as he held the glowing card out before him while his opponent frowned and sent another light spear at him. Just as the light spear was about to hit, Yuuma heard Issei's voice, "Include Lancer." Immediately afterwards there was a flash of light that obscured everything from view as Yuuma shielded her eyes from the blast. As she opened them, the fallen angel was shocked and slightly worried as she saw Issei standing there with a predatory grin on his face and a red spear in one hand that was radiating lust. "You know I should thank you, Yuuma. If you hadn't attacked me then I might not have figured out how to use these cards," he said with his grin still present. "Don't get cocky, you lowly human," snarled Yuuma as she summoned another spear in her hand and threw it at the teen. Issei merely sighed before deflecting the light spear with his red lance, causing it to explode behind him, and as he began calmly walking towards her. "Tell me, Yuuma, how many people have you conned with this little scheme of yours, and how many people have you killed?" growled the teen as he approached. "Shut up, they're just worthless humans. Nothing but cockroaches beneath my feet," she growled as she continued raining spears down on him. Issei just dodged and deflected each one, his eyes never leaving hers as he advanced. "I see, then it's safe to assume that you'll continue doing this to others. Of course, you humans are all insects anyway. What does it matter if I kill a few?" she scoffed, causing Issei's eyes to narrow. You're rotten to the core, aren't you? Looks like I have no choice," he sighed before rushing towards her with a speed that rivaled most Devil Knights. Yuuma was only able to see a blur of movement before he appeared beside her and sent a roundhouse kick to her head, sending her slamming against a wall. The fallen angel quickly recovered from her surprise and summoned her light spear just in time to block Issei's red lance, only to see her spear get shattered by the lance that then created a long white cut along her arm. Issei then followed up his attack with the blunt end of his lance, hitting Yuuma in the stomach and sending her crashing into the ground a few feet from him. "Sorry to tell you, Yuuma, but my lance is much too fierce to be stopped but those pitiful excuses you call spears," informed Issei with a grin. "You bastard," panted Yuuma as she pushed herself up from the ground and glared at her supposedly weak opponent. "Don't think that just because you've unlocked your sacred gear means you've won." Issei looked unimpressed by her boasting. "I'm done holding back, Yuuma, and you better start fighting seriously or..." He suddenly appeared in front of her with his lance aimed at her head. "I'll kill you." Yuuma only just dodged the blow as cut strands of her hair floated to the ground and she was again thrown backwards by a kick to the gut. Finally having enough of this beatdown, Yuuma snarled before she leapt into the air and began flying high above him, summoning another spear. "You see, this is the difference between us, human. That spear of yours can't do anything to me now. Can it now be a deer and stand still so I can kill you already?" gloated Yuuma. Issei just laughed. "I suppose now is as good a time as any to use it." He then grasped the red lance with both hands before getting into an odd stance. Yuuma watched on unimpressed until the lust from the lance skyrocketed as its head began to glow with a red light. The fallen angel just prepared to throw her spear, but it was too late as Issei looked up at her with a satisfied expression that rapidly turned to surprise as he dodged another barrage of light spears. "Rainier, what the hell is going on? How hard is it to kill a simple human?" shouted a male voice. "Shut it, Donaseek, there's something weird with this kid," she replied, angrily. "Well, hurry up, we need to kill him before the devils realize what's going on," replied a fedora-wearing man with black wings and summoning a spear in each hand. "Fine, then get down there and help me, you battle maniac," snarled Rainier as she began pelting Issei with spears. Donaseek just watched appraisingly as Issei deflected and dodged Rainier's spears before an excited smile crossed his face as he leapt towards the human. Sensing him coming, the team brought the lance up to block the downward S from Donaseek's spears before pushing the male fallen angel back with a kick to the stomach. Not giving the fallen angel time to recover, Issei sent a rapid number of jabs at his opponent's chest only to see Donaseek dodge the strikes before using his feet to sweep kick Issei and knock the human off balance. The teen's enhanced reaction times were the only things that saved him from the fallen angel nearly braining him with his two light spears. Quickly regaining his footing, Issei backed up to get some distance and time to think, but instead was forced to deflect a barrage of light spears from Rainier, which Donaseek then used to once again close the distance between two of them. Again, Issei was forced onto the defensive as the more experienced male counterpart pressed his advantage while Rainier continued taking pot shots at the teen. Dodging another of Rainier's spears, Issei grinned as he saw it accidentally hit her teammate and immediately used the opening to inflict a deep stab wound in the fallen angel's side. Donaseek cried out in pain before he retaliated by cutting at Issei's legs in an attempt to cripple him. Thankfully, both attacks were blocked by Issei's lance, but it costed him a spear to the shoulder courtesy of Rainier, who was still flying above the two fighters. "Well, it would seem you are the better fighter of the two," commented Issei as he ducked under Donaseek's spears again before thrusting with his own. "Trust me, kid, you haven't seen anything yet," replied the fallen angel as he deflected the red lance, cracking his first spear in the process, and used his second spear to make a shallow cut along Issei's shoulder. Grunting in surprise more than pain, Issei brought his lance down on cracked spear and shattered it as the red lance inflicted a similar cut along the fallen angel's side. Donaseek's eyes widened as he saw his cracked spear shatter, but before Issei could take advantage of the sudden opening, he was forced to bring his lance up to deflect another spear from Rainier. Using this distraction, OOC quickly flew upwards to get some distance between the two of them and summoned a replacement spear. Issei just watched the two fallen angels hovering above him with a calculating expression as he weighed the chances of fighting the two of them at once. He could feel his body beginning to tire from the constant abuse it was taking and knew that he couldn't afford for this fight to go on much longer. Thankfully, he still had his ace up his sleeve, but if he tried to use it on one of them, it would leave him exhausted and easy prey for the other. Issei's inner debate was cut short as OOC swooped down upon him with his two spears, causing Issei to growl as his arms struggled to hold back the fallen angel's strength. Before Issei could return the attack, however, OOC flew back into the air before beginning another swooping attack and sending Issei flying into the air from the impact. Seeing his opponent's helpless position, OOC quickly swooped towards the human like a raptor as he readied his spears for the killing blow. Realizing this, Issei stabbed his lance into the ground, halting his flight before twisting in midair and using his momentum to remove his weapon from the ground and swing the lance like a bat at the fallen angel. Unable to turn or stop in time, OOC's eyes widened and he brought his two spears up to block the incoming blow as his momentum literally carried him towards the lance. The two light spears briefly held back the red lance before they both shattered, and OOC cried out in pain as the lance inflicted another narrow cut along his chest and sent him crashing into the ground. Seeing an opening, Issei jumped towards the down fallen angel with his lance thrusting towards OOC's heart. However, seeing this and realizing that he didn't have time to summon his light spears to block, the fallen angel reached up and grabbed the of Issei's lance just as it was about to pierce his heart. The lance hovered there just above OOC's chest as the two of them attempted to overpower the other, one attempting to push it away while the other tried to impale his opponent. Eventually the deadlock was broken as Issei heard Rainier approaching from behind and yanked his lance backwards, carrying OOC along with him as the fallen angel failed to anticipate the sudden change in their tug-of-war. The male fallen angel was once again sent flying and crashed into Rainier, which sent the two of them tumbling to the ground, only for them both to roll to either side as they dodged Issei's red lance stabbing where they had been laying seconds earlier. The two fallen angels quickly took to the sky as they began to reappraise Issei, who was meeting their gaze, a thirsty grin on his face as he picked up OOC's fedora that had fallen to the ground and placed it on his head. "What is up with this kid?" muttered OOC as he tried to ignore the pain from the numerous wounds and summoned his spears. "I don't know, he wasn't anything like this before he summoned that sacred gear," replied Rainier, equally wary of the boy. "Is that even a sacred gear? I don't recognize it, do you?" he asked with a frown. Rainier shook her head. "No, I don't, but it has to be a sacred gear. What else could it be?" "I don't know, but I keep getting the feeling that he's holding back against us, like he could end this in a single attack if he wanted to," answered OOC with a concerned frown. "Don't be ridiculous, OOC, he's just a human, he doesn't stand a chance against the two of us," scoffed Rainier. OOC remained silent as he just stared at Issei's lance and frowned as his battle-hardened instincts kept screaming at him to run from that demonic spear. The reports had said that the boy had a draconic sacred gear, not a demonic one, and while it was possible for the reports to get it wrong, OOC couldn't escape the feeling that this wasn't the case. "Boy, are you two done yet? I thought you were supposed to be on a limited time frame," commented the smug human. "You smug little shit, I'm going to take great pleasure in killing you," snarled Rainier. OOC just gritted his teeth as he realized the kid was right. They couldn't afford for the devils of this city to catch them here. Sighing, he and Rainier nodded to each other before the both split up and each began throwing spears from different angles. "Damn it," growled Issei as the sheer volume of spears being thrown began to overwhelm him, cuts and scratches beginning to appear along his body. Finally, there was a lull in the spear barrage as both fallen angels stopped to recover their energy and stared down in shock at Issei, who was panting heavily but still alive and kicking. Sighing as he realized that he would need to use his ace, Issei grasped his lance in two hands and got into his stance, focusing on the more experienced OOC. Instantly the lust around them increased tenfold as the tip of Issei's lance began to glow a red, begging to be unleashed upon his enemies. Not removing his gaze from OOC's eyes, Issei thrust his lance forward as he activated the noble phantasm, making recognition and fear appear in the eyes of the two fallen angels. "EBOLG," called Issei as his lance turned into a red beam that began heading straight towards OOC. The fallen angel quickly dived behind the stone fountain only for the red beam to live up to its name and change direction at an impossible angle before piecing his heart. The name had been called, and so the reversal of the nature of causality activated. Instead of the heart being pierced by the thrust of the lance, it became, "The heart has been pierced, so the lance must have been thrust," meaning that the spear cannot be thrust without the heart first being pierced, as OOC had just found out. Rainier just watched as the lance pierced her companion's heart before he coughed up and collapsed to the ground, the expression of shock still on his face. Guibald then transformed back into a red beam before returning to Issei's hand and turning back into a lance as the teen grinned up at her. "Impossible, only Cuchulainn himself can use that weapon. Don't tell me you're one of his descendants. I didn't think he had any left," exclaimed the shocked Rainier. "Maybe I am and maybe I'm not. The question now is, shall we continue this or do you want to call it here?" bluffed Issei with a confident grin as he tried to hide his exhaustion. Rainier pondered for a minute as she looked between Issei and her dead companion, eyes widening as Issei's image was briefly replaced by a blue-clad man eyeing her with an eager smile, before she began flying away as fast as possible to get out of the Guibald's range. After she left, Issei collapsed to the ground in exhaustion and he began panting heavily as Guibalg glowed before turning back into the Lancer card. "See, I knew you could do it," cheered a male voice from a nearby park bench. It was a good thing that Guibalg had already vanished, as he probably would have stabbed the bastard right then and there. The occult research clubroom was quiet as they all prepared for the summoning that didn't happen, as the silence continued until Kiba was the first to speak up. "But I don't think it's happening." "Damn it, he was supposed to summon me, so why didn't he?" cried a distraught Rias. "But what's done is done and we can't change that, we just need to deal with it," replied Aquino. Rias sighed but nodded, informed Sona about what happened and to make the proper arrangements. "Also let her know that I'm done letting these fallen angels think they've outsmarted us. From now on, if we see them, then attack on sight. They will pay dearly for this." "Understood. Shall I send out the familiars to search for them?" asked her queen. "No, that will just alert them that we are aware of their presence. For now, stick to your normal activities, but if you see one of them, eliminate them," she ordered, making Aquino grin eagerly. Ara, I really hope I see one. I could do with a stress reliever after the death of one of dear little Kohai," she muttered as lightning crackled around her fingertips. Kaneko just nodded silently in agreement while Kiba had an angered expression on his face as he summoned one of his swords, imagining it cutting off the crow wings of those murderers. The group shared a moment of silence for the departed student before Kiba eventually spoke up. "I feel sorry for Issei's father to lose both his wife and now his son. That must be devastating," he mused. Rias was silent as she stared down at the table before she sighed and stood up. "I'm going to go inform his father about what happened." "But are you sure that's a good idea with those fallen angels still around? Who knows what they're planning next?" argued Kiba in concern. "It's my fault this happened, Yuudo. If I had just asked if he would be a member of my peerage, none of this would have happened." "I need to be the one that informs his father," explained Rias as she headed for the door. "Then let one of us accompany you. As your knight, I heavily advise against this," he replied, getting nods from the others. "I appreciate the concern, but this is something I must do alone if I want to learn from it. Let me know if anything comes up. I have some bad news to deliver," sighed the president as she closed the door and left the building. "Where the hell have you been?" shouted Issei while Zelretch just sat back in his park chair and relaxed. "I've been to many places, boy. Although the exact number not even I know anymore, but my last count was around 7 billion, replied the magician with a grin as he got up and gestured for Issei to follow. "That's not what I meant, and you know it now. Where are we going?" sighed the teen, walking after him. "Why, my house, of course. Even someone like you should be able to figure that out. After all, you want to get those wounds treated, don't you?" replied Zelretch happily. "I swear to God, Zelretch, I will stab you with Guibalg," growled Issei as his left eye began twitching. "We're here," cheered the magician, ignoring him completely. Looking up, Issei's eye began twitching again as he turned back to his companion. "Zelretch, this is a maid cafe." "So it is," replied Zelretch before walking inside. Issei briefly debated leaving and forgetting about the crazy old man, but the pain of his wounds forced him to follow with a sigh. Upon entering the cafe, Issei immediately fell as the floor beneath him faded away and he was sent tumbling down some sort of slide built into the floor. Suddenly he saw light growing larger and prayed that he was in for a soft landing. He shouldn't have bothered. "So did you enjoy the ride?" asked an amused Zelretch while Issei slowly picked himself up off the floor and resisted the urge to summon Guibalg. Glaring at the magician, Issei hissed as he felt his wounds begin closing up while Zelretch attended to them with some form of healing magic. "That was a good start, boy. I'm very impressed. Taking on 2 fallen angels without any practice using the cards and only in the include state," congratulated Zelretch. "Fallen angels? What are you talking about?" replied Issei. "Oh, you know the stories. Angels that sinned and were cast out of heaven for their crimes," answered the magician with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Enough about that. Tell me, how did it feel using the cards for the first time?" Issei frowned at the sudden change of topic but decided to humor the old man as he brought out the Lancer card from the card holder. "It felt good. I've never felt that kind of power before, but at the same time it felt like I wasn't in full control of my body. Like I was a puppet dancing to someone else's strings. That feeling will pass in time as you become more in tune with the card's heroic spirit," assured Zelretch. "Heroic spirit?" repeated Issei in confusion. "Indeed, they are the souls of some of the most heroic and infamous figures in human history who upon their deaths ascended into the throne of heroes, complete with the power of their legends that usually manifest as what we call noble phantasms," explained the magician with a surprisingly serious expression. "Like Guibalg?" guessed the teen. Zelretch nodded before continuing. "Yes, Guibalg, the legendary spear of the demigod Cuchulainn, is a good example of one. But remember, not all are as obvious and easy to use as that one. That fallen angel I was fighting talked about Cuchulainn like he was still alive, so how can he be in the throne of heroes?" argued Issei. "Ah, that's actually rather simple. You see, all the heroic spirits used in your cards are actually from another world," he replied, happily causing Issei's eye to twitch once more as he explained the Holy Grail war and second true magic called Kaleidoscope. "Let me just see if I got this right. You and these cards are from an alternate reality where the souls of dead heroes and villains fight for the chance to win this Holy Grail. And that you came here by using an incredible type of true magic called Kaleidoscope that lets you travel to different worlds," he stated as he began rubbing his temples. "Different times and versions of that war, but yes, that is the general idea. Glad you understand it," commented the magician, ignoring the death stare that Issei sent his way. Now then, time to check to see if the cards are working properly. Boy, I need you to use the Lancer card. Issei debated, disobeying just to spite him, but as usual his common sense quickly made him throw that option out the window. And the teen sighed before he grasped the glowing card, include Lancer. Sure enough, the card's glow intensified before it morphed into the recognizable shape of Gibalg, resting comfortably in the teen's grasp. Zelretch just walked over to examine the spear before he muttered more words in a language Issei didn't understand and nodded, apparently satisfied with his recent test. Seeing this, Issei dismissed Gibalg, which then transformed back into the card that he then put back in the holder. As he looked at the other 6 in the holder, Issei's curiosity began to grow at what other noble phantasms each contained. It won't work, informed Zelretch, guessing his thoughts. What do you mean, replied the teen as he put the other 6 cards back into the holder. Each of those cards require you to be in tune, so to speak, with the heroic spirit it contains in order to be used. So far you only have a high enough connection to the Lancer class. The others might as well be tarot cards for all the good they do in combat, informed the magician. Issei just sighed. So how do I increase this connection to the cards? They'll naturally increase over time and with training, but the process can be sped up in different circumstances depending on the heroic spirit itself, elaborated the magician. What do you mean, the teen asked with a frown. If you find yourself in a similar situation that the heroic spirit faced, then it will likely improve your connection to that card, explained Zelretch. And how am I supposed to do that? The chances of that happening is slim to nil, complained Issei. The magician nodded happily. Exactly, which is why we will be focusing on training instead. Training? Where am I supposed to do training? He grumbled. Zelretch merely smiled while gesturing to the area they were, and Issei blinked as he saw an entire underground cavern beneath the cafe. How the hell did you make all this? Scratch that. How did the real owners of this place not notice it? Magic, replied Zelretch with his annoying grin that once again caused Issei's eye to twitch uncontrollably. Taking a deep breath, the teen tried to put away his frustration for the trolling magician aside and smiled as he imagined chasing the old man around with Gibalg. So how do these cards work? You said they contain heroic spirits. Does that mean that anyone could use them? He asked, worried. Zelretch just shook his head. No, the heroic spirits may reside in the cards, but they are bonded to your soul now, Issei. You're connected to each of them in ways that even I struggle to comprehend. So could I use their abilities without the cards? Issei replied, eagerly. The magician just gave him a deadly serious look. In theory, yes. But in doing so you will likely suffer irreparable physical and mental changes. These cards act as catalysts for you so you can easily activate the servant's power, but they are also your protection, preventing your mind from being consumed by theirs. Even with the cards, using install still has major side effects, muttered the magician quietly. Install, repeated Issei. Something you're nowhere near ready for yet, boy. Stick to include for now, ordered Zelretch, sternly, and getting a nod of understanding in response. Good, now that we got that straightened out, are there any more questions before I send you back home? Asked the magician. Yeah, if Cuchulainn is in the Lancer card, then who are the other 6? Questioned Issei, only to groan as he saw a smug smile spread across Zelretch's face. Now why would I tell you that it wouldn't be nearly as entertaining for me if I did that now, would it? Laughed the magician. Fine, then at least explain to me who the hell was attacking me earlier and why you can do that much, can't you? Growled Issei, his short patience long since expired. Fair enough, conceded the magician as a smile spread across his face. Now listen up, you're about to hear a story courtesy of good old Uncle Zelretch himself. Oh goody, deadpanned Issei. Ignoring his unenthusiastic listener, Zelretch continued, you see, it all started with the 3 biblical factions. Issei frowned as he made his way back home and sighed as he thought about how badly the day had gone. First time I get a girlfriend and she tries to kill Med him, Lancer luck. Still, who would have thought that angels and devils exist and that God is dead? The teen was quite shocked when Zelretch had revealed that little tidbit of information, but just used it as a reminder that no one was invincible and that he shouldn't get cocky with his power. Raynor said she was after me for my sacred gear. Did she just mistake the class cards for one? He pondered as the teen approached his house. Man, Dad's going to be mad at how laid out I was, he muttered with a sigh before opening the door to a sight he never thought he'd ever see. There, sitting in the middle of the room, was his father, who was happily drinking a beer, while sitting across from him was one of the 3 great Ajo-samas of Kyo Academy, Rias Gremory. Upon hearing the door open, they both turned to see him walk in, his father smiling as he greeted his son while Rias just stared at him in complete shock. Issei, come have a seat and join us. Grimorychan apparently has something incredibly important to tell us, invited Mr. Hayato. Oh, does she now? Replied Issei as he gave her a suspicious glare that caused Rias to squirm slightly before sitting down next to his father, keeping one hand around the Lancer card should he need it. Well, Grimorychan, we're waiting. Rias just nodded before staring at him. Hayato-san, did anything strange happen today? You mean aside from finding you in my house? No, he lied, making Rias flush in embarrassment. So you didn't notice any strange people around or odd events throughout the day? She continued. A smug smile appeared across his face as Issei decided to channel a bit of Zelretch. Well, there was this one person who seemed really odd. Rias smiled happily as she continued the interrogation. Good, Hayato-san, now I need you to describe her. Issei nodded. Okay, first it was a woman, seemed about high school age or maybe older by a couple of years. That matches what we have so far. Now, did she have black hair and was she wearing a school uniform of some kind? She replied with a frown. Well, she did have a school uniform on, but I'm afraid that the woman didn't have black hair, he answered. Rias seemed slightly shocked at his response, but the look disappeared quickly as she collected herself. I see. Hiaudhausen, could you please describe this woman to me? Issei's grin just widened. Okay, she had a buxom figure, blue-green eyes, and bright crimson hair. In fact, if you want, I could give you her name right now. Ria's eyes just narrowed as she glared at him. Issei, Hiaudhausen, this is serious, and I don't appreciate these jokes. Issei, she came all the way here by herself. The least we can do is take her seriously, scolded his father. The teen just sighed as he nodded. Sorry, Gremorison, I've just had a very trying day today. Your date didn't go so well, guessed his father, causing Ria's eyes to widen in recognition. That's one way to put it, laughed Issei. Issei, Hiaudhausen, does the name Yuma Mono mean anything to you? Questioned Rias with a suspicious gaze. Interesting, so she does know about Rainier. Now the question becomes, how does she know about her? As good as the Occult Research Club is, I doubt they were able to immediately identify her as part of the supernatural, he thought. Hey Issei, wasn't you matching the name of that girl you were dating? Questioned his now drunk father. His son just sighed as he realized that he couldn't deny that now and nodded, drawing a triumphant smile from Rias. Yeah, I know her. Why do you ask? He replied. Instead of responding, Rias just turned to look at his father. Mr. Hiaudhausen, you're looking really tired. I think you should go to bed now. Issei watched as his father's eyes glazed over slight before he shook his head and turned to his son. Issei, I'm going to go to bed. Remember to lock up before you go to sleep. The teen nodded and watched as his father left the room before turning to glare at Rias as he pulled the Lancer card out of the card holder. You have 10 seconds to explain what you just did before I stab you in the heart. I never picked you to be the violent type, Hiaudhausen, frowned Rias. Only when my family is involved, Gremorison. I already lost my mother and I'm not losing him as well, growled Issei. I understand, believe me, I feel the same about my peerage, and I swear to you on the name of Gremory that I only used a bit of hypnosis so we could talk, nothing more, promised Rias, and after looking her in the eyes, Issei was surprised to find he believed her. You mentioned a peerage, that must mean you are a devil, commented the teen. You know about us? Questioned Rias in surprise. The fallen angels mentioned you briefly during our fight, lied Issei, remembering to keep Zelretch a secret. You fought off multiple fallen angels by yourself. Your sacred gear must be incredible, exclaimed the devil. I didn't do that well. In fact, I nearly died and was covered in wounds after the fight, replied the teen, rubbing the back of his head with a smile on his face. Hiaudhausen, most humans wouldn't be able to stand up to a single fallen angel, let alone fight off multiple, lectured Rias, excitedly. Just call me Issei, I prefer it, he said as he smiled at Rias before offering a hand. Seeing this, the devil just flushed and shook his hand with her own smile. Then please call me Rias. Issei just frowned in concern before he placed a hand on her forehead and causing her face to become the same shade as her hair. You don't seem to have a temperature, but then again you are a devil, so who knows what's normal for you. Twam, fine, she stuttered before regaining her composure. Issei, your sacred gear, could you show it to me? Issei frowned as he debated the pros and cons of each choice. After all, he could easily say that Gibalg was his sacred gear, but there was a chance she would recognize the spear. Still, those fallen angels didn't recognize it until I said its name. Maybe this world's Gibalg looks different. I suppose now is as good a time to check as any, he thought, before sighing as he held up the glowing card. Include Lancer, he whispered, and the card transformed into Gibalg, causing Ria's excitement to grow as she examined the spear. Can I hold it? She requested, cautiously. He just nodded before handing the spear over to her, and the devil stared at it with a confused expression. Is something wrong? He asked. No, it just isn't what I expected you to have. I can't detect any sigh of a dragon residing in the spear. In fact, I don't recognize this sacred gear at all, she replied with a frown. Issei quickly filled this information away before speaking up. Is that really such a big surprise? I'm sure you haven't memorized every sacred gear in existence. Rias nodded before handing Gibalg back to him. True, but that spear doesn't feel like a sacred gear but something else entirely. Can you tell me what its name is? He grinned, having already thought up a name. It's called Akashi, he lied. Red Death, how unimaginative, and yet from the lust it gives off, surprisingly appropriate, frowned Rias. Still, I can't remember ever hearing about this sacred gear before. Maybe I'm the first wielder to ever wake it up, he suggested, remembering how Zelretch explained these sacred gears to him. I suppose that is possible, but still, with how long sacred gears have been in existence, I find it hard to believe that this one has never been activated until now, responded Rias with a thoughtful expression. In the words of a great detective, when you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth, quoted Issei with a smile. A similar smile spread across Ria's face. Why, of course it's elementary, my dear Watson. Oh please, if anything I'm Sherlock and you're Watson, he scoffed with fake indignation. The two just glared at each other before Rias starting giggling. I can't remember the last time I spoke to someone like this. Why, you some important person among the devils or something? Asked Issei, eagerly pouncing on this new information. It doesn't matter. Tell me, Issei, what do you know about peerages? Replied Rias quickly. Issei's eyes narrowed at the obvious and sudden change of topics before he shrugged. Only the very basics. A devil revives another as one of their own, but in return they become that devil's slave. So before you ask, no, I will not join your peerage, Rias. While I'll admit that some of my kind are questionable masters, I assure you that we of the Gremory clan are nothing of the sort. We treat our peerage members like they were family, she argued, trying to convince him. Be that as it may, I'm still going to have to refuse you, Rias. I like being human, and I'm not ever going to give up my freedom if I can help it, he replied, sternly. The red-headed devil just looked down at the desk with a depressed expression on her face before she sighed. I see, that's a shame. I would have liked having someone like you in my peerage. I'm sure you'll find a better fighter than me willing to join your peerage, Rias, encouraged Issei as he placed a hand on her shoulder. Rias just looked up at him with a sad smile. I don't want you for your combat skills, Issei. I want you for your nature. Did you know you are one of the first people to causally call me by my name like this in years, even with my own peerage? It's always but you to them. Issei looked at her in surprise while Ria's eyes widened as she realized what she had just said and immediately stood up before heading to the door, only to be stopped by Issei grasping her shoulder. Spinning around, she saw him giving her another warm smile that made her face heat up. Rias, just because I won't join your peerage doesn't we can't be friends. In fact, why don't I join the orc? I was always fascinated by the supernatural. A happy smile spread across her face as she replied, Issei, how do I, Rias Gremory, accept you into the Occult Research Club. I'll send someone to collect you after class tomorrow, so be ready, okay? Looking forward to it, Rias. He waved to her and watched as she seemed to almost skip away from his house before shutting the door behind. Occult Research Club, huh? Looks like tomorrow's going to be an interesting day, he mused and headed up to bed, letting his exhausted body finally get the rest it deserved. The man's life was a heroic and yet sad tale, he who was destined to become the shield of Ulster, and yet for all his strength he could not protect those he held dear. A man that seemed to be a harbinger of misfortune, who fought against it every step of the way as he forged his legend and strived to be the strongest. He got his wish only to find it short-lived and bittersweet. His life started out in the oddest of circumstances, born of a deity. An immortal, the boy's upbringing was nothing like his noble heritage. His mother refusing to marry and instead fleeing into the land of the young to raise the child with what few loyal friends and family she had left. There she gave birth to the child of the sun god, and thus the boy named Scathach was born into the evergreen land of Harem. Scathach immediately showed superior talent and supernatural abilities from birth that quickly isolated him from his peers. Eventually moving to the northern kingdom of Ulster with his uncle, the boy joined the king's army in order to get stronger. It was here that he suffered the first of what would be a long string of bad luck, which would eventually spell his doom. As the boy began to distinguish himself in the king's army, it drew the attention of the monarch himself, whom invited him to meet a friend, the master blacksmith Cuchulainn. However, Scathach was in the middle of a competition with his friends, and his pride and desire to get stronger refused to let him simply forfeit the match. Instead, the boy boldly told the king to go on without him and that he would catch up after he won. The king just laughed and agreed as he walked off to the house with Scathach following once the competition was over. However, misfortune struck when a servant shut the gates of the blacksmith's house before he arrived, and the boy found himself under attack by Cuchulainn's savage dog, a monster known to have the strength of 10 men. Unarmed and alone, it seemed to be the end of Scathach, but the boy defied fate and instead strangled the guard dog with his own bare hands. A crowd gathered and stared at the boy in astonishment, who was standing over his dead opponent. Once Scathach saw the sadness in the eyes of the blacksmith, whom was staring at the body of his loyal companion, he felt a twinge of guilt. As repayment, he asked, "Does this dog have children? If he does, could you allow me to take care of them? I will raise them to be guard dogs just as strong as their father. Until then, I will be your guard dog." However, Cuchulainn just smiled appreciatively and shook his head, stating that he would be the one to train the dogs that protected his manor. The old blacksmith then stared at Scathach before replying that the boy himself should get stronger instead, as he would soon become the guard dog of all of Ulster. And so the boy was soon known by another name, Cuchulainn's savage dog, or Cuchulainn. The boy then returned to his training to be a knight and was sent to a druid to prepare for his rites of warriorhood, ignoring the prediction that none in the group would become famous warriors. After his rites, the druid then turned to look at Cuchulainn with a sad frown and said, "In exchange for glorious deeds of valor, your life will be short." Cuchulainn just smiled. Completing his rites, the boy was then accepted as a knight of the Red Branch, much to the anger of the king, who was shocked that this 13-year-old was made into a knight. Once again, misfortune struck as Cuchulainn and his king erupted into an argument and ending in a demonstration of the boy's strength, earning the ire of the king. Having his authority severely limited, Cuchulainn began searching for strong opponents when he came across the most beautiful of women named Amur. In order to prove himself to his newfound love, he traveled to the land of shadows and sought out the sorcerer named Scathach. Upon finding the sorcerer and training under her, Cuchulainn met the warrior that he would one day consider his older brother, perverted. Together the three of them grew close, but after completing his training and mastering the demonic spear Gibal, Cuchulainn and perverted left for their respective countries. Before he left, Cuchulainn told Scathach that should she bear his son, then to name him Cuchulainn and to send him to Ulster. However, what should have been a happy and momentous occasion turned dark as Cuchulainn unknowingly spelled the doom of his son. The father gave Cuchulainn 3 vows he had to follow: to not answer his name when asked, to not change course, and to not back down from a fight. Cuchulainn and Ferdiad parted ways shortly after the two left Scathach, as they both realized that they wouldn't persuade the other to abandon their countries. The two brothers in all but just laughed before they began the long trip back to their homes. Upon returning to Ulster, Cuchulainn fought many battles for his country and quickly became renowned throughout all of Erin, and even married his childhood love Emer. However, his short-lived happy youth soon came to a crashing end as he was once again called to defend his country. Fighting off the invading army almost single-handedly, Cuchulainn was forced to watch as the Red Branch trainees protecting him were slaughtered to the last man. Unfortunately for him, this drew the attention of the goddess Morrigan, who offered him protection, but he refused, believing that he needed this to get stronger. Angered by this insult, the goddess herself began to attack, only to find Cuchulainn able to fend off every one of her blows and even treat her wounds afterwards. Admiring his noble heart, the goddess left with a faint blush on her cheeks. However, the fates were not done torturing the man, and he suffered through the worst hell imaginable as he fought, coming face to face with his friend Ferdiad. He didn't want to fight the man he considered his brother, but their orders were absolute, their honor forcing them to put aside their close friendship as they sought to kill each other. The two were evenly matched, and so for the first time Cuchulainn was forced to use Gibald on the man he called brother. As he lay his brother to rest and they said their final farewells, Cuchulainn only sighed as he looked at his pride and joy Gibald, now dripping with Ferdiad's. The enemies, upon seeing this, were finally routed and Ulster was safe once more, yet for Cuchulainn it was a bittersweet victory. His misfortune didn't end there, however, as soon after the war reports came of a young man causing problems near the coast and beating any warrior that dared approach him. Therefore, the king commanded Cuchulainn to face him, much to the horror of Emer, who tried to convince him otherwise. However, his loyalty and honor could not let him disobey a direct order from his king, and so Cuchulainn traveled to this man and fought him to the death. Once again, finding himself evenly matched, Cuchulainn was forced to use Gibald and pierced the heart of this young man. As the man looked at the spear in shock, he turned to Cuchulainn and murmured, "She didn't teach me that." Once again, the spear was used, and once again, it took a life. And so Cuchulainn died by his own father's hands. Twice was Gibald called, and twice it claimed the life of Cuchulainn's loved ones. His misfortune seemed never-ending as Ulster was again invaded, and Cuchulainn was forced to break his many vows that he made over the years to defend it. Suffering curse after curse as the gods exacted their punishments for those broken vows, he suffered through thousands of traps, horrible injuries, and yet still continued fighting furiously for his homeland. Eventually being impaled by his own spear, the shield of Ulster refused to die, laying down and struggled to his feet with a smile on his face as he passed on to the afterlife. Unfortunately, not even death would be the end of this hero's misfortune. Summoned for a war he had no interest in other than fighting strong opponents, he was denied this one wish as he watched his master get killed and replaced by a dishonorable coward, forced to only watch as these incredible fighters pitted themselves against each other. Still, despite of all this, Cuchulainn never regretted his lot in life, knowing that a hero shouldn't need to rely on luck to excel, and that he became one with his own power. Even if Gibald, the symbol of his legend, the symbol of his heroism, was forever stained with the of his loved ones. Indeed, despite his misfortune, Cuchulainn bore it all with a smile, just as any true hero should, believing that one day his luck would change and the symbol of his pride, the symbol of his legend, Gibald, would be remembered fondly with a smile and not with sadness. That it would break the cruel fate surrounding it and would be used to protect loved ones instead of reaping them. It would just be a shame that he would not be the one to do so, that he would not live to see this future unfold, but even still he believed in it. But now it was time to pass the torch on to the next generation. After all, no hero lives forever. May Gibald serve its next wielder better than it served me. Become strong and fight well, Issei Hayadu, for you now carry with you the hope and pride of Cuchulainn. Issei woke in a cold sweat as he jumped out of his bed and fell to the floor in a panic. Groaning, the teen picked himself up from the ground. Before glancing at the class cards spread out across his nightstand, picking up the Lancer card, he stared at it before calling out Gibald and just examined the red lance with a cautious look on his face. What was that, he muttered, thinking about the near lifelike dream he had just woken up from with a start. Was that Cuchulainn's memories? Was that what happened to him if he continued down his path to become stronger? No, he couldn't. He wouldn't hurt those he cared for like that, would he? As a worried panic began to fill his mind, the teen suddenly felt a small pressure on his shoulder. Spinning around with Gibald at the ready, he found no one there except his own reflection in the mirror staring back at him. As he looked into the mirror, Issei was shocked as he saw the panicked expression on his face. However, the expression quickly died as he felt an oddly calming pressure coming from Gibald, allowing his thoughts to slowly return to normal. That's right, I already decided, didn't I would become strong to protect my family and my friends. No matter what fate throws at me, I will get stronger. There is no way I would ever hurt them like that, is there? He laughed as he put the memories of the dream to the back of his mind. As he dismissed Gibald, Issei felt the pressure return on his shoulder, and as he looked back up to the mirror he had to do a double take. It might have been a trick of the eye, nothing more than his imagination, but for a brief moment he could have sworn he saw a familiar blue-clad man nodding his head approvingly as he placed a hand on Issei's shoulder before disappearing. Issei wasn't sure how long he just stood completely still and stared there at his mirror, his brain struggling to comprehend what it just saw. It wasn't until his alarm clock started beeping that the teen woke from his trance and quickly glanced at the time, the color draining from his face as he did so. Not again, he cried in distress as the teen rushed to get changed and grab his cards before bolting out the door, once again nearly knocking his dad over in the process. However, in his mad rush to get ready for school, Issei didn't notice what appeared to be a large black crow that had been observing him outside his window since he woke up. Its eyes displaying an unnatural intelligence for a simple animal, and if anything, it looked surprised at the sight of Gibalg. As Issei rushed towards school, the crow watched him go before flying after him, making sure to keep the teen in sight. The crow just watched as the teen was scolded by a devil for being late before he went about the rest of his day, oblivious to the new observer he had. Issei sighed as walked into his class and tried to ignore the numerous glares sent to him by the girls already in the classroom, and curiously twin death stares sent by the perverted duo. Sighing and deciding to just deal with it later, the teen made his way over to his desk, only to be ambushed before he could reach it. "Issei, hi out you bastard," shouted an angry voice as the teen in question sidestepped, tackling Matsuda. "Matsuda-san, what are you doing?" frowned Issei in confusion. "Getting payback," replied the pervert. "For what?" asked the teen. "You know what you did, Hayatu," growled Madohama as he rushed over to his friend's side and helped him up off the ground. Issei just continued to stare at them in confusion as he thought back to the past couple of days, trying to remember if he did anything to offend them. However, he couldn't think of anything. In fact, he was the only one in the class who gave them any sort of respect, actually willing to hold up a conversation with the duo rather than beating them up or simply ignoring them. Madohama-san, I'm sorry for whatever I did to insult the two of you. It wasn't my intention, but can you at least tell me what I did?" he replied, diplomatically. "You've got a girlfriend before us," they both shrieked, causing Issei to blink in confusion. "Girlfriend, what are you talking about?" he repeated. "Don't play dumb with us, Hayatu. We saw you last Friday talking to that pretty girl outside the school gate. You even got her to ask you out. How did you do it, damn it?" cried Matsuda as anime tears began pouring down his face. "Last Friday, so they saw me with Rainier, did they? Well, that shouldn't be a problem. They're idiots anyway," he thought as his eyes widened in recognition before the teen shrugged. "She's not my girlfriend. That date was a one-time thing only. Turns out we just weren't very compatible with each other. Still, that just means she is free for you two now, right? Just let me know if you see her and I'll hook you up," smiled Issei as the two perverts' eyes lit up in happiness. After all, forcing Rainier to deal with these two should be appropriate punishment for that fallen angel, their less good rival Azazel himself, he thought jokingly. The two perverts just stared at him in shock before they ran over and hugged as they cried into his shoulder, drawing the attention of the rest class. "Hayatu-san, I take back every bad thing I ever said about you," cried Madohama as he rapidly began shaking Issei's hand in joy. "Hayatu-san, you truly are a saint to take pity on us humble followers of Oppai," praised Matsuda as he got on his knees and began bowing. "All right, you two, cut it out. You're making a scene," replied Issei as he saw the class began staring at him before whispering to each other. "I knew he was a pervert. Why else would he talk to those two?" whispered one of his classmates, causing Issei to sigh as the two perverts calmed down. Noticing the glares from the girls hadn't abated, he frowned and turned to his two new followers. "I don't suppose you know why the girls in this school are trying to burn a hole in my head?" he questioned them. The two just glanced at each other before Madohama replied, "It probably has something to do with the rumors spreading about you." "What rumors?" frowned Issei. "Well, there is a rumor going around that you're madly in love with the damned pretty boy Uedo-Kiba," informed Matsuda, and making the teen begin coughing up a lung. What, that's ridiculous," he choked out. "Well, the rumor said that last Friday you couldn't contain it anymore and so you tackled him to the ground in order to deal with your Yule longings. Apparently it was only thanks to the Kiba protection squad that you didn't take his ID," explained Madohama. "That's not what happened," shouted Issei, drawing the attention of the class. "So you didn't tackle him to the ground?" questioned Matsuda. "Well, technically I did ... but it was a complete accident, I swear," admitted the teen, only to groan as the intensity of the glares increased tenfold. Issei just sighed as he sat down into his chair, silently lamenting his damned Lancer luck while waiting for Rias to send someone to collect him. Still, at least this should blow over soon. After all, everyone should forget about these rumors after a day or two, he thought optimistically. Issei should have remembered that tempting fate was a bad idea. Hearing the door open, the teen looked up and his face blanched as he saw none other than the Prince of Kyo Academy, Uedo-Kiba himself, walk in and approach him. No, please, anyone but him, I beg you, God," prayed Issei in his head. Issei really should have remembered that God is dead. "Excuse me, Issei-kun, are you ready to go? We have a very limited time together and I just can't wait to get to know you better," grinned Kiba. "Why would you phrase it like that?" groaned Issei as he heard the mutterings increase in volume before getting up and following Kiba out. "No, our sweet Kiba-kun, our prince has been corrupted. Damn you, Hayatu, you'll pay for this," screamed the girls as they glared at him with enough killing intent to rival Gibalg. The two were silent as they headed into the old school building until Issei glared at his companion. "You know there is such a thing as tact. You might want to try it sometime." Kiba just gave him that irritating smile as he replied, "Whatever do you mean, Issei-kun?" "He knows exactly what I mean," realized Issei with a frown. "You know this will affect you as well as me, right? How will the great Prince of Kyo react without his group of followers fawning over him?" he growled. Kiba just kept smiling as he approached Issei. "That doesn't matter as long as we can be together, Issei-kun." Issei backed up as alarm bells began ringing in his head. Whoa, back up there, pretty boy. I don't swing that way. Kiba just laughed as he turned around and continued walking. My apologies, Issei-kun, but I couldn't resist a bit of teasing. Rest assured the rumor mill will die down quickly. After all, I'm sure they have better things to talk about. I think you underestimate the imagination and devotion of your fans, Kiba-san. Believe me, this will not blow over quickly, sighed Issei as he followed his companion from a safe distance. This is it, announced Kiba as the two of them stopped before a wooden door and began knocking. But you were back and I've brought Hayao-san. Come in, replied Ria's voice from the other side of the door. The two of them walked in and Issei saw Ria smiling as she sat on behind her desk while the rest of the occult research club were scattered across the room. Seeing the redhead gesturing for him to have a seat, Issei sat down on the couch across from the table, making sure to keep all the room's occupants within his view. He might trust Rias, but still it was better to be safe than sorry. Thanks for coming, Issei, greeted Rias happily. Thanks for having me, Rias, he replied. Ara, already referring to each other so causally. You're a fast worker, aren't you? But you, grinned the black-haired girl next to the redhead. Akino, it isn't like that, cried a red-faced Rias. Coughing, the devil then turned back to Issei as she began to introduce her peerage. This is my queen, Akino Hanjima. The girl in question just gave Issei a smile that sent shivers down his spine before Rias then pointed to the white-haired girl that was currently gorging herself on snacks in the corner. Kaneko Taoju, my rook, introduced Rias as Kaneko simply gave him a suspicious glare. My sweets, she warned with an almost cat-like growl and held the box of food closer to her chest. Ignoring her rook's behavior, Rias then moved on to the pretty boy leaning on the corner of the room, and lastly we have Yuuro Kiba, my knight. Looking forward to working with you, Hayao-san, smiled Kiba, grateful to no longer be the sole male in the club. That's what I'm afraid of, muttered Issei quietly before standing up and introducing himself. My name's Issei Hayao, but just call me Issei. I may not be a devil, but I'm looking forward to working with you. So you're the one that fought off those fallen. I do hope you made them suffer, grinned Akino, again sending shivers down his spine. It's impressive that you were able to fight them off, but you told me your sacred gear was demonic in origin. If so, would you mind showing me, requested Kiba. Why, replied the teen with a frown. Kiba here is more knowledgeable on demonic sacred gears than I am due to his own sacred gear, Sword Birth. He might be able to recognize it, explained Rias. Issei just shrugged before he took out the Lancer card and prepared to summon Gibalg. Include Lancer, Akashi, he shouted, feeling smart for adding the fake name. There was a brief flash of light before Gibalg appeared in his hands, and Issei smiled at the knight's confused expression as he handed Kiba the spear. The knight examined it for a minute before he sighed and handed the spear back to Issei with a defeated expression that made the teen's spirits lift. Sorry but you, Issei, but I don't recognize that spear. It is definitely a demonic weapon, but I've never felt anything quite like it before, he sighed as he reported to Rias. Could it require special substances to activate? That could be why we've never heard of it being used before, proposed Rias as she stared at the knight, whom just shrugged. Possible but unlikely. I've yet to hear of a demonic sacred gear that couldn't be awoken in the usual way, replied the knight with a frown. What do you mean usual way? Questioned Issei, storing this knowledge for later. Rias just turned to face him with a confused frown. Most sacred gears are actually relatively easy to awaken if you're determined enough. It's all about your mental state. The best method is to picture the strongest thing you can imagine, and usually they are awoken. But this wasn't the case with mine, concluded Issei, and getting a nod from Rias. Indeed, so you can understand our confusion about Akashi, replied Rias with a sigh as she began rubbing her temples. Eventually seeming to snap out of her stupor, Rias stood up from the chair. Well, I think that's it for today. Really, that's all? Questioned Issei, surprised. Today was merely an introduction. Tomorrow we will be doing actual work, replied Rias, only to be stopped by Kiba. Actually, but you, if you don't mind, I'd like to challenge Issei-kun to a duel, he announced, shocking every present. I have no problem with that. After all, I still need to get payback for what you did in the classroom, smirked Issei. Rias just looked between the two boys who were staring at each other with excited expressions and sighed. Very well, I'll prepare the barrier. Mittal sighed as she flew over the city, loving the feeling of the wind rushing against on her skin and through her feathers. There were times when it really did pay to be a fallen angel, and these flights of hers was one of them. Her mood soured, however, as she remembered why she had left the abandoned church in the first place, growling at the memory of Calawarner and Rainier mocking her childlike form. It wasn't her fault, damn it, didn't make it any better that her two colleagues had begun treating her like some child once they saw the humans doing the same. I swear I'm going to kill that Freed, this is all his fault, she grumbled, angrily. The fallen angel just sighed as she began to head back to their base. Rainier wanted them all to stay there until that idiot nun showed up. Apparently she had been scared by the humans she was supposed to kill, but instead returned beaten and bleeding with one less member of their group. Mittal frowned as she remembered the nonsense her leader had been spouting. Honestly, Rainier had probably been hallucinating from loss. Turning, the fallen angel began heading back towards the church when she felt a barrier forming around the Devil's School building. What are those devils up to? She muttered and briefly debated her options. She could leave and not worry about it. It was the less risky option, but at the same time this was the perfect chance to get some intel on them. Plus, if she succeeded, then Rainier and Calawarner would have eat their own words about her being a useless waste of space. With her decision being made, the fallen angel quietly approached the school building and headed towards where she heard the sound of clashing metal coming from the courtyard. Hiding in the nearby tree line, Mittelt was greeted to the sight of the Devil's Knight and the human boy fighting each other ferociously. The fallen angel could barely track the two as they became a blur of movement. In fact, she was so focused on the fight that Mittelt nearly jumped as she saw something move above her. Slowly looking up, the fallen angel relaxed as she just saw a lone crow staring at her before it began preening its feathers. Breathing a sigh of relief, Mittelt returned her attention back to the fight, not noticing the crow stop preening itself and doing the same. "How will decided the winner?" asked Issei. How about by first or until one of us is unable to continue," replied Kiba, getting a nod from Issei. "Ready, Issei-kun?" inquired the knight as the two stood facing each other on opposite ends of the courtyard behind the old school building. "Are you?" taunted Issei as he gripped Gibalg with both hands. Rias, along with the two other members of her peerage, were standing off to the sidelines and watched with concerned yet eager expressions on their faces. Issei just frowned as he saw Kiba summon a sword from nowhere and thought back to what Zelretch had told him about peerages. He's got a knight piece, so that means that he's the equivalent of the lancer and rider class for the peerage system. This was both a blessing and a curse, since Issei was confident that, even without the full benefits of the Lancer class on him, that he would be able to keep up with the Devil's speed, but by the same token there was no way he was going to outspeed his opponent. Which meant this was going to come down to an endurance contest to see who could outlast the other, putting Issei at an immense disadvantage with his human heritage. After all, that fight with those two fallen angels had left him exhausted, and Issei had a nagging feeling that his new opponent was an even better fighter than those two combined. Suddenly, the Knight of Gremory rushed towards Issei and sent a quick overhead slash that was blocked by the of Gibalg. Kiba then leapt backwards, using Issei himself as a springboard as he dodged the blunt end of the spear, swinging it where his stomach had been moments before. As the knight regained his distance, he gave Issei an approving nod as a smile crossed the blonde's face, while Issei returned the gesture before beginning his own charge. Kiba quickly turned his body in a half-turn as the red lance pierced where his chest had been earlier and retaliated by sending in his own demonic blade towards Issei's neck. Seeing this, Issei quickly ducked under the swing and backed up a couple of steps before once again lunging towards the knight with pointed at the blonde's chest. Kiba just brought up his sword and deflected the lance to the side before taking advantage of the opening as Issei overextended. Seeing the knight's demonic blade rapidly approaching, Issei removed a hand from Gibalg and with reflexes that surprised even himself grabbed Kiba's wrist and halted the sword's descent. However, instead of trying to remove Issei's hand, Kiba just grinned as he pulled Issei closer and summoned a second sword into his free hand. Realizing what was about to happen, Issei used his other hand to swing Gibalg towards the knight's feet, attempting to trip him over. In a testament of his skill, Kiba's eyes widened as he felt the of the spear hit his legs, and in a matter of seconds the knight dismissed his second sword before using his now free hand to steady himself as he jumped over the spear. Unfortunately for the knight, Issei still had his other arm locked in a vice grip, and the teen used this to hold Kiba in place as he thrusted Gibalg at his chest. Unable to dodge, Kiba instead used his knight piece reflexes to send a palm strike into the of the spear, deflecting the incoming lance towards Issei's own arm. Growling in frustration, Issei was forced to relinquish his hold on the blonde knight, and Kiba immediately used this to go on the offensive. Unable to react in time, Issei's eyes widened as Kiba entered extremely close range, putting the teen at a disadvantage as the lance's reach was not only rendered useless but became a hindrance as well. Knowing this, the knight pressed his advantage as his assault became more aggressive, and Issei was beginning to feel himself growing tired as he dodged and blocked every blow that Kiba sent his way, waiting for the blonde devil to make an opening. In contrast, the only sign of strain on Kiba was the small drops of sweat that were rolling down his face in small but increasing amounts. Finally, the teen's patience was rewarded as Kiba overextended in his attempt to overwhelm Issei with his knight piece's speed. As his sword rapidly approached Issei in a downward slash, the teen grinned as he intercepted it with the of Gibalg, only to find the sword refusing to shatter like the light spears of the two fallen angels. This locked the two in a contest of strength, as each knew that to break away from this deadlock would create an opening, and so the demonic sword created from a sacred gear meet the demonic noble phantasm Gibalg. As the demonic weapons clashed, the ground beneath the two fighters began to crack from the increasing pressure. The three observers could only watch in amazement as what should have been a quick match in Kiba's favor turned into a stalemate. Growling as he struggled to push back Kiba, Issei realized this deadlock couldn't go on much longer or it would cost him the match. Sighing, the teen pulled away from the stalemate and caused Kiba to quickly slash at his back, forcing Issei dive to the ground to dodge. Seeing his compromising position, Kiba charged the down form of his opponent, only for Issei to grin as instead of blocking the strike he spun Gibalg in front of him and showcased his own skill by hitting the knight's wrist with the blunt end of the spear. Crying out in pain, Kiba dropped his sword but didn't have time to recover from the blow as Issei attacked the disarmed knight relentlessly, not giving him time to summon another sword. Kiba's knight reflexes and advanced skill were the only things keeping him in the game at this point, proving that even if they were unarmed, Issei couldn't take a devil lightly. Deciding he'd had enough, Kiba rushed at Issei with a speed the human could barely track and faster than anything Issei had seen before. All he could see was the image of Kiba blur before he saw a fist approaching his face and was sent skidding across the ground. Rubbing his head and groaning in pain from a massive headache, Issei swayed to his feet and stared at Kiba, who had already summoned another sword with a slightly different design to the first. "Surprise, don't worry, not many humans can keep up with a devil knight when they get serious," explained the blonde devil. "So you're finally getting serious, are you?" replied Issei with heavy breaths. "Hey Issei-kun, do you know what my Sacred Gears ability is?" asked Kiba with a smile. "You can summon those swords of yours whenever you want," replied Issei as he tried to recover his strength. "Close, but not exactly right. Sword Birth lets me make any demonic sword I want, for instance one that would shock its victims with enough electricity to rival a stun gun. Not very useful against devils or other supernatural creatures, but against humans it is surprisingly effective," commented Kiba as the sword he held suddenly came alive with electricity. Issei's face blanched as he realized the implications of that sword. It didn't matter if he blocked it or not, the electricity would still travel down the weapon and shock him anyway. Which meant his only chance to win this now was to not get hit by that sword even once, near impossible with Kiba's newly increased speed. The team's inner strategy meeting was cut short as the image of Kiba began to blur and Issei immediately dodged to the side before stabbing Gibalg just behind where he had been standing. If Kiba was surprised by the lance suddenly thrusting towards him, he didn't show it and instead bended backwards as the spear passed just above his head. Recovering quickly, the knight grabbed Gibalg's and brought the spear up to meet his electrified demonic sword. Eyes widening, Issei had no choice but to let go the spear entirely as it became charged with electricity. Kiba just threw the spear to the opposite end of the courtyard where it stuck into the ground and walked over to where Issei was standing. "Do you wish to yield, Issei-kun?" asked the knight. "No way, it's no longer just my pride and honor alone on the line anymore, Kiba. Someone told me to fight well and get strong, and I can't do that if I just give up whenever things get tough," replied Issei. Their three observers just stared at him like he was mad, while Kiba himself just had a surprised look on his face before he nodded and understand. "Very true, forgive me for insulting you, Issei-kun. Shall we finish this?" "If you think you can," smirked Issei. Kiba just smiled before his image began to blur again, and this time Issei grinned as he sent out a punch to the space beside him and was rewarded with the shocked face of the blonde knight. If anyone had taken the time to look at Issei's fist, they would have seen, for the briefest moment, what appeared to be a green glowing gem embedded in it as it hit Kiba's stomach. Much to the shock of everyone, including Issei himself, the blonde devil was sent flying across the courtyard from the force of the punch. Issei immediately used this to his advantage as he rushed over to Gibalg and brought the spear up just in time to smash Kiba in the gut with the blunt end of the lance. The knight staggered slightly before he dived to the ground and quickly rolled to his feet as the red lance pierced the spot he had just vacated. "What was that you said, Kiba? Only a few humans can keep up with a devil knight. Well, it looks like I'm one of them," smiled Issei as he twirled the spear back into a ready position. "Indeed, it appears I underestimated you, Issei-kun," laughed Kiba eagerly as he brought his electrified demonic sword back up to its own stance. Issei and Kiba just both charged each other with their demonic weapons, and the three observers were shocked as the two combatants became a blur of movement that even their eyes struggled to track, kicking up dust in the process that further obscured the pair. Eventually the dust settled and Rias was shocked to see Gibalg pressed against Kiba's chest, directly where his heart would be, while Kiba's sword was hovering against Issei's neck. "It would appear to be a draw, Issei-kun," commented Kiba with a smile as he removed the sword from the teen's neck. "Apparently so," replied Issei, doing the same as he dismissed Gibalg and pocketed the card. "That was incredible, Issei-kun. Who taught you to use a spear like that?" questioned Kiba. Actually no one did. I'm self-taught," replied Issei truthfully, and grinned at Kiba's shocked expression. "I see, and how long have you been practicing for?" continued the knight curiously. "A little while," lied Issei as he yawned and approached the three observers, not seeing Kiba's suspicious glance at him as he followed. "Rias, I'm beat. If you don't mind, I'm going to head home," informed the teen. The devil broke out of her shocked stupor and simply nodded. "Of course, Issei. Remember to come to the clubroom during break period, okay?" "Sure thing, Rias," he replied and left the courtyard, leaving the devils to silently comprehend what they just saw. The crow just silently watched the events from its perch in the tree before flying away, easily avoiding the devil's defenses and laughing at the foolish fallen angel attempting to spy on the group. It had seen what it wanted to see, and now it had to report on these new events. That style of fighting was definitely the same as his. Granted, it was a weaker version of it, but still, how did that boy mimic it to such a degree? And that spear, there was no doubt that it was his spear. But that was impossible. His spear was currently being hidden back in the other world at this very moment with her colleagues, yet at the same time it was here in the domain of the Shinto faction. The others would not be pleased to hear about this, especially Lug. The crow sighed as it continued flying until it was out of sight, where there was a flash of light and the bird vanished. "He's hiding something," accused Kiba with a frown once they were sure Issei had gone. "What do you mean?" Kiba asked Rias seriously. The knight just frowned. "But there is no way that someone can become that skilled with a spear by being self-taught. Even if they had years to practice, there would still be flaws in their technique, and yet the skill Issei-kun displayed was at the very least at a master level. Next, keep in mind that he only awoke his sacred gear yesterday. Even a master fighter would take weeks to become accustomed to a new weapon like that, and yet he wields it like he has had it for years. It just doesn't add up, continued Kiba. I see, frowned Rias before she turned to Aquino. How did the search go? Aquino just shook her head. I did what you told me last night, but I couldn't find any record of a sacred gear by the name of Akashi. I even requested the help of the student council, but they couldn't find anything either. If Sona can't find anything on it, then it is a lost cause, sighed Rias as she began rubbing her temples in frustration. That's assuming Akashi really is his sacred gear, replied Kiba as his frown deepened. There was silence as the rest turned to face the night. Kiba, there is nothing else it could be. Issei-kun is clearly no magician or exorcist, replied Aquino with a confused frown. Kiba, please explain, ordered Rias. The blonde devil nodded. But I've seen many demonic sacred gears, and in the brief time I held the spear I can tell you that it is nothing like them. It felt different. In fact, if I was to try and compare it, I would say it's more like the true demon swords than any sacred gear. Seeing that he had their attention, Kiba continued. Secondly, what about those cards? If one of them transforms into a demonic spear, then what about the others? What's stopping one of them from containing a holy sword for all we know? So you believe that the cards are the sacred gear and not Akashi? Questioned Rias, happy that they were apparently making progress in figuring out the mystery of Issei Hayao. Again, I think that it is a possibility, but... The knight trailed off, but prompted the redhead. Kiba just shook his head. It's nothing but you, don't worry about it. Rias frowned, but before she could speak up, the red-headed devil was interrupted by Kaneko as the young former Nekashu walked up to them with a worried frown on her normally blank face. Kaneko, what's wrong? Asked Rias in concern. Replied the white-haired girl, fearfully. Repeated the rest of them. Kaneko nodded. Issei-senpai scent changed twice, first when he summoned Akashi and later during Kiba-kun's sparring session. And you smelled? Asked Kiba worriedly. When he summoned Akashi, his scent changed to resemble that of a stained evergreen grassland, but during the spar the dragon scent briefly returned more powerful than ever, informed the former Nekashu. Our little Kohai certainly is quite the mystery, isn't he, Butchu? Giggled Aquino as she turned to Rias with an amused smile. Butchu, I really don't think this is a good idea letting him join the orc, especially after this new information. He could be an agent for the other factions. It's just too dangerous, protested Kiba. Don't worry, I had his background checked out before this. He has had no contact with any of the factions since he was a child, Rias assured her worried knight. What happened when he was a child? Asked Aquino curiously. One of his childhood friends moved to England and was trained as an exorcist by the Anglican Church. However, they lost contact with each other ever since she moved and haven't spoken since, informed Rias. If you say so, Butchu. But what happens if he finds out what your original plan was? He will definitely angry about that, replied Kiba with a frown. Rias just sighed. We'll cross that bridge if we get to a Yuudo. For now, treat him with the respect you would give to any of our peerage members. Remember, you are representing the Gremory family now, and we should make a good impression. Are we going to introduce him to Sona and her peerage? Asked Aquino. Yes, we should introduce him to the other devils. It is our duty to do so after all, replied the redhead. Aquino just tilted her head with a fake smile of confusion. Ara, you mean you're not doing it to establish your claim on him? Whatever witty remark that Rias had died unspoken as all of the devils present tensed as they felt something leaving the barrier they had set up around the school. What made it worse was the power they felt coming from the individual. It was definitely that of a fallen angel. How did we not notice it spying on us? Raged Rias. My apologies, Butchu. My fight with Issei-kun must have distracted us, replied Kiba with a depressed expression. It's not your fault, Yuudo. None of us could have known this was going to happen, comforted Rias with a sigh. The club president then turned to face the rest of her peerage. Let's head home. Unfortunately, that fallen angel is long gone and there's nothing we can do about it. Yes, Butchu, they replied unhappily. Mittal just laughed happily at the success of her spying operation. Not only did she get to see the boys and devils' fighting ability, but she even found some incredible information on both their sacred gears. The devil's sword birth would likely prove to be a problem if they were attacked, however. That human sacred gear wouldn't be a problem if the devil's theory proved to be true. Both Cuchulainn and Mittelt had been extremely surprised when Rainier had come back and immediately told them to back off their target. Apparently, that idiot thought that he was the descendant of Cuchulainn and didn't want to pick fights with the Celtic mythos. Ridiculous, what would a member of the Celts be doing in Shinto territory? Neither Cuchulainn nor Mittelt had believed their leader, but it was true that the boy had managed to kill OOC, who was the best fighter among them, and so they kept their distance. But now things were different. The boy was clearly exhausted from his fight with that devil, and if the devil boy was right, all she needed to do was steal his cards and then he would be helpless. She laughed. A tired and defenseless human. Killing him would be like taking candy from a baby. She'd have acted fast though, before he recovered his strength, and that meant there wasn't time to tell the others what she'd found. Mittal would have to do this solo. Then after she had killed him, she would prove to those two that she was not just a useless waste of space, that she was just a part of this operation as anyone else. Then they would have to acknowledge her, treat her with the respect she deserved, and not as some stupid little kid. Flying off in the direction she saw the human go down, she began plotting on how best to separate him from those cards. As a plan began to form in her mind, Mittal grinned and began searching for the boy, making sure that none of those devils had caught up or were following her. Eventually, after a couple of minutes of fruitless searching, she found him walking down a deserted street. Looking further ahead, the fallen angel saw a bunch of delinquents crowding around a streetlight. Laughing at her fortune, Mittelt descended down onto the ground behind a building before approaching the delinquents. Sometimes looking like a child did have its perks. There was a dead silence in the usually loud and boisterous halls of the large castle, hidden from the mortals in the other world. No songs were sung, no drinks were drunk, not even any fights were breaking out as they all stared at the black-clad women in shock. "Could you please repeat what you just said?" asked a large muscular man as he put down his tankard, even though everyone knew it was an order rather than a request. The black-clad woman just sighed as she repeated her earlier statement. "The source of that power we felt was Gibalg. It is currently in the possession of a teenage human whom has clearly already mastered its primary function." "Impossible, we have Gibalg currently stored and protected here," thundered the man angrily. The woman nodded. "Yes, we have our Gibalg stored here, but this Gibalg is not ours." "What are you talking about, woman? I don't have time for your word games," growled the man. She just sighed. "I don't quite understand it myself, but the Gibalg that boy uses is not ours." "So it is just a well-made fake then," stated the man as he started to calm down. "No," replied the woman with a shake of her head, once again drawing everyone's attention. "That spear the boy used was no fake, Lug. I don't know how, but they are both real, they are both Gibalg, and yet they are both different. It is maddening." "That is not possible. There cannot be two Gibalgs in existence," frowned Lug as he glared at the black-clad woman. The woman gave a smirk. "Just as it's impossible for gods to exist, or for a spear to rewrite fate itself, or for the other world to be real, Lug, you should really know by now that nothing in this world is impossible." The man just sighed before taking a swig of his ale as he began rubbing his head. "Do you remember the time when the world made sense?" reminisced Lug wistfully. "No," deadpanned the woman. "Neither do I. In fact, something tells me I'm going to need more alcohol before this conversation is over," admitted Lug with a sigh before ordering another round of drinks. The woman refused when he offered her a drink and instead just sat down in the seat opposite Lug as the rest of the drinkers slowly returned to their merrymaking. "Be honest with me, are you absolutely sure that it wasn't a fake?" asked Lug with an almost pleading gaze. "I'm sure, Lug. I've been on the receiving end of that spear before. I know what it feels like, and that lance the kid used gave off the exact same aura," she confirmed with a sigh of her own. "Great, what's next?" Excalibur reappearing, grumbled the man as he downed another drink. "Lug, there's something else," informed the woman. "Of course there is. Well, spit it out then," sighed Lug. The woman seemed to hesitate, which caused her companion to raise an eyebrow in confusion. After all the years he'd known her, she'd never had any trouble speaking what's on her mind. The fact that she would struggle here immediately snapped him out of his drunken state as he stared at her, realizing that it had to be important. "What's this?" the great Morrigan holding her tongue. "Now I know the world is ending," he joked, snapping the woman from her trance. "Oh well, you're loud enough for the both of us anyway," replied the woman with a smile. Lug just gave a bellowing laugh before his expression turned serious. "Well, I can't argue with that. But seriously, Morrigan, what's wrong?" She sighed tiredly and stared at him in the eyes. "When I first tracked down the boy, he was having what sounded like a nightmare, and do you know what he said during it?" "Ferdiad and Canla," she announced, making Lug drop his tankard in shock as ale spilled all over the table. "I see," he muttered quietly as he looked down on the table. "Not only that, but once he woke up, the boy was in a panic until for no reason at all he began to calm down, and I could have sworn I felt his presence, if only briefly. Later he sparred with a devil knight of the Gremory household, and he was using his fighting style," continued Morrigan in hushed whispers. "Have you told anyone else about this?" asked Lug. Morrigan shook her head. "No, I only told the others about the Gibalg incident. As far as they know, there is somehow a second Gibalg in existence, and it is being used by a skilled human, nothing more." "Good, keep it that way," ordered Lug, much to the shock of his companion. "I know what you're suggesting, Morrigan, but it's not possible. After all, my son isn't dead yet." A pained look crossed her face as she sighed. "Lug, he's been missing for years. I think it is time to accept the inevitable. Cuchulainn is not coming back. And you're saying this boy is his reincarnation? You know I don't believe in that crap. Just look at that so-called Heracles. The real deal would have destroyed him easily." He scoffed and downed another tankard. "What other explanation is there? How else could he have obtained that spear, known that fighting style, and more importantly known those names?" she argued heatedly and stood up from her chair. "Morrigan, stop," ordered the man with a sad look on his face. The woman looked into those eyes as she realized just how many painful memories she was forcing to the surface. "Sorry," she apologized before returning to her seat. Lug just shook his head and returned to the matter at hand with a frown. "You do raise some good points, though. We do need to find out how that boy got this knowledge," he commented as he frowned in concentration. Suddenly an amused smile crossed his face as he stared at Morrigan. "What are you planning?" asked the black-clad woman warily. "Morrigan, my dear sweet Morrigan, I need you to do me a favor," praised Lug with a grin. "I refuse," replied Morrigan immediately as she got up from the table. Her companion just frowned. "But you haven't even heard what it is yet." The woman just scoffed. "I don't care." I see. I thought you would have jumped at the chance to get closer to my son." "Oh well," sighed Lug, only to grin widely as Morrigan sat back down on her seat with a faint blush on her face. "All right, I'll bite. How does this favor of yours have anything to do with Cuchulainn?" she questioned skeptically. The jovial smile dropped from Lug's face. "This boy clearly has some form of connection to my son, and I want to know what it is." You want me to spy on him, stated Morrigan with a frown. Now, spying is such a harsh word. I prefer the term observing, smiled the man. Why ask me? There are plenty of others who can do the job better, reminded the scowling woman. True, he admitted with a nod. But as much as it pains me to admit it, you're the only one I trust right now. The only one with enough motivation to actually try and help. The others might just kill him before he becomes a threat, I understand. Cuchulainn wasn't the most popular among us, nodded Morrigan. My son did have a habit of making more enemies than he did friends, agreed Lug with a sigh. I can watch over him, but what will you tell the others? They will get suspicious at my absence. Not to mention that they might send over assassins themselves, asked Morrigan. You just leave the politics to me. Trust me, I can be very persuasive if I need to be, grinned the man happily. Morrigan just shook her head in disbelief. Who would have thought the god of the sun and the goddess of death and destruction would actually work together? Truly these are dark times, agreed Lug in a somber tone that didn't match his smiling face. The two members of the Celtic mythos gave respective laughs before sealing the deal with a handshake, and Morrigan got up from their table. The black-clad goddess frowned as walked out of the castle and transformed into a large black crow as it flew off into the distance. Then there was a flash of light that marked the goddess's departure from the other world and her return to the human world. Issei sighed as he rubbed his sore shoulders and tried to soothe his aching muscles. The teen couldn't remember the last time he had felt this exhausted. That spar with Kiba had gotten way more out of hand than he would have liked, but at least he now had a baseline for what a Devil Knight's speed was like. Assuming Kiba's speed was the average level displayed by most devils, then Issei could honestly say he was quite impressed with the peerage system. Sure, they were nowhere near the levels of the Rider or Lancer class from the Holy Grail Wars. The fact that he could keep up with them in the include state was proof of that. But unlike the Grail system, it wasn't limited to a single individual. If every normal human that was reincarnated as a knight gained that level of speed, then it was no wonder that devils were so successful. Frowning, Issei looked down on his fist as he remembered the force from his punch that sent Kiba flying, which was definitely not his natural strength, so why did it come from? While the Lancer card did increase his strength, it mostly focused on speed and agility and certainly didn't increase his strength to that extent. So what was it? Is something wrong? Asked Issei. No, it just isn't what I expected you to have. I can't detect any sign of a dragon residing in the spear. In fact, I don't recognize this sacred gear at all, informed Rias with a frown. Is that really such a big surprise? I'm sure you haven't memorized every single sacred gear in existence, replied the teen. Rias nodded. True, but that spear doesn't feel like a sacred gear but something else entirely. Issei frowned as he remembered the conversation with Rias that he'd had last night and started clenching and unclenching his fist. He had just assumed Rainier had mistaken the class cards for a sacred gear, but Rias said that Guibald didn't feel like one. Maybe Rainier wasn't mistaken. Assuming that Rias was telling the truth, then the fallen angel shouldn't have mistaken the class cards for a sacred gear, which left only one option. He had a sacred gear. That bastard Zelretch. I bet he knew all along and thought it would be funny to not tell me, growled Issei as he began heading to the troll's home. He was going to make that old man help him activate his sacred gear, and then he was going to enjoy testing it out on the damn troll. If anyone had been in the deserted street at that moment, then they would have been slightly disturbed at the excited smile that crossed Issei's face as he brought out his phone. Hey Dad, yeah, it's me. Just letting you know that I'll be home late tonight. Yeah, sorry about dinner. Why don't you just order pizza? Cool, thanks. Remember to save me a slice? Laughed Issei as he called his father. With his phone call done, then teen was about to head down the street towards Zelretch's house when he heard a female voice and turned to see a blonde little girl running towards him with tears in her eyes. Looking behind the girl, Issei's eyes widened as he saw a group of thugs chasing after her, armed with bats, chains, and other typical delinquent weapons. Upon reaching Issei, the girl hid behind him as the teen turned to face the horde of thugs that began surrounding him. You know this brat, snarled one of them. Before Issei could respond, his vision blurred and he felt a headache rack his head as strange images began appearing in his mind. The girl wearing a green dress smiled as she offered an apple to the malnourished child in front of her and her companion. Her ears cat-like ears and tail twitching as she encouraged the child to take the food. Go on, little one, take it. But I don't have anything to pay you with, replied the child, sadly. The huntress just laughed. Thou shalt not worry, little one, it's free. The child just looked at the cautiously, causing the girl's companion to sigh tiredly. Archer, we don't have time for this. We need to leave before the enemy servants find us. The green girl just glared at her companion. Haste thou no heart, rider, 'tis but a child seeking sustenance. The man just gave another sigh. I'm aware of that, Archer, but I'm just saying that our time could be spent more productively. Archer ignored her companion and instead turned back to the child as she knelt down and placed the apple on the ground before calmly stepping away from it. The child glanced between her and the apple before he slowly approached the food and grabbed it off the ground, making sure to keep them both in his gaze as the child slowly backed away. Once far enough away, the child took a bite of the apple and his eyes widened before he looked back at her with tears in his eyes. Thank you. The girl waved as the child left, watching as the child smiled happily before running off down the deserted streets. A child's life is a precious thing, Ryder. As heroes, is it not our duty to protect them? Archer frowned her companion in concern as he gripped her arm. The girl didn't respond as she just looked up at the sun setting in the sky, her mind drifting away as memories of abandonment, loneliness, and isolation in the woods began returning to her. Eventually the girl snapped out of her thoughts as her companion continued giving her a worried expression. "Archer, are you sure you're all right?" he questioned with a frown in his face. Atalanta just turned to her companion with a fierce expression. "No child shall be abandoned or be taken advantage of right or ... as I was." Blinking as the strange scene faded from his mind, Issei frowned as he stood protectively in front of the girl. "And if I do," replied Issei with an almost cat-like growl. "Then you'll suffer along with her," replied the same delinquent. "Don't let them hurt me, Oniichin," cried the girl fearfully. "You punks really are something, picking on a child like that," growled Issei, whom was surprised as he felt a reaction from both the Lancer and, oddly enough, the Archer cards. "She attacked us. 2 of our friends are injured because of her. If you know what's good for you, then you'll get out of our way," roared another thug. That very statement was so absurd that it took a minute for Issei's brain to comprehend it. "You expect me to believe that a little girl attacked and injured 2 of you," he scoffed. "It's true, she just summoned a spear from nowhere with a flash of light then attacked us," argued the first one. "A spear," repeated Issei before his eyes widened in recognition as he dived away from the girl and brought a hand to his card holder, only to find it missing. Looking for this, taunted the girl as she held his card holder in one hand and a spear in the other with a triumphant smirk on her face. "Give those to me now," ordered the teen. "Now why would I do that?" laughed the girl as she threw her spear at him, forcing Issei to dive to the ground as it went soaring over his head. "Come on guys, let's teach this brat a lesson," snarled the apparent leader of the thugs as the delinquents charged. "No, stop," cried the teen, but he was too late as the humans surrounded the fallen angel, who merely just scoffed before her wings emerged from behind her as she proceeded to cut all their weapons clean in two. "You humans have served your purpose now, either leave or die. The only one who needs to die tonight is that boy," ordered the fallen angel. "You think we'll run after you hurt our friends?" shouted the leader in anger, only to cry out in pain as a spear pierced his stomach. "I suppose it was too much to hope for intelligence from a bunch of humans," sighed the girl, condescendingly. "Boss," cried the group as one of them rushed over to their downed leader. Throughout it all, Issei just grinded his teeth in frustration. "Damn it," growled the teen as he tried to rush towards his card holder, only to fail as he tiredly dodged another of the girl's spears. How was he supposed to fight exhausted and without using his class cards? Most sacred gears are actually relatively easy to awaken if you're determined enough. It's all about your mental state. The best method is to picture the strongest thing you can imagine, and usually they are awoken. As Rias' words echoed in his head, Issei frowned and once again glanced down at his fist. "Rias, you better have been telling the truth. My life is going to depend on it." "Hey, can you guys keep this brat busy for a couple of seconds?" he yelled at the thugs. "Why the hell should we listen to you?" argued the injured leader. "Just do it," snarled Issei, causing the leader to glare at him before nodding. "All right, boys, you heard him. Keep her busy for Prince Charming over there," ordered the delinquent. Hearing this, Issei sighed in relief before ducking behind cover and closing his eyes as he tried to picture the strongest thing he could imagine. At first, he thought of Cuchulainn as his brief glimpse into the hero's memories resurfaced before the image of the female huntress appeared, followed by the images of the other class cards appearing one by one. As the last card appeared, Issei felt something rise up within him as his arm began glowing, a sudden boost of energy rushing through his body and rejuvenating the tired teen. Finally, behind the group of class cards, Issei saw the giant red dragon statue from his dreams fade into existence, its proud form radiating power just from its mere presence. Everyone stopped what they were doing as they heard the loud announcement and turned to see Issei emerge from his hiding spot with one of his arms covered in a red gauntlet and a green gem embedded in it. The fallen angel just froze as she saw the gauntlet, dropping the card holder in the process as, for the first time, fear began to show on her face. "All of you back off and get your friends to the hospital. I can deal with her," ordered Issei as he walked over to the group. The delinquents all turned to look at their leader, whom stared at Issei appraisingly before nodding. "Give her hell for me." The group then left with their leader being supported by 2 of his friends, leaving Issei alone with the female fallen angel. The girl seemed to snap out of her fear as she watched Issei approach with a smile on her face. "I'll admit you had me worried there for a minute, but I know you don't have boosted gear. After all, it's impossible to be born with 2 sacred gears, and boosted gear never manifested with cards," she smirked, trying to rebuild her confidence. Issei didn't respond as he continued approaching her with a cold expression on his face, causing the girl to back up as she summoned another spear. "What is your name, fallen?" asked the teen. "Mittelt." "What is it to you, human?" replied Mittal as she took to the safety of the skies before throwing her spear at him. Issei didn't even try to dodge. Instead, he simply caught the incoming projectile with his gauntlet hand, and smirked up at her as his gauntlet's gem began glowing again. "I think this belongs to you," he teased before throwing Mittel's own spear back at her. Mittel's eyes widened in shock as she ducked under the fast-moving spear, which buried itself into the ground before exploding into light, and watched fearfully as Issei grabbed his discarded card holder. Attaching the holder back to his belt, Issei punched his gauntlet-covered hand through the pavement below him, causing cracks to appear as he ripped out a large chunk of concrete and held it in one hand. So it looks like this increases my power? Interesting." "Hey, fallen catch," called Issei as he hurled the large piece of concrete at her and nailed Mittelt in the stomach, causing her to cry out in pain and fall to the ground. As soon as she hit the ground, Issei rushed towards her downed form with his fist raised for a knockout blow, only to see Mittelt roll to the side as his gauntlet embedded itself into the pavement. Unfortunately for the fallen angel, she never had the chance to take advantage of this opening as Issei saw her approaching and sent a powerful kick into her stomach. Once again crying out in pain, Mittal returned to the sky and summoned another spear as she watched Issei remove his hand from the pavement with a shower of concrete. The red gauntlet on his arm once again glowing as he grinned up at her. "That's not possible, you can't have boosted gear twice critical. I could understand, but that Longinus never showed anything to do with cards before," exclaimed Mittelt. Issei just grinned up at her. "What makes you think that the cards are a sacred gear?" As he said this, Mittelt froze and realized the fatal flaw with her entire plan. She had just assumed that he was a normal human apart from his sacred gear. She had assumed that those cards were his sacred gear. She didn't even pause to consider if he could use other abilities. Which meant the time he had fought off Rainier and killed Donasik, even when fighting that Devil Knight, he was using his own power. "Looks like you've figured it out." "That's right, this entire time I haven't been using my sacred gear." He grinned and grabbed the card holder on his belt. "That's not possible. No normal human, no matter how skilled at magic they are, could create those cards. They have to be sacred gears," denied the fallen angel fearfully. "Well, I wouldn't exactly call their creator a normal human, but I promise you these cards are no sacred gears. In fact, why don't I show you one now? Archer seems like she wants to meet you. I think you made her mad with your little trick," replied Issei as he held up the glowing Archer card. "Include Archer," called the teen as the card's glow blinded Mittelt. As her eyesight returned, the fallen angel was greeted to the sight of Issei holding a jet black bow that was larger than he was tall in his non-gauntlet hand. Even though Mittelt couldn't feel any magical energy being emitted by this bow, she instinctively knew that this weapon was dangerous. Issei smiled as he knocked an arrow and began drawing the bowstring back, only to let go as it was half drawn. However, much to Mittelt's horror, instead of simply falling short and hitting the ground, the arrow flew past her ear as it continued sailing into the nearby building and didn't stop, carving a massive hole through the entire structure before finally coming to a halt. The fallen angel just looked at the carnage in shock as one fact became abundantly clear: there was no magic energy in that attack. It was caused by the pure physical power of the bow itself. The sound of the human talking snapped her out of her fear-induced trance as she turned back to face him fearfully. "Well, Tauropolos certainly lives up to its reputation, doesn't it?" he smirked, before shooting another arrow at her. Mittelt only just managed to dodge the speeding projectile, but even so, it still clipped her spear as it passed, completely shattering her light spear and nearly breaking her arm in the process. "Hal, Archer, don't make laugh. Call yourself that once you actually hit your target," she taunted, trying to hide the pain coming from her arm. "Who said I was aiming for you?" replied Issei, his smirk still in place as Mittelt heard a creaking noise from behind her. Frowning, the fallen angel quickly spun around and saw the dilapidated building behind her missing its entire middle section, the top half of it creaking as it began to lean towards her. Finally, without the support of the middle section, gravity started to take its toll and the top half came crashing down towards her like a landslide. Unable to get away from the tumbling wreckage in time, Mittelt instead flew towards it as she aimed for the holes in the walls, using them as a passage as she flew through the wreckage. As she finally escaped the collapsed building and made it safely to the other side, Mittelt gave a soft sigh of relief only to cough as the dust from the collapsed building filled the air. "So you survived. I'll admit you're more resourceful than I gave you credit for," complimented Issei from behind her as the dust surrounding them began to clear. Turning around, the fallen angel saw Issei once again knocking two arrows with what seemed like a piece of paper attached to each of them. Then the arrows began glowing. "With my bow and arrows, I respectfully ask for the divine protection of the sun god Apollo and the moon goddess Artemis." Mittelt suddenly felt an enormous amount of power gathering around the bow as Issei pointed it towards the sky. "I offer thee this calamity, Phobos catastrophe, complaint message on the arrow." The two glowing arrows just shot into the night sky with twin glittering trails following close behind as they pierced the clouds. Then there was silence as Mittelt felt the power surrounding the bow dissipate and gave a relieved laugh. "You idiot, you had a perfect shot and you missed, Archer. Ridiculous. You couldn't even hit the right side of a barn," insulted the fallen angel as she readied another light spear. Issei just smiled up at her as he pointed towards the sky. "Hey, fallen angel, if I were you I'd be taking cover right now." Mittelt just laughed again and was about to throw her spear when she heard it, a noise rapidly getting louder and reminding her of the sound of falling rain. Frowning, she looked up and immediately saw the night sky begin to light up faintly, then she spotted them. Mittelt went pale as the sky above her was filled with multiple arrows made of light that were heading straight for her, preparing to rain down on the fallen angel with a vengeance. Pushing her wings as fast as they could take her, Mittelt tried to get out of the blast radius, but the spread was simply too wide and she cried out as an arrow struck her in the shoulder and sent the fallen angel crashing to the ground. Realizing how dangerously open the position that she landed in was, Mittelt darted for the nearest building as the light arrows rainstorm continued. The fallen angel just took cover under a large table as she saw the tips of the light arrows poking through the rooftop or even blasting straight through them and hitting the floor around her. Eventually, upon hearing the downpour of arrows stop, Mittelt struggled to her feet and walked outside warily. only to gasp as she saw the area around her littered with the glowing projectiles. "Impressive, isn't it?" asked the teen as he watched her. Spinning around to face him, Mittal swallowed as she saw another arrow already nocked and ready to be drawn. "I'm just glad I didn't make it a single arrow instead of a rain. After all, it's hard to question a corpse," he commented as the arrows surrounding the pair vanished. Realizing that she had better maneuverability in the air even with her damaged shoulder, Mittal once again ascended to the skies, ready to dive for cover should he use Phobos Catastrophe again. However, Issei didn't seem to mind as he stared at his bow and gauntlet with a frown. As Issei was examining his new bow, the frown on his face rapidly turned to a grin. "Interesting, so I'm currently only strong enough to draw Tarapalos halfway. Heroic spirits really are strong compared to normal humans, aren't they? But thankfully I can cheat." He smirked as his red gauntlet began glowing again and he started to draw the bowstring back once more. This time the human managed to draw it back further, and after seeing the carnage that the bow caused at only half strength, Mittal immediately descended to the ground before desperately rushing towards her target, hoping that he wouldn't shoot at this close range. These hopes were dashed as he fired the bow at the ground beneath her feet, the tiles and pavement exploding upwards and sending Mittal soaring into a nearby fence, leaving a large dent as she collapsed to the ground. Groaning, the fallen angel struggled to her feet just in time to see a red gauntlet smash into her face and send her once again crashing into the fence, this time sending Mittal through the dented metal. Stepping through the newly made hole in the fence, Issei grinned as he gripped the glowing Lancer card in his gauntlet. "Include Lancer," he called, and the card in his gauntlet transformed into the red lance that Mittal saw him using earlier. Mittal just watched as the teen as he approached with the bow in one hand and the red lance in his gauntlet covered other. As Issei walked over to her, the fallen angel could have sworn she saw two ghostly figures behind him and glaring at her. The first was blue-clad man that had narrowed beast-like slits for pupils that were almost daring her to try something just so he could rip her to shreds. The second was a beautiful green-clad woman that seemed to have cat-like ears and tail, and yet despite these endearing features, the hate in her eyes made Mittal feel like she was staring into the face of death itself. "Now, Mittal, I'm going to ask you a few questions, and you're going to tell me the truth, understand?" stated Issei with a frown. Mittal hesitated slightly, which caused the hostility from the two ghostly figures to increase tenfold as the fallen angel shuddered in fear from their glares. "Yes, of course, just don't kill me, please," she begged while nodding her head furiously. "Good. Now why did you attack me? I thought after I dealt with your two friends that you fallen would have learnt your lesson," he interrogated. "I saw your fight with that devil and—" Mittal trailed off as she began eyeing the ground. "You thought you'd take advantage of my tired state," finished the teen, making her flinch. "Not a bad strategy, especially since you actually stole my class cards while I was distracted. You've definitely got more brains than your two friends," he nodded with an almost approving tone. Mittal just looked up in confusion at this unexpected reply, only to flinch as Issei placed Gibalg above her heart, the girl shivering as she felt the lust barely being restrained by the spear. "Now for my next question, did you really hurt those two humans?" he asked in a dangerously calm voice. The fallen swallowed and slowly nodded her head, the thought of lying never even occurring to her, which oddly enough was the only reason. She was still breathing. "Mittal, this is one of those times you need to think very carefully about how you answer this next question," warned Issei quietly. "Why did you hurt them?" asked the teen in a tone devoid of emotion. She wanted to lie, she wanted to give him some sad sob story, anything to justify her actions, and yet when she looked into the eyes of her judge, she found that she couldn't. Looking back at her actions, she wondered, why did she hurt them if she wanted to get those thugs to follow her? There were plenty of better ways to go about it, so why did she do it? Eventually Mittal just sighed as she turned to look up at Issei, who was waiting with raised eyebrows. "I don't know." The teen blinked a couple of times before he glared at her again. "Then why did you want to kill me?" "Didn't Rainer tell you we were ordered to kill you because of your sacred gear?" she explained with a confused frown. "So you're only following orders? Is that it? Don't give me that. Everyone has a choice. You could have chosen not to obey your superiors, but instead you didn't even question them," he growled, angrily. Mittal just gave a hollow laugh. "You obviously don't know much about fallen angels then, do you?" "Oh, enlighten me then," frowned Issei, Gibalg still hovering over the fallen's heart. The girl just glared up at him in defiance. "You think we have a choice? You think we can disobey our orders and abandon the Gregory? Tell me, Issei Hayadu, how are we supposed to do that when everywhere else we go we're hated and hunted?" Mittal then stood up, uncaring about the spear now drawing from her chest. "No matter who we are or what we are doing, we are always hunted. Devils, angels, yakai, even humans, whenever they hear there is a fallen in town, it becomes open season for them. To them it's always the same. You are a fallen, therefore you must be evil. Even damned devils are treated better than we are. Devils, the original creatures of sin," she shouted as tears began to well up in her eyes. Issei just watched, stunned as she wiped the tears from her eyes and glared at him. "The Gregory is the only place we can be free, where we can be safe. We can't survive anywhere else, so don't give me that crap about having a choice. A human like you could never understand what it is like. How could you know what it feels like to see those you care about hunted down for simply being seen with you? Because of some fanatic whipping a crowd into a frenzy, how could you know what it feels like to see the people you consider family butchered before your very eyes?" she growled, and the teen's eyes just widened. "Let him go, he's just a child," cried his mother to the black-clad balaclava man as she grabbed and tried to grab her son from him. The man just growled in frustration as he let go of Issei, pulled something from his holster, and pointed it at him. Seeing this, his mother placed herself between the two of them and screamed at him to run before a loud bang went off and she fell to the floor. Suddenly everyone heard the familiar sirens of the police getting closer and the balaclava man and his henchmen began to grow nervous. "Boss, we need to go before the cops show up," exclaimed one of them, causing the man to nod before they bolted towards the exit. "Mom, it's my fault. I'm so sorry," cried the 10-year-old Issei as he rushed over to his mother's side and gripped her hand with his own. "Don't worry, Issei, it's not your fault," smiled his mother before her hand slipped from his grip and collapsed to the ground. "Mom," whispered the child as he just stared at his motionless mother. Shaking the memories from his head, the teen frowned as he forced the painful memory back and stared at Mittal with a frown. There was silence as the two began a staring contest. Mittal could still feel the eyes of the two ghostly figures burning a hole in her head, but even so, she kept her gaze focused solely on Issei. Eventually the human just sighed as he lowered his spear and looked at her, not with pity, not with sympathy, but with understanding. "I know that feeling better than most, Mittelt, but even so I still try to move past it. Can you say the same? Do you think your loved ones would want you to become a mindless killer, obeying whatever order others give you without question?" replied Issei. The fallen angel just reared her head as if she'd been slapped before looking down to the ground, refusing to meet his eyes. Eventually Issei sighed and dismissed Gibalg and Tarapalos, which then returned to their card forms respectively, and walked away. As he was about to leave, Issei stopped and turned to give Mittelt one last look. "We all have choices, Mittelt, whether we know it or not, and I've just made mine. I'm giving you a second chance, don't waste it." With his piece said, Issei walked off and Mittal watched as the two ghostly figures gave her another suspicious glare before they dissipated. All alone the fallen angel flew back to the church, the human's words still reverberating in her mind. "Mittelt, where have you been? Dear God, what happened to you?" exclaimed Rainier as the fallen leader spotted her. The girl briefly thought about telling Rainier about her fight and what she had found out. Certainly it would help them take down the human if they were aware of his real sacred gear. Yet for some reason Mittelt hesitated as his words continued echoing in her head. Mittelt, you useless child. Snap out of it, yelled Rainier, slapping Mittelt from her thoughts. Shaking her head she looked up at Rainier and just snarled. "Nothing happened, I crashed while flying, that's all." "You really are useless sometimes, Mittelt," sighed Rainier with a shake of her head. Mittelt just growled before heading up to her room and getting changed into clean clothes as she began packing her bags with whatever she could afford to take with her. Once she had finished packing, Mittelt grabbed her bags and opened the window, giving one last look at her room. The fallen angel sighed as she flew out into the night, leaving the abandoned church and all its residents far behind her. We all have a choice, whether we know it or not. Sometimes it just requires a little push to help us realize it. Morrigan sighed in relief. If what that boy had said was true, then it was a good thing that she'd had the foresight to put a boundary field around the area to mask the magical energies being released before the fallen angel attacked. If Apollo or Artemis had detected one of the weapons of their lost champions being used by someone without their permission, then there would be spilled, most likely the boys. The Greeks were very protective of their relics after all, and Morrigan was in no mood to try and protect the boy from them. After all, the Celtic pantheon couldn't really afford to make enemies of the Greeks due to their smaller size and lack of allies. Although to be fair, it's our own fault for being so reclusive and isolationist, thought Morrigan with a shake of her head. At the time, it had seemed like a good idea. Why get involved with the affairs of others when there was no need for it? But now it was beginning to be a problem. Somehow she and Lug were going to have to keep the boy hidden from their fellow Celtic deities, and now also the Greek pantheon and the biblical factions, as well as keeping herself hidden from the Shinto pantheon in their own territory. It was taking all of Morrigan's willpower not to simply tear her own hair out in frustration. She wasn't Loki, damn it, she was a goddess of death and destruction. Subtlety was not her strong suit. It didn't help that her partner in crime was about as subtle as a lumbering elephant in the middle of a jungle. Honestly, why did she agree to this again? Right, Cuchulainn, damn that Lug, taking advantage of my weakness like that, thought Morrigan with a sigh that turned to a frown as she pondered what the goddess had just seen. As a goddess of death, Morrigan had a unique affinity for souls, often ferrying the souls of Celtic warriors into the afterlife. It was how she was able to detect Cuchulainn's presence near the boy yesterday, and after her conversation with Lug, she had stuck close to the boy in case the event repeated itself. So imagine her surprise when she felt a presence near the boy that was completely unfamiliar to her. It had the same weak static quality that Cuchulainn's had, but it was definitely not his presence. Judging from the weapon that he had summoned, Morrigan was certain that she knew who the identity of that new presence surrounding him was, but again that begged the question. How did this boy know her? What was his connection with her, and was that even the right Tarapalos that he summoned, or was it similar to the problem with the two Gibalgs? It could have ended there and given Morrigan only a mild headache, but no, to make matters worse, the boy even had the Longinus boosted gear stored inside him. Well, if nothing else, the boy has definitely inherited Cuchulainn's luck, sighed the goddess as she began massaging her temples. Still boosted gear combined with Gibalg and Tarapalos, now that's a potent combo. He might just be able to kill a god with that. And that's not even including those other cards he has left to reveal, she mused with a frown. She'd had her suspicions before, but this had proved that those cards definitely weren't his sacred gear and that they had something to do with the boy's connection to Cuchulainn. However, if they weren't sacred gears, then what were they and who made them? The boy clearly didn't, and it certainly wasn't a god. No god would want to risk another war by creating them. As is, or maybe he did have a disturbing fascination with sacred gears. Maybe he wanted to create his own using souls of the departed. As horrible as it sounded, it was possible, but from what she knew, the governor of the Gremory wasn't nearly powerful enough to create artifacts of this level of power. In fact, the boy himself seemed to be, if not on friendly terms with the card's creator, then at least know of him, which seemed to indicate that he was definitely living here. This meant she could cross off most deities and faction leaders, as the Shinto pantheon wouldn't let them set up shop in their territory. It was clear that Lug may have had a point. Morrigan had been a bit hasty in thinking he was the reincarnation of Cuchulainn. After all, Cuchulainn never wielded Tauropolos, that much is certain, and she didn't even feel his presence until the boy summoned Gibalg. But then how did he know those names? Why did she feel Cuchulainn's presence near the boy at all? Maybe it was his line, maybe he was a descendant of multiple heroes, and the cards merely bring out the abilities of his ancestors. The odds were low, astronomically so, but still it was a possibility. Morrigan would have to send word back to Lug to check if Cuchulainn had any hidden descendants. Still, all this revolved back to those damned cards. The boy was the key to finding the creator of those cards, which meant she needed him alive. This presented a problem. If the boy continued using those cards, then she might not be able to mask his abilities from others. She would have to stay close to him, and that meant stepping out of the shadows. She could already picture Lug's smiling face as she prepared to tell him of her plan. They would need help, though, if it was going to work. Neither Lug nor Morrigan herself were skilled enough at magic to hide the goddess from the devils and Shinto faction at that close quarters. However, there was no way they could ask any of their other more magically inclined deities for help without rousing suspicion. That left only one option: they would have to ask her for help. A twinge of jealousy appeared in her mind before she suppressed it. After all, if they wanted to remain undetected, then they would need that damned sorceress' help. Still, Morrigan shuddered to think how she would react to the news about Cuchulainn. Hopefully, for the boy's sake, she wouldn't take it too badly. However, it was necessary if she wanted to get to the bottom of this mystery boy in Cuchulainn. Morrigan was certain that the cards were the key to this mystery. She needed to find out how they were created and what their connection to Cuchulainn was. If she discovered that it really was his soul being unwillingly used for a pseudo-sacred gear, then she would personally hunt down this mystery creator. Then she would show them just what happens when you anger a goddess of death. After Lug had had his fun, of course, that man's wrath could rival a devil's when needed. Great, time to make the preparations, sighed Morrigan as she returned to the other world, to organize a meeting with Lug and contact a certain sorceress. Issei yawned as he awoke from the best sleep he had had in a long time before panicking as he checked the time, only to breathe in relief as he saw that he hadn't slept in. Honestly, if he was nearly late again, then the student council would have his head, and he was in no mood for an eternity of detention. Stretching, the teen climbed out of his bed and glanced once again at the class cards spread out on his table, along with that weird flyer from the cosplayer, before placing them in their holder, the Lancer and Archer cards glowing slightly at his touch. Thinking back to the Archer card, Issei frowned as he made a mental note to research the legend of Atalanta later. Who knows, it might help him forge a better connection with the card. Upon hearing the male voice, Issei instantly grasped the Lancer card from its holder and summoned Gibalg, getting into a stance as he searched his room for the intruder. "Come out, intruder," he ordered. "Oh really?" scoffed Issei. "Then why don't you come out of hiding and show yourself then?" Frowning, Issei did as the voice said and was surprised to see the boosted gear suddenly appear on his arm unannounced. Then the voice started talking again, and Issei just watched as the gem light up with every word, his brain refusing to comprehend what its senses were telling it. "Nope," replied Issei as he dismissed Gibalg and placed the card back into its holder. "My hand isn't talking to me, I'm not hearing voices, and I'm going to get a CAT scan on the weekend." Issei just ignored the mumblings of the imaginary dragon and continued getting changed into his Kyo Academy uniform before heading down to make breakfast. His dad arrived shortly after as the smell of the meal began wafting throughout the house, making both the house's inhabitants' stomach rumble loudly before they devoured their breakfast. Issei just froze mid-bite before he slowly looked at the kitchen clock and spotted the time. "That's not possible, the clock in my room said I had heaps of time left." "Oh Issei, I forgot to tell you that I messed up your clock," stated his father, obliviously. "You what?" cried Issei in horror. "Well, I was trying to set an alarm on it so you wouldn't keep being late to class," he replied. Issei just growled at his new partner before leaping up from the table and grabbing his bag, wasting no time as the teen bolted out of the door and rushed towards school. In his rush to beat the clock, Issei failed to notice his body performing feats of Parker that it certainly wasn't capable of doing before, nor did he notice the Archer card glowing slightly from within its holder. However, even with this newfound skill, the teen cried as he saw Kyo Academy's gates closing in the distance as the last bell rung. Trapped outside, the teen sighed in defeat before something caught his eye. Looking at the side of the school wall, he saw a large tree branching over the barrier and smiled. "Maybe Kaichu won't put me in detention after all," he grinned as he climbed up the tree before swinging himself over the wall and gave a cheer as he landed safely on his feet. "Impressive work, Hayatausen, but in the future you might want to check your surroundings next time before you celebrate," commented a female voice, which caused Issei to freeze as he slowly turned around. Sona Shitori just glared at him with cold eyes as she marked his name off the list, late for nearly 3 consecutive weeks. This must be a new record. Kaichu, there's a perfectly good explanation for this, replied Issei. Sona nodded. I'm sure there is, and you can be all about it in detention. You mean you're holding the session personally? He questioned, fearfully. The teen's face just paled as he remembered the last detention he'd had with the student council president, and he immediately fell to his knees. Kaichu, isn't there something else? Anything but that. My decision is final, Hayao-san. I'll be seeing you in detention, she replied, stiffly, and caused Issei to slump to the ground as his last hope disappeared. Blinking as his new imaginary friend explained to him what to do, Issei nodded and just did as he was told. After all, it couldn't get any worse than it already was. Kaichu, what if we made a bet? He offered. A bet, repeated Sona with raised eyebrows. Issei nodded. If I win, you let me off the hook this time. And if I win, she replied, obviously curious as to what he had in mind. I know you've been looking for people to help with the Parents' Day coming up. If you win, I'll help set up the decorations and act as staff during the event, he answered, causing Sona's eyes to gain a worrying gleam. Very well, but under one condition, proposed the student council president. What's that? Replied Issei, eager to escape his detention. Sona just gave a small smirk. I get to decide the game. Sure, so what are we playing? Agreed Issei, ignoring Didrag, whom sighed in disappointment. The president's smile grew tenfold. Tell me, Hayao-san, how good are you at chess? I wonder what he did this time, whispered a student. Lucky bastard, getting punished personally by Kaichu herself, growled another. Yeah, going into her office for their own punishment time. Who knew those two were into that kind of thing, replied a third student. Issei just sighed as he heard the whispers from multiple other students follow the two of them as he and Sona headed to her office. Although he had to admit, if Sona heard or was affected by these rumors, then she had a great poker face. In fact, he was grateful that she didn't want to play cards instead. I know how the pieces move, that's all you need to know, right? Questioned Issei as the two of them sat around Sona's table. The rest of the student council just sat and watched with knowing smiles on their faces as Sona brought out an expensive-looking ivory and ebony chess set. Sona quickly set up both ends of the chessboard before looking up at him with a superior smile. So Hayao-san, which color would you like to play? She asked, smugly. Here ... What's the difference? He replied in response. You don't even know that? Oh boy, this is going to be a quick game, laughed the only other male in the room. Saji, you didn't even know what each piece was at the start, retorted Sona before turning back to Issei. White always moves first while black always goes last. I have no idea what I'm doing, so I guess I'll go black, see if I can copy her moves, he thought, and selected the black side. Wow, thanks for the encouragement, he grumbled in his head while trying to ignore the voice of his partner laughing at him. Didrag was right though, he lasted a grand total of 3 moves before being checkmated. If you'd like Hayao-san, we can make it the best of 3, offered the smug president. It doesn't matter if it's best of 100, even I can tell the result will be the same, thought the teen with a sigh as he prepared to leave. But there's no way I can beat her, he thought back at Didrag. Nodding, Issei grinned at Sona. All right then, best of 3 it is, he announced, much to the shock of everyone in the room. Frowning at his stubbornness, Sona just shook her head and reset the board. Following Didrag instructions, Issei again chose black. However, the end result was completely different this time around, as Sona completely underestimated him, based off the previous game. Issei didn't know if Didrag was real or not, but the moment he saw the shocked expression on everyone in the room, the teen decided he didn't care. Didrag was now officially his best friend. So all tied up, Hakaichu, he grinned, smugly, while Sona just fixed her glasses and glared at him. It would appear so, Hayao-san, she replied and reset the board while the rest of the student council silently watched on. Didrag, crush her, he thought, giddily. Didrag, there are some moments where you have to throw caution to the wind to enjoy life. I'll gladly take whatever punishment the universe can throw at me to see the Ice Queen, Sona Shitori, taken down a notch, replied Issei. Everyone crowded around the table as Issei and Sona began their final round, expecting to see the human be destroyed easily now that Kaichu was serious. They couldn't have been more further from the truth. Sona was good, but Didrag was better and outmaneuvered the devil with every move until sure enough Sona found herself in checkmate. The entire student council was silent as they just stared at the board in shock. Meanwhile, Issei just hummed a merry tune as he got up from the table and headed for the door. I'll see you later, Kaichu. Remember our deal, said Issei as he struggled to keep a smirk from growing across his face and closed the door behind him. Once the door was shut, Issei burst into laughter as he headed to his classroom, drawing confused looks from his fellow students who gave him a wide berth. Didrag, that was perfect. Did you see their faces? He thought, happily. A frown crossed his face as he rounded another corner. Me, what do you mean, Didrag? You did all the work. There was the sound of rumbling laughter echoing throughout his head before Issei heard the dragon's reply. Issei just froze mid-step as the drained away from his face, making other students once again give him strange looks. Didrag, are you saying that everyone in that room was a devil? He asked. Citriclan questioned Issei as he began breathing again and continued onwards to his classroom as Didrag explained. Issei just groaned as he began banging his head against the wall, ignoring the looks other students were sending him in the process. Eventually he stopped and just sighed as he made his way back to class, while D-Drake tried to keep the amusement out of his voice. "Shut up," he hissed at the dragon in his head, only to flinch as D-Drake once again burst out into loud laughter. "You think," replied Issei hopefully. "You know, I think I liked you better when you were supposed to be a figment of my imagination," grumbled the teen as he opened the door to the classroom and took his seat. The student council flinched as their devil hearing picked up Issei's laughter traveling down the narrow hallways outside. None of her peerage dared to say a word as they saw their leader just stare at the chessboard in silence. Sona then stood up without a word and headed to the room's private bathroom before shutting the door. The rest of the devils just looked at each other in confusion before they all heard a loud cry of rage and frustration echo from within the bathroom. Suddenly the door to the bathroom slammed open and Sona walked out, looking completely normal with her calm poker face that was completely contrasting the hostility she was emitting. She then calmly began packing up the chess set while the rest of her peerage just glanced at each other again, each wondering who would go first. Eventually Saji sighed as he approached. Kaichu, are you okay?" "I'm fine, Saji," replied Sona coldly. "You sure I could go and bring Hayao-san back if you like?" offered Saji, only to back away as the chess piece in Sona's hand snapped at the mention of the name. "That will not be necessary, Saji. Now I believe you all have work to do, don't you?" she ordered before turning to the rest of her peerage. All of them except Tsubaki nodded and quickly left the room while her queen grabbed a report from her desk and approached. "We recently got a message from Rias." Sona raised her eyebrows. "More of that record searching. If I find out Rias is just making us look through the sacred gear records as a joke, I will not be pleased." Tsubaki just shook her head. "No, apparently she wants to introduce us to someone after school is done." The Citri heiress just frowned. "So Rias has a new piece to use against Riser, does she? That's good, but I wasn't aware that there was anyone of potential left in the school, let alone that Rias had her eyes on them. So what piece are they?" Tsubaki shook her head again. She didn't recruit them for her peerage, but they are aware of the supernatural and apparently have already fought off a group of fallen angels and matched her knight in a sparring duel. A human that can match Kiba. I didn't think such a thing was possible. Still, why hasn't Rias recruited them yet? Mao knows she could use the firepower against Riser, questioned Sona as her frown deepened. "Maybe they are just hesitant to give up their humanity. Remember how cautious the others were when you offered them a place in your peerage," reasoned the queen. "That's true. So who is this mystery person Rias has her eyes on?" asked Sona with a curious look on her face. Tsubaki just shrugged. "She didn't say. Apparently she wants it to be a surprise for both us and this mystery person." "Why does that not surprise me?" sighed Sona with a shake of her head. Finally finishing packing up the chess set, the Citri heiress growled as she forced the memories of her embarrassment by Issei Hayao to the back of her mind. "He may have outsmarted me once, but next time I see that human I'll make him pay," she thought eagerly as a scary smile spread across her face. Tsubaki just watched as her cool, calm and collected president was replaced by the smiling individual before her. For a brief moment, the image of Sona was replaced by that of her older sister Serafal, as the Citri heiress chuckled darkly. The moment passed quickly, however, and Tsubaki blinked as the Sona returned to normal. It was only a brief moment, and yet for the queen it was quite a terrifying one. To see Sona emulating Serafal in any way was a terrifying thing to behold. If her king started wearing magical girl costumes after this, then she would immediately call for help. Still, for a second, Tsubaki almost felt sorry for Issei Hayao, but then she remembered how he had embarrassed Sona, and any sympathy she felt died inside her. Besides, all she had to do was keep Sona away from Issei Hayao for a day or two until she calmed down. How hard could that be? The queen's thoughts were interrupted as Sona gave another dark chuckle. Scratch that, a week, definitely a week, she decided worriedly. Eventually the heiress calmed down again before walking over to her desk and grabbing a file of paperwork that Tsubaki didn't recognize. "What's that, Kaichu?" asked the queen, curiously. "Transfer papers," replied Sona as she began to look them over. "Transfer papers," repeated Tsubaki in confusion, causing Sona to nod her head. "Apparently we're getting 2 overseas transfer students today. They're going to be arriving shortly," informed the president with a frown. "That's odd, isn't it? I could understand a transfer from another of the nearby schools, but to have one come from abroad." "Where are they from?" replied the queen. Sona flipped through a few pages before she nodded. "It says they are from Ireland and left in order to study other cultures." "Ireland? Have you checked their background? We don't want a member of the church living right beneath our noses," pointed out Tsubaki. The Citri heiress nodded with a frown. "Everything checked out, and our sources seem to indicate that they aren't a part of the 3 factions." "I see. So which class are they being transferred to?" asked Tsubaki. Sona again flipped through the pages before pulling one out, and her evil smirk returned. "It says they're being transferred to Class 2B. Isn't that convenient? I know a certain person who would love to volunteer to show them around." The queen just sighed and again felt a small bit of pity for Issei. "So what's their name?" she asked, trying to bring her king back to the topic at hand. "It says one is called as Morgana while the other ... That's odd," trailed off Sona. "What is it?" asked Tsubaki. The Citri heiress just looked up at her with a frown. "Their parents must know Celtic history quite well." The queen just blinked in confusion. "What makes you say that?" "The other student is called Scathach," announced Sona. "I wonder, who are these mysterious transfer students? The names don't sound familiar at all." Who could they be? So how did you guys like that boosted gear activates and we see our second class card? I'm still surprised that Archer was harder to get than Caster. I guess Fate. Extra is more popular. Fate. Apocrypha. Who knew? That being said, I might need to reread Fate. Apocrypha since I'm not sure if I got Atalanta right. Tell me what you thought about her. Okay. Did Issei just use boosted gear as well as an include? Yes. Did he just include 2 cards at once? Yes, he did. Why, keep in mind that in the canon Issei does multiple things that are considered impossible, such as absorbing Albion's power. This is just my take on that. List of known heroic spirits: Saber, Lancer, Cuchulainn, Archer, Atalanta, Caster, Rider, Berserker, Assassin. Next, I know that people can have 2 sacred gears like Kiba with Sword Birth and Black Blacksmith, but remember he got that from absorbing the souls of his friends. As far as Mittelt knows, it should be impossible, and that's why she said that. Lastly, about Mittelt, I want to thank Rocking Red Reaper, Duskrider, Chaos Rune, Umberlight 365378, Akuma Hike, C. Jonah 4, The Trolling Snark Lord, and Blarg 7865 for their reviews and suggestions. They really helped. The result of the vote was 13 for keeping Mittelt alive, 10 for killing her off, 3 that were happy either way. Someone asked me to do a stat sheet for Issei in the include states. Basically take the original servants' ranks and lower them by 1 and you have their include states. Before people ask, yes, I am aware that he should be the lowest rank, but in order to keep with the rule of having every stat in the include state 2 ranks below the original, I had to make an F rank. Lancer include state: STR C, Con D, AGI B, MGI D, LCK F, Magic Resistance D, Battle Continuation B. The tenacity, determination, and unyielding fighting spirit of Cuchulainn made manifest. This ability let the demigod fight ferociously even in a hopeless battle. This ability is passed on to Issei, however, unlike Cuchulainn, the human can still suffer from exhaustion in battles. Disengage D. Being able to withdraw from battle in the midst of combat. This ability is usually used when scouting missions go wrong and a retreat is needed. However, due to Issei's lower rank, he can be stopped or hindered if the opponent is fast enough. Runes C. Cuchulainn obtained 18 runes during his studies under Scathach that can be used to respond to many situations. Issei himself can only recreate weaker versions of these spells, nor does he know what each rune means, only its ability. Protection from arrows C. Provides protection against any thrown weapons, allowing the user to sense incoming attacks even if they can't see them and avoid or deflect the projectiles. Does not provide protection from weapons that explode on impact or a melee weapon with long reach. Issei's weaker version cannot withstand a large number of attacks at once or perform as well when he is tired. Divinity C. Cuchulainn was a demigod born of the Celtic sun god Lug and as such displayed incredible talent and skill due to the divine running through his veins. A small portion of this divinity is granted to Issei from the hero when using the include state. Booted gear A. Type Anti-unit. Maximum amount of targets 1 person. One of the 13 Longinus sacred gears created by the biblical god. It houses the soul of one of the 2 heavenly dragons, D-Drag. This gauntlet is capable of doubling the power of its wielder every 10 seconds to the set maximum the user's body can withstand. Gibalg, Spear of Piercing Barbed Death C. Type Anti-unit. Maximum amount of targets 1 person. The primary ability of the demonic spear Gibalg, given to Cuchulainn by his mentor Scathach during his journey through the Land of Shadows. This ability reverses the nature of causality, ensuring that, barring a great deal of luck, the target's heart will be pierced. Due to the reduced rank, it is a lot more taxing to activate this ability, often exhausting Issei after multiple uses. Archer include state: STR E, Con F, AGI B, MGI C, LCK D. Boosted gear A. Type Anti-unit. Maximum amount of targets 1 person. One of the 13 Longinus sacred gears created by the biblical god. It houses the soul of one of the 2 heavenly dragons, D-Drag. This gauntlet is capable of doubling the power of its wielder every 10 seconds to the set maximum the user's body can withstand. Phobos Catastrophe C. Type Anti-Army Noble Phantasm. Maximum amount of targets 100 people. A complaint letter on an arrow seeking the divine protection of Artemis and Apollo with the Teropolos received from the guardian deity Artemis. When fired towards the sky, it causes either a rain of smaller light arrows to descend upon the targets or a single powerful light arrow capable of killing most enemies with a single hit. Magic Resistance E. Crossing Arcadia C. While moving, Issei can jump over all obstacles, including opponents, on the field. The speed of the movement depends on the rank of the skill. Aesthetics of the Last Spurt D. Allows enemy to take the initiative, and after confirming the action, Issei can anticipate them. Due to being reduced to a D ranking, this ability is no longer as detailed in its predictions or as accurate. "Hey Issei, did you hear?" exclaimed Madohama eagerly. Issei just groaned as he pushed his head up from the table and stared at the 2 perverts crowding around his seat. "Hear what Madohama said?" He replied with a yawn. "We're getting 2 new transfer students in our class today. I bet they're cute girls," answered Matsuda excitedly. The teen just shook his head at the 2 perverts as a smile spread along his face. "Oh please, when are we ever that lucky? Let us dream, Issei." cried the perverted duo, causing him to laugh and reflect on how the two were starting to grow on him. After proclaiming him to be a saint of the Oppi, the two perverts had rapidly become permanent fixtures in his school life, and Issei was surprised to find that he didn't mind. It was probably because after a couple of days of having his whole world go into chaos, the normal perverted antics of these two were rapidly becoming his only stability he had left. Plus, his reputation didn't even matter anymore thanks to that damn pretty boy Kiba, so he didn't need to worry about the consequences associating with them. In fact, he could even consider the two perverts to be his only friends in the whole school at this point. "Shut it, D-Drag, it's partially your fault I'm in this situation anyway," he grumbled before turning back to the present as he realized the two perverts were staring at him. "So Issei, we heard you were accepted into the Occult Research Club," said Motohama with a huge grin. Issei just nodded slowly. "Yeah, that's right. Why do you ask?" "We were wondering," started Matsuda. If you could get us a date with them," finished Motohama with a hopeful smile. Issei just looked the two of them and sighed. "Alright, I'll try, but no promises, guys. Who knows, they might have some friends who are looking for a date." "Issei Hayato, you are truly a saint," cried the two of them as they choked Issei in a hug, anime tears streaming down their faces. "Guys, can't breathe," he choked out before gasping for air as the two let go once they heard the sound of the door opening and closing. "Alright class, take your seats, homeroom is about to start," ordered their teacher as he walked in and approached his desk. Issei just waved to his new friends as they left for their seats and zoned out as he began staring out the window, not noticing the sound of the door opening again nor the two figures that walked in. The teen yawned tiredly and began to rest his head on the desk as a combination of stress and exhaustion exacted their toll on him. "Issei Hayato, wake up," yelled the teacher, snapping him from his pleasant daze. Groaning, Issei looked up at the teacher and blinked in confusion as he saw two, oddly familiar-looking, girls standing next to the staff. They were both clearly foreigners, likely of European descent from their looks. Each of them gave off an otherworldly beauty that didn't just catch the eye, but demanded that others stand up and take notice of it. One of them had glossy black eyes and long ebony hair that was braided into a large ponytail, extending down to her waist, as well as black fingerless gloves and long black stockings to go with her QO uniform. What caught his attention, however, was the crow feather resting in her hair. Then for a brief moment, the girl's image changed to that of a woman clad in black with an ebony spear in her hand and standing in a wide field with what seemed like an army of spectral figures behind her. The moment passed quickly, however, and Issei suppressed a shudder as he focused on the other transfer student. Unlike her counterpart, she didn't have black hair but instead a shade of purple with hints of red appearing when seen in the light. She didn't have a braided ponytail either, but rather let her long hair flow freely down her back, stopping just short of her waist. The most eye-catching thing about this girl was her eyes, however, as the deep crimson orbs darted around the room before fixing themselves on Issei. As their eyes met, Issei felt a massive headache and the girl before him changed. No longer was she wearing the Kyo Academy uniform. Instead, she was clad in purple skin-tight leather armor with metal shoulder pauldrons and holding a very familiar red spear in her hands. Snapping out of his vision, Issei saw the purple girl grin at him while the black one just glared at the teen. Issei just frowned as he heard D-Drag's worried voice. In the short time he'd known him, the dragon had never sounded like that before. "What's the matter, D-Drag?" he asked in concern. "Why, do you know them or something?" replied Issei as he felt the gaze of the two new students stay fixed on him. Hearing the dragon's worried orders, Issei nodded his head discreetly, only to jump as he heard the teacher slam his book on the table and glare at him. "Good to see you're finally paying attention, Hayato-san. Now get moving," shouted the teacher. "Moving, sensei," repeated Issei in confusion. The teacher just glared at him before replaying. "Yes, as I've been saying for the past 5 minutes, while trying to get your attention. The student council wants you to give our two new students a tour of the campus." "What?" he cried, jumping up from his chair. "That's not helping, D-Drag," thought Issei angrily as he felt the Lancer card beginning to radiate. Was that fear? Suddenly D-Drag's warning seemed a lot more credible and he had to keep a hand over the card holder to hide the card's glow from view. "Is there a problem, Hayato-san?" replied the teacher with a glare. Issei just shook his head and growled, "No, sensei." "Good, then get to work," ordered the staff. Issei just silently cursed his Lancer luck as he got up from his seat and walked over to the new students, attempting to ignore the increasing heat coming off the Lancer card as he got closer to them. "Well, let's go, shall we?" asked Issei, trying to keep a worried expression off his face as the two girls nodded and followed him out the door. "So is there any place you two want to check out first?" he asked, attempting to strike up a conversation with the two of them. The black one just shrugged and turned to her companion, whom adopted a thoughtful expression before a grin spread across her face. "Yeah, does this school have a dojo?" Issei nodded cautiously. "Yeah, there is one that the kendo club uses in the gym." "Take us there," she ordered, the grin still wide on her face. "Think about it this way, D-Drag, at least it can't get any worse, right?" "Right, D-Drag." "D-Drag," replied Issei, only to get a worrying silence in response. "Well, this is it," announced Issei as the trio entered the kendo dojo. "Where is everyone else?" questioned the black girl, curiously. "In class, probably. Most students shouldn't be out in the halls right now, so the place is usually abandoned around this time," informed Issei, only to frown as the two girls shared a glance before the purple one approached him. The girl just smiled sweetly and for some reason caused a fearful shiver to run down his spine while the Lancer card grew so hot, it felt like it was burning his leg. "Hey, Issei, wasn't it? Let's have a spar," she stated and began dragging him onto the sparring room floor. "Wait, what? Oi, D-Drag, what's going on? Who are these people?" demanded Issei. "We," replied the teen in confusion, only to growl in frustration as he got silence in reply and brought his attention back to the present. "Hold on, why do you want to fight me?" cried Issei as he struggled to break her vice-like grip on his arm. "Does it matter? A beautiful girl is asking you for a favor, Issei. Are you just going to ignore her?" replied the girl with a pout. The teen just gave her a deadpan expression. "Considering what happened last time a pretty girl asked me for a favor and how my luck has been recently, yes." The purple girl raised her eyebrows and turned to her black-haired companion. "Did you hear that, sister? This pervert just started bullying me." "Huh, they're sisters, but they look nothing alike," wondered Issei in confusion as he turned to see the black-haired girl give an evil smile. "I sure did. I wonder how much trouble he'd get into if we told the staff about this," replied the black-haired girl. "What, but I didn't do anything," exclaimed the teen in shock. "That's not what my sister and I saw. You were mean to me and made me cry on my first day," grinned the purple girl. "But maybe you could cheer me up slightly with a little spar and I might forget all about it." Issei's mouth dropped open at this blatant manipulation as he just glanced between the two before the teen sighed in resignation. "Fine, but how will we spar? The Kendo Club keep all their supplies locked up and I don't know any martial arts." "That won't be a problem," replied the purple girl as she walked over to her companion and pulled out 2 long spears made completely out of wood. The girl then threw one of them at Issei and walked to the other end of the sparring ground as she got into a familiar stance that Issei instantly recognized. That stance was the same used by the hero that resided in his most trusted card, that was Cuchulainn's stance. "How do you know that stance?" he growled as a frown crossed his face. "I could ask you the same thing," she countered with a grin. Issei just glared at her before an idea popped into his head. "That's it. Zelretch did say that my heroic spirits came from an alternate reality, so this must be my world's Cuchulainn. You know, I never expected the Shield of Ulster to be a female. What's next, King Arthur?" laughed Issei, bringing surprised looks to the other two's faces. "Although I do have to admit you aren't very ladylike. I guess I can see how people would mistake you for a male. Wear some armor to hide your gender and no one would notice," mused the teen. There was silence in the dojo as the two girls just stared at Issei in shock before the black-haired one watching from the sidelines suddenly burst out laughing. "Did you hear that, Cuchulainn? Apparently, our friend here thinks you're lacking in feminine charm," she teased through bawling laughter. Issei just growled at the dragon before turning back to the purple girl, only to freeze in fear at the sight that greeted him. The girl's eye was twitching as a chilling smile spread across her face. In fact, it seemed like her body was covered in a demonic black aura that just radiated killing intent. "You're such a funny boy, aren't you? And here I was planning to go easy on you, but now I'm going to enjoy myself," she said as Issei felt the killing intent intensify around her. "Oi, D-Drag, what do I do?" "She looks serious here," panicked the teen as the sense of fear from the Lancer card grew exponentially. D-Drag, you useless dragon," growled Issei, but any further insults were interrupted as a wooden spear slammed into his stomach. Collapsing to the ground, Issei dropped his spear and tried to regain his breath as the teen struggled back to his feet, picking up the wooden spear in the process. "What just hit me?" he thought, groggily. Looking back at the female Cuchulainn in front of him, Issei frowned as he saw her still standing in the same place as she started with a smug look on her face. "It couldn't be her, could it? She hasn't moved from that spot since we started," he reasoned with a frown. Then he blinked. When he opened his eyes again, Issei saw the purple girl literally inches from his face as she raised her spear and slammed it into his gut. Winded, Issei was brought to his knees and looked up to see his opponent back in the same spot as she started in. Issei struggled to his feet again as he gripped his own spear with white knuckles and glared at the girl. No human can move that fast, not even Cuchulainn himself. "Who are you, really?" The girl just smiled. "If you can land a hit on me, then I'll tell you." Issei frowned as the boosted gear appeared on his arm and he gripped his spear tightly before charging the girl, only for a loud clack to echo throughout the room as the two spears collided together. As the two weapons met, Issei was brought close to the girl's face and immediately racked by a headache, as the Lancer card began glowing so brightly that the entire card holder was covered in light. The two fighters stood facing each other at opposite ends of the field, both of them holding a wooden spear in their hands. The first was a young-looking blue-haired man wearing blue leather armor. The other was an equally young-looking woman clad in a similar purple leather armor. Neither said a word to the other, neither needed to, the two's eager smiles on their faces speaking volumes. The blue-clad man moved first as he rushed towards her at a ridiculous speed, and the woman did the same. The two met with a clash of spears, but it was clear that the woman was winning as she started pushing her opponent back until their faces were inches apart. In desperation, the man head-butted the girl as their weapons locked themselves together before he was kicked in the gut and sent flying away. "You've still got a lot to learn if you want to beat me, Satanta," laughed the woman with a fond smile. "Oh really?" coughed Satanta with a smirk as he pointed to his forehead. Frowning, the woman placed a hand over her face and her eyes widened as she felt the running down her skin. "Well, I'll be ... you finally landed a hit on me." The young Cuchulainn just smiled as he struggled to his feet. The images faded away from his mind and snapped Issei back into the present as their spears were still locked together, the girl showing no strain from holding back Issei's doubled strength. What was that? He thought in confusion. So that's the legendary Longinus, boosted gear, scoffed the girl, breaking the teen out of his thoughts. And they think they can kill a god. That's ridiculous, I should know I've killed a few myself. Issei just glared at her for insulting his partner and again went on the offensive, only for the girl to sigh in disappointment as she blocked the strike. As the two spears collided, Issei tried to use his newly doubled strength to overpower her, only to see the girl not only hold her own but start to push him back. Cute, but it'll take more than that to overpower me, she grinned before as she used her strength to press her face inches from Issei's. Issei tried to push her back but she was just too strong, and in a move of desperation he head-butted her as the girl pressed her face into him again. Eyes widening, the girl staggered slightly while Issei just fell to the floor in pain, his head feeling like it had just hit a brick wall. That move, muttered the girl as her crimson eyes bore into his. Looks like Morrigan and Lug were telling the truth after all, you are connected to him. Your lack of faith in us is insulting, remarked the black-haired girl watching from the sides with a frown. Morrigan, Lug, what are you talking about? Questioned Issei, frowning at the mention of the Celtic gods. It doesn't matter, replied the purple girl as she eyed him with an appraising look. Oh, use your card already, I'm getting bored her. Issei just froze as a cold feeling spread across his body. Card. What are you talking about? The girl glared at him before she instantly appeared inches from Issei's face. I mean the Lancer card that somehow connects you to Cuchulainn. D-Drag, what do I do? Panicked the teen as he sent his spear at the girl, only for her to catch it in one hand as she ripped it from his grip and snapped it in two. Nodding, Issei backed up from the girl, whom just watched with a calculating expression as he grabbed the glowing card holder and brought the Lancer card. Include Lancer, he shouted, and both the girls' eyes narrowed as they saw the spear in his hands. What do you think? You spent more time with that spear than even your student did, asked the black one curiously. The purple girl nodded with a frown. You were right, Morrigan. That spear definitely has the same aura as Gibalg. Student, thought Issei before his eyes widened as a look of fear and realization crossed his face. Cuchulainn didn't have any pupils, and only one person could ever call Cuchulainn their student. To make matters worse, she called her companion Morrigan. As much as he wanted to believe it was a coincidence, even Issei knew he was deluding himself. You're Scathach, Cuchulainn's teacher. What could you and the goddess, Morrigan herself, want with a human like me? Stated Issei as he gripped Gibalg tighter. Scathach just smiled. We'll tell you, but first I have a little test for you. Test, repeated Issei. The immortal witch held out a hand as if to grasp something, and Issei saw a red light form in her hand before it extended to nearly her height and length. As the red light died down, Issei gasped as he saw a familiar red spear in her hand, giving off an incredible amount of lust. Scathach got into her stance. Let's see which is stronger, my Gibalg or yours. The cursed spear of the Celts, descended from the Norse spear Gungnir, and Brionach, the spear of the Celtic god of the sun, father of its most well-known wielder Cuchulainn. The tragedy of Gibalg is one of the most infamous of all the demonic weapons in the world, yet despite its infamy very few have ever seen the weapon as it is jealously guarded by the Celtic sun god, Lug. Those few who have seen it all report the same thing, however, a red spear with an overwhelming amount of lust emanating from the weapon. Originally obtained by the immortal witch Scathach through means that have been lost to time, she eventually gave the weapon to one of her most successful students, Cuchulainn. The witch then asked her student to kill her, but sadly, she had grown so powerful that she had been cursed to not be considered human. Not even the cursed spear could end her existence, and so Gibalg failed to kill the one person it was intended to. Eventually Cuchulainn left, taking Gibalg with him, and forged his own legend as the Shield of Ulster, but in the process ending the lives of his close friend and son with the cursed spear. It is known for its ability to reverse the nature of causality, ensuring the opponent's heart is pierced. However, what is not as well known is its second ability, that was developed and mastered by Cuchulainn. When thrown, Gibalg supposedly. Tiba, what are you doing? Questioned Rias as she walked into clubroom. Kiba immediately snapped out of his book and stood up to greet his king. But I was just doing some more research on demonic weapons. I thought there might be something to help us identify Issei's spear Akashi. Oh, replied Rias with raised eyebrows. Have you found anything? The knight frowned as he pushed the open book towards her. I had a hunch that I wanted to follow up on, and I think I found something. But was there anything about Akashi that stood out to you? The lust. I've never felt anything like it before, even from other demonic weapons, replied the devil with a frown. Kiba nodded and gestured to the book in front of his king. Exactly, no normal demonic weapon would ever emit that much lust. So I looked up famous demonic spears that had a reputation for their lust, and I found something. Gibalg, replied Rias with a shake of her head as she put the book down. Kiba, while I applaud your efforts to find answers about Akashi, I think you might be seeing connections that aren't really there. But you just hear me out, argued the knight. Gibalg is described as a red demonic spear that practically oozes lust. Akashi matches this description exactly. It also is one of the most well-guarded artifacts of the Celtic pantheon. Trust me, Kiba, if it had been stolen, we would have heard about it by now. In fact, if Issei did have Gibalg, don't you think the Celts would have already come here to reclaim it? Replied the red-haired devil. Tiba frowned and his eyebrows furrowed in concentration as he considered these points, only to sigh as he couldn't fault the logic behind the arguments. Still, why do I keep feeling like we're missing something important, he thought as his frown deepened. But did you have any luck finding out about any sacred gears that use cards? Asked the knight, curiously. Rias just shook her head. We found a couple but none of them match what Issei showed us. If anything, it seems more like your sword birth than any of them. Tiba just froze before a smile spread across his face. But that's it. Issei's sacred gear must create copies of legendary weapons. The red-headed devil frowned, Kiba putting aside the fact that if a sacred gear like that existed then we would have heard of it. This sacred gear would have had to have seen the originals in order to copy them. The knight nodded eagerly. I know, but that must be why he can only use one of the cards. He can only create the copy of Gibalg right now. Rias sighed as she sat down in her seat. So you think that Issei, an ordinary human, managed to see one of the most well-guarded weapons of the most reclusive of all the pantheons? Perhaps he did it unknowingly. Maybe he saw it by chance while visiting Ireland. Remember how the church often takes holy swords around the world to find holy sword wielders. This situation could be similar, replied Kiba, causing a thoughtful look to cross Rias' face. Seeing this, the knight continued, it would explain why we never heard of this sacred gear before. None of its other wielders ever encountered a legendary weapon, so the sacred gear never activated. The red-headed devil was silent for a couple of minutes before she shook her head again with a frown. Kiba, while your theory makes a scary amount of sense, there is one problem with it. What's that but you? Asked the blonde knight. Rias' frown deepened as she closed the book in front of her and handed it back to the knight. You're underestimating just how isolationist the Celts are. There is no way they'd ever take Gibalg out of the other world. The god Lug would never allow it. Therefore the only way for Issei to have seen it was if he somehow entered the other world and befriended one of their deities. Something that I assure you is downright impossible, concluded the devil. But you whatever argument that Kiba had died unspoken as both the devils flinched and started shivering, feeling an overwhelming amount of power and lust coming from the gym. Without saying a word, the two devils rushed towards the building, meeting up with the rest of Rias' peerage along with Sona's on the way. As the group of devils ran towards the gym, they felt the power and lust from the building dissipate and began to pick up the pace. Once they arrived at the entrance, everyone readied themselves for combat as the doors opened, and low gasps of shock echoed from everyone present. Scathach grinned as she saw his shocked expression, surprised. This is the Gibalg that I gave to Cuchulainn. Part of the deal I made with Lug and Morrigan here was to get it back in exchange for my help. The immortal witch then frowned. Honestly, when they told me what was happening, I thought they were mistaken. It should be impossible for there to be two Gibalgs, and yet here they are. Scathach's spear's tip began glowing a wide red light as she looked at Issei's spear with an almost pleading expression on her face. Now, if there are two Gibalgs, does that mean that one is stronger than the other? Could yours be able to do what mine could not? Without waiting for a response, Scathach attacked with a slow jab, expecting the human to once again fail to react in time, only to be surprised as she heard the two red spears give a resounding clang as they met. The immortal witch's eyes widened slightly as Issei used his Gibalg to block her strike before deflecting it away from him, creating an opening in her guard as he slammed the blunt end of the spear into her stomach. Scathach was stunned, not from the pain of the blow, which she barely felt, but from the surprise of the unexpected attack itself. His skills have increased dramatically, she noted, analytically eyeing his form as she backed up. Compared to the start of the spar where he was barely passing as an amateur spearman, these new strikes were precise and masterful, but most of all they were familiar. So that card somehow imprints Cuchulainn's fighting style into him, she mused as the witch lazily dodged a jab at her. However, it was clear that while the boy may have the knowledge, he still didn't have the experience, speed or strength to go with it, causing little mistakes to occur. Overextending in his swing every now and then or stumbling when his attacks were unexpectedly blocked by her Gibalg. They were only small mistakes, and against anyone else, they would have meant nothing, but Scathach had taught Cuchulainn everything he knew, often sparring with the hero at full strength and coming out on top. There was no way she could lose to this flawed and weaker style that Issei used, and everyone knew it as the boy's spear kept getting deflected with a lazy ease. Scathach, I think this has gone on long enough, don't you? Sighed Morrigan as she watched the one-sided beatdown. The immortal witch just shook her head at her companion. Not yet, he looks like he still has some fight left in him, she replied in an approving tone as Issei picked himself up from the ground. See, laughed Scathach as she deflected Issei's attack before tripping him over as he passed her and placed her Gibalg above his, while his own was resting tip first into the floorboards. Not bad, Issei, but if my student couldn't beat me, then you must know that you stand no chance, she commented with a competitive grin. You never know until you try, right? Smirked Issei, and Scathach immediately sensed the familiar feeling of rune magic beneath her. Glancing down, her eyes widened as she saw the rune that Issei had carved into floorboards with his spear begin to glow brightly before a brilliant sphere of light enveloped the two of them and blinding the witch. So it's not just his fighting style that is inherited. Clever boy, using a rune of light like that, she thought in approval. Include Archer. Scathach heard the twin announcements as her eyesight returned, and the witch saw Issei standing in front of her with Gibalg ready and a large black bow stored on his back. Oi boy, why did you activate that card? You must realize that Atalanta's bow isn't going to help you in this fight, right? frowned Morrigan as she eyed Issei and caused Scathach's eyes to widen in surprise. "Go ahead. I shall pass in front of you afterward like a squall," quoted the teen in response with a grin before bringing his spear up to block Scathach's incoming blow, shocking the two females. "How well do you two know the legend of the chaste huntress?" asked Issei as he blocked another of her strikes, causing a frown to appear on Scathach's face before she began picking speed. Scathach suddenly found herself on the receiving end of Issei's gibalg and had to quickly abandon her attack and bring her own spear up to deflect the counterattack. The two gibalgs creating a shower of sparks as they clashed. "What's going on? Even if I'm only at half speed, he shouldn't be able to keep up with me." Atalanta was often fond of letting her opposing racers get a head start in her foot races before overtaking them and winning. In fact, some even believed that as long as she let her opponents move first, she could predict the outcome and change it in her favor. Elaborated Issei as he continued blocking each of Scathach's strikes, the witch moving so fast that she wasn't even visible to the human eye anymore. Scathach just blinked and laughed as she stopped her assault while giving Issei an approving nod. "If you can't react to my attacks, then the next best thing is to try and predict them. You really are a resourceful one, aren't you?" The immoral witch then gained a hopeful look on her face as the gibalg she held began glowing a deep crimson and lust filled the room. "Scathach, what are you doing? We don't want to kill him," shouted Morrigan. Scathach just ignored the goddess as she stared at her opponent. "Issei Hayadu, activate your gibalg. If you don't, then you will die," she promised as her hopeful expression morphed into a blank face. "I need to know which is more powerful. I need to know if he can grant me my wish," she thought, desperately as the tip of her spear started shaking in anticipation. The teen just gave her a sad look but did as he was told, and the room was illuminated with twin crimson glows. "Both of you stop. The boundary field can't take much more," ordered Morrigan desperately, only to be ignored as both combatants continued funneling power into their spears. The entire dojo was caught up in a maelstrom as the doors and windows began shaking from the force of the crimson energies swirling around the room and forming around the two red lances. However, it was clear that Scathach's spear was by far the superior as it gathered more and more of the crimson light, dwarfing the amount surrounding Issei's. "Is that weak excuse really the best your gibalg can do?" sighed Scathach sadly, as her wish was again out of reach. "I suppose it was wishful thinking that I could overpower you in only the include state, but don't you dare insult Cuchulainn's symbol," growled Issei fiercely, and the witch watched as the boosted gear on his arm began to glow. When she looked at the gauntlet, Scathach raised an eyebrow in confusion as it appeared to look more evolved than before, with a second jewel now glowing as well as the first. "I'll show you the real power of gibalg," promised Issei as he glared at her. Suddenly the crimson energy surrounding Issei's spear expanded rapidly until it was even rivaling the amount forming around Scathach's, and still it kept growing. Morrigan and Scathach just watched in awe as the entire building began shaking from the forces that were now assaulting it, windows shattering and the doors struggling to stay upright. As the two looked back at Issei, they instantly gasped as the teen's pupils narrowed to familiar beast-like slits, his iris glowing a bright orange as he jumped backwards and crouched in a stance similar to a runner's before a race. The two females blinked, and no longer were they looking at a teenage boy but Cuchulainn himself, surrounded by the swirling mass of crimson energy. He called the figure, sounding as if two people were speaking at once, and the crimson energy condensed into the spear's tip. With that announcement, Scathach watched as just before he was going to activate gibalg, the image of Cuchulainn disappeared and the boy suddenly collapsed to the ground. The energy that condensed around his spear disappearing along with gibalg and Tauropolos, which reverted back to their card forms. Dismissing her own spear, Scathach and Morrigan turned to look at each other in complete and utter shock before they approached the downed teen. "What just happened?" questioned the witch as they stared at Issei. "A side effect of the boosted gear. He must have gone past the limits of his body," replied Morrigan as she knelt down in front of the teen's form and picked up the Lancer card. "That's not what I meant, and you know it," growled Scathach as she checked Issei for injuries. The goddess of death just shook her head in confusion. "I don't know." It felt as if their souls were joining, merging, becoming one. Morrigan then sighed before she picked up the archer card and put both of the cards back in their holder as she lifted up Issei's prone body. "Come on, we need to get out of here," she ordered and headed for the door. "Why?" Scathach frowned in confusion before her eyes widened. "Oh, that's why." The goddess shook her head again. "I told you the boundary field couldn't handle any more power. Now every person that has even the tiniest sensing ability within 6 blocks will have felt the two of you." Scathach growled softly but said nothing in response as the two of them quickly carried Issei out of the ruined dojo. All in all, it was quite the first day of school for the two Celts. "What happened here?" gasped Rias as the group took in the sight of the wrecked gym. "Tsubasa, Tamo, Saji, send word to the staff that the gym has been closed due to structural failure, then block off the area. We don't want any normal students walking in here until we've assessed the situation," ordered Sona. "Understood," replied the three devils as they nodded and left the building. The Citriaris then turned to her remaining peerage members. "The rest of you spread out and see if you can find any clues about what happened here." "You all do the same," ordered Rias to her peerage, whom just started searching the area as Gremory Eris approached her Citri counterpart. "What do you think happened here, Sona?" "I know you already have some ideas," whispered Rias softly. A fight clearly. Judging from the fact that it occurred in the gym, we can assume that it was likely a spar that got out of hand. We also know that they have to be students or they wouldn't have access to or knowledge of this area, replied the other devil as with an annoyed frown. Which means that QO Academy has been infiltrated. The question now is, by who and how long? Agreed the redhead. Sona's frown just deepened. It might have been a coincidence, but today we got 2 new transfer students from out of the country. You checked their backgrounds right? Questioned Rias, causing her fellow king to nod with a sigh. Everything checked out and our reports indicated that they weren't members of any of the 3 factions, replied Sona. What if they weren't from any of the biblical factions? You said they were from abroad, correct? What country did they come from? Asked the Gremory heiress as a worried frown crossed her face. The paperwork said they were from Ireland. Whether that is true or not remains to be seen, replied Sona, only to narrow her eyes as Ria's worried expression grew. Rias, I know that expression anywhere. You know something, don't you? Rias quickly glanced at their peerages, making sure they were out of hearing range as she nodded. I think we might be dealing with the Celts. The Celts? Impossible. Rias, they haven't shown any interest in devils before. Why start now? Countered Citrieris. I don't think it was us they were interested in, muttered the Gremory clan member in response. What do you mean, Rias? If they weren't here for us, then who? Asked Sona. Issei Hayatu, announced Rias, bringing a stunned expression her fellow king's face before Sona's demonic aura began leaking out. Sona, are you okay? Asked her friend in concern at this strange behavior. Of course it would involve him, growled the Citri clan member as she turned back to Rias. What does he have to do with any of this? Rias just raised an eyebrow at this as she responded. Right before this happened, my knight, Kiba, and I were discussing an unusual sacred gear that Issei had. Akashi, the demonic spear you wanted us to look up. What has that got to do with any of this? Replied the member of the Citri clan. The redhead just sighed. Kiba proposed that Issei's sacred gear could copy any legendary weapon that its user saw. That Sona was left speechless as she thought about the implications of such a sacred gear. A whole host of legendary weapons at a single person's command. Worse couldn't have been started for less. The devil gave silent praise that the original Excalibur had been broken years ago. If the church had had the ability to make multiples of the most powerful holy sword in existence, they would have wiped out her kind years ago. As it was, they had enough trouble with those damned fragments that the sword left behind after its destruction. My reaction exactly, replied Rias as she noted her friend's horrified expression. Rias, this is very bad. Please tell me that Kiba was wrong, asked Sona with a pleading tone in her voice. Much to her horror, Rias' frown only deepened. He believed that Akashi was actually a copy of the Celtic cursed spear, Gibolg, but that left one major problem. How did Issei Hayatu see the original? Sighed the student council president. The redhead nodded. Exactly, that left 2 possibilities. Either Kiba was wrong and Akashi has nothing to do with Gibolg ... or Issei has friends among the Celts. Sona pinched the bridge of her as she replied in an exasperated voice. So you think that members of the Celts snuck into QO Academy to visit their friend? Rias, why would they bother? They could have just gone through the official channels if they wanted to. We'd be happy to host them. It would show the world that we aren't the monsters they think we are. That's exactly why they didn't, Sona, replied the Gremory heiress, bringing a confused look to her friend's face. Think about how much attention would be put on Issei, the reclusive Celts finally venturing out of the other world and befriending him. He would be watched day and night, manipulated, and Mao knows what else to take advantage of his connection to them, nodded Sona, and the 2 heiresses frowned as memories of their own pasts caught up to them. Still, you're making a lot of assumptions, Rias. We don't know for sure if the Celts are responsible for this, reminded the Citri heiress. Rias was about to reply when she was interrupted by the sound of Tsubaki calling them over. Kaichu, I think I've found something. Everyone stopped what they were doing and approached the Citri queen as she pointed down to a symbol carved into the wooden floor of the sparring area. Everyone except Sona stared at the symbol in confusion while the Citri heiress' eyes just narrowed as she crouched down to examine it before giving a tired sigh. Well, Rias, looks like you were right after all, she announced with a shake of her head. What do you mean, Sona? You recognize that symbol? Asked Rias, receiving a nod in return. I've seen it from some of my sister's journals. You are aware that my sister is in charge of foreign affairs, correct? She was sent various books on the different factions around the world to help with her job, not that she ever pays attention to them, explained Sona as everyone focused on her. What we are looking at is rune magic, Rias. It is a form of magic originally developed by the Norse ... and perfected by the Celts, she finished with a frown before standing back up. We need to find Issei. Maybe he'll be able to explain to us what's going on. I'll send Kiba to go collect him from class, replied Rias as Kiba nodded and headed for the door. He won't be there, informed Sona with an almost embarrassed look replacing her usual stoic expression. What do you mean by that, Sona? Questioned the Gremory as she frowned at her friend's repeatedly strange behavior. Kaichu sent Hayatu-san to give the new transfer students a tour around the school. They could be anywhere on campus, explained Tsubaki after it became clear that Sona wouldn't respond. What? Why did you do that? Asked Rias curiously. That's not important. What matters is finding him, and that's what we should focus on, stuttered Sona as she walked out of the room with her peerage running after her. Rias and her peers looked at each other with shocked expressions. Did they just hear Sona Sitri stutter? Something that previously only her sister could cause. This day has just been one big bag of surprises, thought Rias with amusement. Issei groaned as he opened his eyes and looked around, only to find himself alone in the school infirmary. How did I end up here? He thought, groggily as he got up from the bed and noticed a necklace with a note lying on the bedstand next to him. Dedrag, what happened? How did we get here? He asked, trying to ignore the massive headache he had. I see, blinked Issei as he picked up the necklace and examined it. It seemed like an ordinary marble rock attached to a string, nothing odd about it until he flipped it over and saw the large number of black runes that had been carved into the stone. Placing the necklace back on the desk, Issei picked up the note before sighing as he opened it up and frowned as he read it. Hello Issei. Unfortunately, we weren't able to be here when you woke up. I might have scared the devils slightly with our spar. I'm sure you're wondering why we approached you, but sadly we don't have time to explain, so we'll have to talk about it later. However, near this note you will see a necklace with runes carved along one side. This is to remain on your person at all times. You are not to take it off under any circumstances, and before you ask, it's for your sake more than ours. Don't worry, you'll be seeing us again real soon. I don't want to miss any time with my new sparring partner. Your new best friend, Scathach. P.S. You tell the devils about us and I'll kill you, okay? Good, glad you understand. Issei just shook his head as he pondered what he'd done in a previous life to deserve this kind of treatment. First a trolling magician, now an immortal witch and goddess of death. What's next? My childhood friend turns out to be an overenthusiastic exorcist. No, that'll never happen. Elsewhere, a certain Arena Shidu sneezed. Issei shoved the note in his pocket and just put the necklace around his neck with a shrug as he tucked the stone behind his shirt. Man, Sensei is going to be mad at me for missing so much class. Still, at least it can't get any worse, he muttered, depressed. Issei should have remembered what happened last time he tempted fate. Issei-kun, I found you. Come quick, we don't have a lot of time, cried a familiar voice as the teen felt someone grab his hand before dragging him down the corridors. What's the occasion? Asked Issei as the two groups of devils just stared at him in disbelief. Issei, where were you for the past 20 minutes? We've been searching for you, replied Rias, with a frown. Unconscious in the infirmary probably? Why? Answered Issei truthfully. Everyone shared a look at his response. Issei, why were you in the infirmary? Asked the Gremory heiress. He was about to respond when the teen spotted something outside the clubroom window, a large black crow watching him with a familiar glare. Dedrag, is that who I think it is? Asked Issei, remembering what the note had said. Agreeing with the dragon wholeheartedly, Issei sighed and plastered a fake embarrassed expression on his face. I kind of fell down the stairs while giving those two transfer students a tour. I woke up in the infirmary about 2 minutes before Kiba found me. Oh really? You fell down the stairs, did you? Replied Sona as she gave off a smug yet hostile atmosphere. You don't seem to be injured from your little trip, and neither does your uniform look dirty from the floor. You must be quite lucky, mustn't you, Hayaru-san? Issei just shuddered in fear from the amount of pain that was promised with that one word before laughing nervously. Why yeah, that's me, good old lucky Issei. Shut up, Dedrag. It's not my fault that the universe is out to get me, growled the teen as Dedrag's laughter echoed across his head. Issei, I'm going to be straight with you, so please do the same with me. Do you know of the spear called Gibalg? Questioned the Gremory heiress. The teen felt his run cold as he tried to maintain a confused expression. Judging from the look the two heiress sent him, he wasn't entirely successful. Gibalg, what's that? Never heard of it. Sounds made up, he replied with another nervous laugh. Rias just frowned while Sona grinned evilly and the others glared at him. Issei, my brother is the father of lies. If you want to deceive me, you'll have to do better than that. Issei just sighed before he looked out the window at the crow that was still watching him with unblinking eyes. What makes you think that I know anything about this Gibalg? Akashi, for one, your spear bears a remarkable resemblance to the Celtic cursed spear, answered Rias with a raised eyebrow. I don't know what to tell you, coincidence maybe. Shrugged Issei. Sona suddenly approached Issei, her hostile aura increasing. You're lying. Kaichu, I know you're mad that I beat you chess, but you should stop making baseless accusations, argued Issei, hiding his growing fear behind a smug grin. You beat Sona in chess. When? Exclaimed Rias in shock, momentarily forgetting about the purpose of this meeting in the wake of this new information. Sona sent a deadly glare at Issei, who ignored it entirely. Just this morning, I made a bet over a chess game and won. Right, Kaichu? The Sitri heiress gritted her teeth in anger as the temperature in the room dropped a couple of degrees before slowly nodding her head. Congratulations on your new engagement, Issei-kun, said Akino with an amused smile. Sona just froze as an expression of horror crossed her face while Issei looked at Akino in confusion. Engagement? What are you talking about, Akino-san? Rias just burst into laughter. Sona didn't tell you. As part of her marriage contract, she will only marry the man who can beat her in chess. Congratulations, Sona. I hope you two are happy together. I'm sure the two of you will make a nice couple. We're not a couple, shouted the both of them, only to blink and glance at each other in surprise. Look at the two of you. Already so in sync with each other. Truly young love, teased Akino while Rias continued giggling softly into her hand. To the shock of everyone present, the Citriaris actually gained an embarrassed blush before coughing as her calm stoic expression returned. The match wasn't sanctioned by the Citri family, so it isn't counted by my contract. That's a shame. Still, at least that means there's still a chance for you, right, Butchu? Sighed Aquino before she turned to her king, whose face rapidly turned the same shade as her hair. Aquino, I told you we're not like that, she shouted angrily. Issei just watched the interactions between the devils with a confused expression as he began inching towards the eggs, only to stop as he felt a strong hand grab his shirt and the teen was lifted up into the air. Flailing wildly in the air, Issei looked down to see what had grabbed him and was shocked to see Kaneko lifting him up one-handed as she carried him back to the middle of the room. Not done yet, informed the white-haired girl as put him back on the ground. Ara, Issei-kun, you weren't planning on leaving without permission, were you? Do so again and I might have to punish my little Kohai, said Aquino with a sadistic smirk as lightning began crackling around her fingertips. Gidrag, if there's one thing I've learned in these past couple of days, it's that there is no such thing as a normal girl, sighed Issei in response. Say, Issei, cried Rias, snapping him from his thoughts. Sorry Rias, I zoned out for a second there, he apologized. I was asking who those two transfer students are and how you knew them, repeated the devil. Issei just frowned as he saw the crow outside focus on him. What makes you think that I know them? That necklace you have around your neck, I know Celtic runes when I see them, replied Sona as she took over that investigation. Issei's eyes widened as he looked down and sure enough saw the rune necklace that Scathach gave him hanging around his neck. It must have fallen out while I was flailing from Karniko, he realized with a sigh. Alright, so I do know them, we met online a while back. They wanted to learn Japanese and I wanted to learn Gaelic. Eventually we became friends and I convinced them to come study here, he lied, making Sona grin triumphantly. If that's true then you should speak Gaelic, correct? Asked the Citriaris. Sure, answered Issei. After all, the chances of anyone here actually speaking the language was slim to nil. Funny thing about devils, Hayadu-san, we are able to speak all human languages, including Gaelic. She smirked and immediately said something to Issei in another language, causing Issei's hope to sink like a stone. The teen smirked as he repeated what Didrag said, is a cata dare tu mo bin chail de or. Sona's triumphant smirk faded into a shocked expression that quickly evolved into an angered one as the floorboards beneath the devil's feet turned to ice. Looking out the window, Issei could have sworn he saw amusement in the eyes of the crow observing him. Nice work, Didrag, what did you say? He congratulated his friend. Beats me, I'm just the messenger here, partner. Before Issei could respond, Rias spoke up. Issei, we know that your two friends are aware of the supernatural world. Please tell us who they really are. Everyone was silent as they looked at Issei, who gave them a sigh. It's not my place to tell you. If they want you to know, they'll tell you themselves. Don't worry though, they're not here to cause trouble for you all. Then explain how the gym was destroyed, replied Sona with a small growl, causing everyone to stare at the normally composed heiress in shock. Aw, that ... well, that was just a bit of fun that got out of hand, answered Issei sheepishly as he rubbed the back of his head. Sona's eye began twitching and the heiress started trembling as the temperature in the room plummeted. You're telling me ... that you destroyed ... the entire gym of my school ... for a bit of fun? Issei just laughed nervously and backed away towards the door as Sona started approaching him again. Is there an answer I can give that doesn't result in me turning into a popsicle? He asked, only for the devil's eyes to narrow in anger. Didrag, a little help please, begged the teen. As the dragon explained the plan, Issei's eyes widened and his face blanched. Didrag, are you insane? She'll kill me. This is not going to end well, sighed Issei quietly before walking up to Sona. Any last words, Hayadu-san? Smiled the devil. Issei didn't respond and instead leaned in towards the heiress face and, to the shock of everyone present, ate her on the lips. Sona's eyes became dinner plates while everyone else's jaws just dropped in comedic expressions of shock. As the broke off, Issei stepped back and braced himself for the retaliatory attack, only to see Sona stunned stiff. Blinking in confusion, Issei just waved a hand in front of her blank, unseeing eyes and again got no reaction from the heiress. I think I broke her, he said to the others, ignoring the shocked, amused or downright horrified expressions that were being sent his way. So are we done here? Rias just nodded slowly, still trying to get over the shock of what just happened and bringing a smile to his face. Before I forget, Madohama and Matsuda wanted to know if you all knew any girls that would be willing to date them. There was silence as everyone just continued staring at him, everyone except Kaneko, who snapped out of her trance before nodding and writing down a number on a piece of paper and handing it to him. Issei smiled at her and patted the white-haired girl on the head, only to frown as he swore he heard the sound of a cat purring. Thanks Kaneko-chan, I really appreciate it. Let's see here, Miltan. That's an odd name, pondered Issei as he looked at the piece of paper. She's perfect for them, senpai, replied Kaneko. Issei frowned as he thought he saw an evil smile appear on stoic girl's face, but it disappeared quickly. No, there's no way innocent Kaneko-chan is actually evil, is there? He thought, worried. Shaking his head, Issei put the thought aside as he pocketed the paper. Thanks Kaneko-chan, I'll give it to them later. The teen then headed to the door only to stop as it was half opened and turned back to the room of devils. You don't need my help to find out who they are, Rias. You already have all the information you need, you just have to put it together. Don't overthink it and the answer will reveal itself. With that, Issei shut the door, just in time to hear Sona scream, "Where is he? I quote I'll kill him." Looks like Sona snapped out of it. That means it's time to go, thought the teen fearfully as he ran down the corridors to the exit, only looking back to see twin ice spears pierce the door he had been leaning against moments before, freezing the entire door in a solid block of ice. Running out of the old school building, the teen was never so happy to hear the end of day bell ring as he evacuated the school premises. Running away happily, Issei failed to pay attention to where he was going and collided with someone, sending the two of them sprawling across the ground. Groaning, the teen picked himself up from the ground before looking to see who he hit, helping the nun up with a smile. "Sorry about that, my name's Issei," he introduced, warmly. "It's nice to meet you, Issei. I'm Asia," replied the nun happily. "So Asia, where are you from? If you don't mind me asking," asked Issei, curiously as the two of them walked down the street. "Oh, I'm from Italy," replied the nun, only for both of them to stop as they heard a child crying. Asia walked over to the sobbing boy who had a cut along his knee and smiled. "If you're a boy, you shouldn't be crying over a little scrap like this." Issei's eyes widened as he saw a green light surround the sprout out from the nun's hands and surround the boy's injuries before the wound closed itself back up. "Oi, Dreg, is that what I think it is?" he asked with a frown. "There, the wound is gone now. It's completely fine now," assured the blonde. The boy wiped away his tears and smiled up at her. "Thank you, One-chan." The boy just ran off while Asia turned back to Issei. "I must have surprised you," she said with a sad smile. Issei just laughed. "Asia, compared to what I deal with on a daily basis, and it'll take more than a sacred gear to surprise me." Asia blinked as she stared at him. "You know about sacred gears, Issei?" The teen nodded and decided to quickly change the topic. "Your power is pretty amazing, Asia," he complimented. The nun gave him a pained look that quickly faded to a sad smile as she replied, "They are fantastic powers, bestowed upon me by God." "Your expression says otherwise," noted Issei with a frown, causing Asia to flinch. Seeing this, Issei sighed before placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder and giving her a warm smile. "If you don't want to talk about it, then that's fine. But just remember that I'm always willing to lend an ear if you need it, Asia." A grateful smile spread across Asia's face. "Thank you, Issei. I'm really glad I got to meet someone as nice and gentle as you as soon as I got to Japan." "Is this your first time here?" asked the teen curiously, only to grin and grab Asia's hand as she nodded in reply. "In that case, let me show you around the place. I'll show you the best places around here," offered Issei eagerly, trying to bring back the happy atmosphere they had both shared. Asia nodded and Issei smiled as the two of them headed into the shopping district, causing the teen to wonder just how Asia had grown up as a child. She was clearly baffled by even the most common things. Seriously, who doesn't know how to eat a cheeseburger? To make matters worse, she couldn't read any Japanese, much to Issei's shock. "Asia, who taught you to speak Japanese? They were obviously a terrible teacher if they didn't bother teaching you to read and write it," scoffed Issei as the duo walked into the park. "They decided that all I needed to know was how to speak it, so they didn't teach me your writing system," answered the nun. "That's odd. Well, don't worry, I'll teach you," smiled Issei as he began writing down the basic hiragana in the dirt. The duo then spent the next hour teaching Asia the basics of the hiragana writing system, enjoying the peaceful atmosphere until the nun gave a soft sigh. "Issei, can I tell you a story?" asked Asia, quietly. The teen just raised an eyebrow as he looked at the nun in confusion and frowned as he saw her sad expression. "Sure, Asia, like I said, I'm all ears." The nun just looked sadly at the setting sun. "Once upon a time there was a girl who wanted nothing more than to help others. Then one day she found that she had been given a gift from God, a power to help all those who needed it. In gratitude, the girl devoted her life to serving God. Her fellow believers, believing her to be a miracle of the Lord, hid her away from others so that they couldn't hurt their holy priestess, cutting her off from the very people she wanted to help," continued Asia as Issei remained silent. Day after day she was left in isolation. Her only comfort was found in prayer to her Lord. But even then, not even her faith could fight off the depressing loneliness that pressed down on her. No one to talk to, no friends to have fun with. Eventually she gave in, and left her shelter to see the outside world. Her faith wasn't strong enough to pass that trial, said Asia, and the teen saw her eyes begin to water. A single tear rolled down the nun's cheek. Along the way she found an injured man, no, an injured devil, someone that was meant to be her enemy, and she healed him. Her fellow believers saw this and were shocked. There was no way that any gift from God would heal a devil. They cast her out, calling her a witch and a heretic. It wasn't her fault, she just wanted to help. Issei just stared at the nun and his eyes widened as the image of the crying Asia was replaced by the sight of a sobbing girl in a purple kimono with fox ears and a tail. "That damn demon fox, find it and kill it, now," screamed a man as Mizuki heard the growls of the hunting hounds getting louder. Why did this happen? She only wanted to serve others, to help them. She didn't ask to become like this. She didn't poison her beloved Toba. Why wouldn't they believe her? She cried as pain traveled up her legs from her bleeding feet. They said they cared for her, said that they would protect her, that they would take care of her. They said that they loved her. So why did they betray her like that? Can't they see it? It wasn't her fault he was sick, sobbed Mizuki, only to fall over in the mud as she tripped. "You have come a long way," stated a male voice. "What a rough journey you had," commented another voice. Picking herself up from the ground, Mizuki looked around and spotted two foxes staring at her with amusement. "Don't mock me. Why can't you understand what I'm feeling? Why can't you just offer me some sympathy? She ordered, angrily. If that is your wish, milady Amaterasu, they replied in unison. Amaterasu, murmured the fox girl before she groaned as sealed memories returned in a massive rush of images. That's right, she remembered now, her fascination with humans. Her wish to use her powers for justice, her desire to understand the enigma that is humans. To know what it felt like to devote herself to someone else, to feel the joy her followers do, the dreams of a childish goddess. Ah, what a fool I was, she sighed. Indeed, it was foolish to think that a deity could live among her subjects. Humans by their nature are afraid of what they don't understand. Even though she did nothing wrong, they betrayed her and hunted her down like an animal. The fox spirit looked up as a group of armed men approached her, crying form, Tamamo no Mi, you are hereby sentenced to death for instigating rebellion and attempting to murder the emperor. Men, kill the fox demon. A group of armed humans against a facet of a goddess. The outcome was inevitable and all the humans were slaughtered to the last. Tamamo just looked at the carnage she'd inflicted with horror. She tried to reason with the others, but hatred now filled their minds. For 3 straight days and nights they rained arrows down on her, their arrows blotting out the sun and moon. Covered in her own, Tamamo looked up as another volley of arrows were incoming. I wasn't trying to fool anyone. I'll leave now, so please just forget all about me. Just before the volley hit, a single tear ran down her face. It wasn't my fault. I just wanted to help. Issei frowned before shaking the lingering images from his mind as the teen focused back on Asia, only to blink in confusion as he saw a ghostly image of the fox girl next to her. Ignoring the fox girl for now, Issei just crouched down next to Asia before wiping away her tears with a smile on his face. I think that girl has nothing to be ashamed of, Asia. No one should suffer through torment like that. After all, it's human nature to want to be with others. In fact, I think you should be proud. You decided to fight against your fate instead of just lying down and accepting it, he replied, causing her to stop crying as she looked at him with a surprised expression. Let them call you a witch and a heretic. Let them waste their breath. They don't understand the pain and suffering you've gone through. But I do, and I'm telling you that you're none of those things. You're merely a person who wants to help others. And that fact alone makes you a better person than half those so-called holy men, finished Issei with a warm smile. Asia just stared at him in shock before embracing him in a hug as she cried onto his shoulder. Issei returned the hug and softly comforted the sobbing nun. Looking up, the teen saw the ghostly figure of the fox girl, still there watching the two of them with an almost sad and longing look on her face. I wasn't just talking about Asia, mouthed Issei silently to the ghostly figure, whom looked at him in surprise before a smile spread across her face as she dissipated. That's the second time I've seen specters like that. Is this a side effect of the cards? I'll go see Zelretch after this. Maybe he'll actually give me a straight answer for a change, he thought with a sigh as the two broke off their hug. Thank you for everything, Issei. I really needed it, spoke Asia as she wiped tears away from her eyes. I only told you the truth, Asia. You don't need to thank me for that, replied Issei, bringing an embarrassed flush to the nun's face. Asia then clapped her hands together in prayer as she closed her eyes. Oh Lord, please bless this man's kind soul and protect him from darkness. Issei just laughed. Thanks, Asia. With the way my luck has been recently, I'll take any bit of help I can get. The nun nodded happily before she smiled and gave Issei another hug, causing Issei to laugh again as he returned the gesture. However, as they split apart, Issei blinked as he felt a headache split his skull in two with the caster card glowing slightly. Asia, Asia, shouted Issei as he shook her unmoving body. Oh, looks like you failed after all. Such a shame. But with her sacred gear, not even you can beat me, gloated a familiar female voice. The teen began trembling as he stood up and faced the woman with a rage-filled expression. That was a mistake. Issei, are you all right? Questioned a worried Asia as she stared at him. What was that? Frowned Issei as he shook the memories from his mind and gave Asia a small smile. Don't worry, Asia, it's just a headache, nothing to worry about. If you say so, Issei. I have to go now. The others will be waiting for me, informed the nun sadly. Don't worry, Asia, we'll meet again. I'm sure of it, assured Issei with another smile and waved as the nun walked off. Issei sighed as he walked into the maid cafe that a certain trolling magician had claimed as his new home and braced himself for the slide through the floor as he entered, only to blink as the floor tiles remained solid. What the? He muttered as he lowered his guard. A big mistake. The minute he let his guard drop, the floor beneath him vanished, and Issei was once again sent tumbling down to the underground cavern. Zelretch. Hitting the ground with a painful thud, the teen struggled to his feet and saw the troll staring at him with an amused smile. You called? He asked, smugly. Must not stab, muttered Issei in his head as his hand twitched towards his card holder, while Zelretch looked at the teen's arm before nodding approvingly. So you unlocked your sacred gear, did you? Congratulations, exclaimed the magician in a cheery yet irritating tone. So you did know. I figured as much, growled Issei through gritted teeth as the boosted gear appeared on his arm. Of course I knew. A longinus isn't exactly the most subtle thing, Issei-kun, even in their dormant states. No offense, D-Drake, replied Zelretch, causing Issei's unhealthy eye twitch to return with a vengeance. And why exactly did you not tell me? No, wait, I know. It wouldn't be as entertaining for you if I knew, would it? Sighed Issei as the magician nodded happily and placed a hand on the teen's shoulder. Ah, Issei-kun. You know me so well, said Zelretch with a fake sob as he wiped away non-existent tears from his face. Must not stab, chanted Issei as he felt his hand close around the Lancer card before letting go as he took deep breaths. Remembering his original purpose for coming here, Issei took the magician's hand of his shoulder and fixed Zelretch with a serious look that brought a raised eyebrow to the old man's face. "Zelretch, I have some questions for you," informed the teen. "I see," replied the magician with a serious expression before nodding. "Well, Issei-kun, when a mommy and a daddy love each other very much." "Not that," cried the teen. Zelretch smacked a fist into his open palm as an understanding smile spread across his face. "Oh, now I understand. You see, Issei-kun, you're reaching the age where your body is changing. Hormones are flooding through your body, your voice is breaking, and you're noticing some strange feelings stirring. I want to ask about the class cards." "You goddamn troll," shouted Issei as his eye continued twitching violently and he took out the Lancer card. "Oh, is that all? You should have just simply said so, Issei-kun, would have saved us both some time," remarked Zelretch in a scolding tone. "Must not stab, must not stab, must not stab," growled the teen as the Lancer card began glowing while his eye continued its non-stop twitching. "Zelretch, do these cards have side effects to using them?" he asked, once his temper subsided. The magician just frowned as he stared at the teen. "What do you mean by side effects, Issei?" Seeing that the troll was finally taking him seriously, Issei elaborated. "Well, recently I've been seeing memories of the heroic spirits past for one. Odd but not that unusual, the heroic spirits are stored in the cards themselves after all. In fact, that's probably a good sign. It means your connections to the cards are growing. By the way, congratulations on unlocking Atalanta. I didn't think you had it in you," laughed the magician. "Gee, thanks for the loving support," grumbled Issei before shaking his head as he got back on topic. "What about seeing the heroic spirits while I'm awake?" Zelretch just waved this concern away with a laugh. "Issei-kun, I think you're simply hallucinating from stress and exhaustion. It is impossible to see servants in the outside world. The class cards simply don't work like that." "I know what I saw, Zelretch. Both Cuchulainn and Tamamo appeared before me in broad daylight," argued the teen. "You know about Tamamo. Interesting. And did anyone else see them?" asked Zelretch with raised eyebrows. "Well, no," answered Issei as he thought back to the number of people that completely ignored Tamamo when she appeared, including Asia herself. An irritating grin spread across Zelretch's face. "So you're saying no one else can see them but you? Tell me, Issei-kun, are they in the room with us right now?" Issei just growled. "I know what you're doing. I'd like to talk to these ghosts, Issei-kun," continued Zelretch, ignoring the death glares being sent towards him. "Stop psychoanalyzing me. I'm not crazy, damn it." "Deedrag saw them too, right, Deedrag?" asked Issei, only to growl at the dragon's amused response. "Deedrag, don't you start. One troll in my life is bad enough, I don't need a second," shouted the teen before taking a deep breath as he turned back to the magician. "Zelretch, I felt one of them touch me, as in physically touch me. These are no hallucinations." Zelretch's eyes widened slightly before a neutral expression appeared on his face. "Issei, I need you to describe exactly what they looked like, leave no detail out." Blinking at the magician's sudden change in attitude, Issei nodded with a frown as he explained. "They looked exactly like the ones from the memories that I was shown. Only they seemed less solid. They appeared to be almost like a hologram, and yet I felt them touch me." "I see. Sounds like a partial incomplete manifestation, but that shouldn't be possible. The class cards can't manifest servants, not even weak manifestations like that, unless," trailed off Zelretch as he looked at Issei with analyzing eyes. "Yes, that would explain how you were compatible with all 7 cards. How interesting, I didn't expect this to happen," he laughed. "Issei Hayaru, you just keep finding new ways to keep me entertained." "So you know what's going on?" asked Issei, hopefully. The magician just nodded. "I have a theory, yes." Issei's eye began twitching again at this response. "Are you going to tell me about it?" Zelretch just gave him another irritating grin. Come now, Issei-kun, you know me better than that. Rest assured there is nothing to worry about. Now run along, you have a surprise waiting for you when you get home." Realizing he wasn't going to get any more answers from the troll, Issei growled in frustration before he was instantly teleported out of the cavern. Now alone in his cavern, Zelretch smiled. "How interesting. I can't wait to see how this will affect the install states. Still, to think I would find a user here of all places. That damn troll, what has he done this time?" growled Issei as he cautiously opened the door to his house, testing the floor with a stick before he entered. Sighing in relief as the floor remained solid, Issei cautiously made his way into the house, wary of the so-called surprise Zelretch said was waiting for him. The teen was surprised as he heard the sound of his father laughing from the living room, and as he opened the door, Issei blinked before slamming the door shut again. "Nope, I'm hallucinating. They're not really there," denied the teen desperately as he rubbed his eyes and opened the door again, praying the sight would disappear. Unfortunately, the sight didn't disappear, and Issei just sighed again as he saw his father laughing with a smiling Scathach while Morrigan was staring at him from across the room. "Oh, Issei, about time you got back. We've been waiting for you," greeted the witch as she saw him enter the room. "Scathach, Morrigan, what are you doing here?" he replied as his eye began its twitching again. "Don't you remember, Issei? You offered us a place to stay when you found out that we would be studying here. How could you forget? We've been friends online for years. Don't you remember how we taught each other Japanese and Gaelic?" pouted Scathach, while Morrigan hid a smirk forming on her face. Honestly, Dreg, I'd be more surprised if they weren't, sighed Issei as he just shook his head before walking into the kitchen and grabbing a Coke from the fridge. Downing the soft drink in one go, the teen walked back to rejoin the group with a frown. Well, I did say that, I forgot to inform my dad about it. So Dad, what's the verdict? Kick them out or let them stay? Asked Issei with a smug grin as he turned to his father. Come on, old man, realize there is something suspicious here, prayed the teen as the entire group turned to face his father with expectant expressions. Issei, I agree that you should have asked me about this before making this decision, stated his father with a stern look on his face. Issei was about to cheer in joy at this, only to see his father's expression morph into an eager smile. However, I think this time we can make an exception. What? Choked out Issei. His father just continued, oblivious to the horrified looks being thrown at him from his son. To think my son brought 2 girls home with him, and foreign beauties at that. At last your libido is showing. I was beginning to think you played for the other side. There was silence in the room as they all stared at the old man with various states of disbelief until Issei just shouted at him, "What the hell gave you that idea? Can you blame me? The only time you ever showed interest in women was when you dated Yuma-chan, and you broke off that relationship after the first date," replied his father with raised eyebrows. Dreg, I will find a way into that sacred gear and murder you horrifically, promised Issei as he blushed from hearing a small snickering coming from their 2 visitors. Elsewhere, a certain trolling magician was laughing uncontrollably. You know what? I don't care anymore, sighed Issei before he walked up to his room, realizing that any sense that the world might have once had was well and truly gone. The 3 remaining occupants flinched as they heard the door to the teen's room slamming shut before Mr. Hayato turned to the 2 Celts, his goofy expression changing into a sad smile as he faced them. Sorry about my son, he really is a good kid, apologized the father. I know he's gotten himself involved with something he shouldn't have, stated Mr. Hayato, causing frowns to appear on the faces of the 2 Celts as the man bowed before them. Please look after him, he can be a bit hot-headed and has a tendency to go in over his head. Scathach and Morrigan just glanced at each other before the goddess smiled at Mr. Hayato. I give you my word that we will see to it that your son doesn't come to any harm. Thank you, replied the father in a relieved tone. This is not going to go down well, thought Issei with a sigh as he walked to school with Morrigan and Scathach following close behind him. He could already hear the rumors that were going to be spread when they arrived at school together, let alone if people knew he was living with them. Dreg, at this point I've just learned to go with the flow, sighed Issei. However, the teen's thoughts were interrupted as they all heard the sound of a car screeching and a howl of pain following close behind. The trio stopped and turned around to see a car speeding off into the distance while a girl cried over the broken body of her barely alive dog. Scathach and Issei just watched as Morrigan frowned before she walked up to the child who was crying over the struggling dog. Even though it was still breathing, everyone could tell it was only a matter of time as its broken body's loud wheezing began to grow softer and Issei saw the goddess kneel down in front of the animal. SHH. I know SHH it's okay it's okay, comforted Morrigan as she did the animal's wide fur, causing the dog's pained whines to decrease slightly. Please help her, One-chan. Please, cried the girl, desperately. The goddess of death just leaned down before she began cradling the dog as its breathing started to slow down. It's over now. Alright girl let go let go that's it it's time to go rest now. The animal's shallow breaths finally slowed to a stop as Morrigan softly lowered the pet back to the ground before turning to face the sobbing girl and embracing her in a hug. Issei and Scathach said nothing as they watched the goddess comfort the crying girl. Finally Morrigan gave the dog's body another pat and got up from the ground. Come on, let's go, she ordered as she approached them. That was a nice thing you did, Morrigan. I must say you're not what I expected from a goddess of death, said Issei as they began walking away, hearing the girl's parents rushing over to her. Death is but the end of life, Issei. The accumulation of all that person's experiences, emotions, memories, all coming together for a brief moment. You cannot be a god of death without first respecting and acknowledging the life that came before it, replied Morrigan. Plus Morrigan here wasn't always a goddess of death, she was also the goddess of fertility once upon a time, informed Scathach with a smirk and making Issei's eye widen in surprise. Seeing his stunned expression, Morrigan sighed. Is it really that big of a shock? I told you one cannot hold power over life and death without respecting either. Power over life and death, muttered Issei, and instantly he thought of his mother's lifeless body as he turned to face Morrigan eagerly. Could you have done it? Could you have brought back that girl's dog? The pathways of life and death are not something that should be taken lightly, Issei Hayato, something that those devils and their damned evil pieces seem all too eager to forget, growled the goddess. But can you do it? Can you really bring back the dead? He asked, with a hopeful expression as memories of his mother's smiling face appeared in his mind. Only if they died recently, replied Morrigan, crushing Issei's hope in the blink of an eye as she turned to face him. Seeing his defeated expression, the goddess of death sighed. Tell me, Issei, do you think a life is precious? Do you think it's valuable? What kind of question is that? Of course I do, growled the teen, only to flinch as Morrigan looked at him with firm expression on her face. Why do you value it? She asked, staring at him in the eyes while Scathach just glanced between the two with a sad knowing expression. Issei blinked, stunned at the question being asked by him before frowning as he answered, because of what it represents. The potential for both good and evil, the experiences you can make, the impact you can have. We value it because it's so fragile and most of all, you value it because there is no second chance at it, finished Morrigan as Issei trailed off with an expression of realization on his face. Tell me, Issei, do you think that life loses meaning if one is simply brought back again and again? Death is feared by humans, but at the same time it is what makes life so precious to them. When death has no meaning, is life really that fulfilling? Would you wish to diminish your loved one's existence, their life like that? Issei remained silent as he stared at the goddess whom just turned away from him and looked at the sky with a wistful expression. Issei, do you know why gods like humans? Why they interact with those lower life forms at all? The teen frowned and memories of Tamayo's life reappeared briefly in his mind as he replied, curiosity, longing, envy, fascination, or confusion. Morrigan blinked in surprise as she looked at him before nodding with a smile. That's right, you see, to us immortals, humans are an enigma. Even though you know that death inevitably comes for you, you still manage to be happy, to leave your mark on this world instead of just wallowing in despair. The goddess' smile grew larger as she continued, we immortals are like candles, burning softly throughout the night, but you humans ... you're like brilliant explosions, bright and illuminating but short-lived. However, in that brief time you shine more beautifully than we can ever possibly imagine, and whether they know it or not, every faction is drawn to you, like moths to a flame. Not all humans are like that, you know. Many try to do everything in their power to avoid death. Just look at how many turn into devils to postpone it, pointed out Issei. And in the process they lose something that is precious to them, something that they will come to regret. Believe me, Issei, immortality is not a blessing but a curse in disguise, replied Scathach sadly. You know, Issei, they say there are 3 times a person dies. Once when the body dies, the next is when the body is consigned to the grave. The last, and true death, is when that person's name is spoken for the last time. So as long as you remember them, they're never truly dead, comforted Morrigan as she placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. A tear ran down Issei's cheek as the image of his mother faded away from his mind. I know, but ... is it wrong to want to see her again? I just miss her, you know. Morrigan sighed softly before she replied in a faint whisper as her eyes seemed to well up slightly. The dead should be left in peace, Issei ... and no matter how much we might wish otherwise. The teen just watched as the goddess walked away within shock before he felt a hand on his shoulder and turned to see Scathach giving him a sad smile. Sorry about her. Believe me, she knows what you're feeling. The immortal witch removed her hand from his shoulder as she continued. Did you know she tried to bring back Cuchulainn? What happened? Asked the teen as he wiped away the tears. Scathach just sighed. She nearly caused a civil war within the Celtic pantheon. Eventually she was forced to give up the idea when Lug talked her out of it. Cuchulainn's father. Why? Asked Issei in confusion. He didn't want to risk a civil war that would kill thousands when his son hadn't even been confirmed dead yet. The old guy is still waiting for his son to return home, even after all these years, replied Scathach sadly. Can you imagine what she must feel, knowing she could have brought him back but being forced not to? Asked the witch, causing Issei to stare at the departing goddess with sympathy. I know Morrigan might come across as a bit cold to you, but she really is a kind person, Issei. With her speech done, Scathach walked off after her companion, and just as Issei was about to follow, he heard a loud bark behind him. Cheering around, the teen's eyes widened before a happy smile spread across his face as he watched the crying girl hugging her dog in joy, the canine wagging its tail happily as it edged the girl's face. You should learn to practice what you preach, Morrigan, he murmured with a smile before running after the two of them. Issei remembered what had happened after the last time he tempted fate, and he certainly wasn't going to make that mistake again, which is what led to his current situation. Issei was scared. No, that wasn't right. He was terrified. Why? Because nothing had gone wrong for the whole day. He successfully evaded an angry Sona, made it to school on time, got a passing grade on a surprise test, gave Madohama and Matsuda the phone number from Kaneko. He didn't even have to deal with many rumors from arriving with Morrigan or Scathach. Indeed, the only thing that was out of the ordinary was a request from Rias to deliver a message to one of Kaneko's clients about a need to change the time of their meeting after school. Overall, it was a completely uneventful day. In fact, it was one of the best he'd had in a while. And so Issei was terrified. While most people would be celebrating and crying tears of joy at such a happy occurrence, Issei only grew more and more anxious, waiting for the inevitable bout of bad luck that was sure to strike him. His anxiety only grew as he left the school with Morrigan and Scathach close behind, causing the two to exchange confused glances with each other. Issei, what's wrong? You look like you're about to fight a god to the death, commented Scathach with an amused smile. Nothing's gone wrong yet, murmured Issei worriedly. Wouldn't that be considered a good thing? Replied Morrigan in confusion. The teen just sighed as he turned back to his two companions. I've got to deliver a message for Rias. It shouldn't take any longer than 20 minutes. I'll see you two back at home, providing I survive, of course. Scathach laughed. Oh please, you're just delivering a message, aren't you? What could possibly go wrong? Don't say that, cried Issei, fearfully as he looked up to the sky before shaking his head. You two know the way back, right? Good, tell Dad to just order pizza for dinner tonight. Sure, we'll head back then. I haven't tried pizza before, should be interesting, replied the immortal witch with a wave of her hand. Morrigan frowned at this. Don't take too long, we still have some things to talk about, and remember. I know, keep the necklace on, interrupted Issei as he turned around. Morrigan looked conflicted before she followed her fellow Celt while Issei walked in the opposite direction. Are you sure we shouldn't go with him? Asked the goddess. Scathach scoffed. Now you're starting to sound like Issei. Don't worry, he'll only be gone for 20 minutes. He'll be fine. Not even Cuchulainn himself was that unlucky. Honestly, Morrigan, relax. What could possibly go wrong in 20 minutes? True, conceded the goddess with a nod as they walked back to the Hayadu residence. Meanwhile, Issei was beginning to feel cautiously optimistic since he spent the whole day without tempting fate. He really should have realized that Lady Luck wouldn't let him go that easily. Or that he wasn't the only one that could tempt fate. Hello? Anyone home? Called the teen as he approached the address Rias had given and knocked on the door, only to get silence in response. Frowning, Issei was about to walk off when he accidentally nudged a door, causing it to swing open and reveal a darkened hallway. Who leaves their door unlocked like that? He thought in suspicion before sighing as he walked in. I hope you don't mind, but I'm coming in, he announced, leaving the door open as he kept a hand on his card holder. As the teen walked into the nearest room, he stopped short as he saw the headless corpse of a man lying in a pool of, what the hell happened here? Gasped Issei. It's a shame that he lost his head, a careless sinner who wound up dead. He wore his sin like it was some kind of prize. Too many lies, sung a manic voice as Issei spun around to see a white-haired man in some sort of priest outfit. You don't feel like one of those shitty devils? Bah, no matter. So did you like my handiwork? Grinned the priest. You're responsible for this. Why? Growled Issei as his mind began whirling. This house is too small for me to use the Tarapalos and Gibog effectively. I don't know what the caster card does, but if all else fails I can resort to boosted gear, he decided as the teen pulled out the card from its holder. The priest just smiled as he pulled out a gun and some sort of small hilt-looking object. I'm just doing my job. Killing shitty devils and sinners is what I do best, replied the exorcist, and Issei watched with wide eyes as the hilt object suddenly burst into light. A lightsaber, exclaimed Issei in shock. The priest just gave him a mocking bow in response before the light sword came swinging at Issei's head eagerly. The name's Fried Selzen. Remember it well, it's the name of the stray exorcist that will kill you. Include caster, growled Issei as he was covered in light, his rune necklace glowing a deep black and dark purple. The two of them laughed as they drank their tea, one clad in a golden kimono with a sun pattern flowing along its surface, while the other was clad in a black and white one with the different stages of the moon beautifully woven into the clothing. Indeed, Tsukayomi, I do wonder if our dear brother Susanoo will ever learn to act his age. Why, just yesterday the gold one suddenly paused mid-sentence as her eyes widened and she jumped to her feet, startling her companion. Amaterasu, what's wrong? Asked the moon god, snapping his sister from her trance. The Shinto sun goddess just shook her head. I thought I just felt ... and oh, that's impossible, I must have been mistaken. Tsukayomi watched as his companion returned to her seat and the moon god tried to continue their previous conversation, only to frown as he noticed how distracted his sister seemed. Honestly, what could have caused Amaterasu to act like that? A couple of minutes later, Tsukayomi would wish they'd remained ignorant, would have saved them a large number of headaches in the future. The insane exorcist frowned as the light died down to reveal his sword being blocked by a large ornate mirror hovering protectively in front of Issei. A mirror. Huh, are you that vain that you want to check your reflection before you die? Laughed Fried. Of course not, I thought you could use it. After all, if looks could kill, then your ugly mug would be more deadly than even Gibalg, taunted Issei as the exorcist backed off. You shitty devil lover, I'm going to enjoy breaking you and your precious mirror, promised Fried as he sent another attack, only to see the mirror halt his sword again. Growling in frustration, Fried attacked again with his light sword, intending to shatter the fragile-looking mirror with his blade. However, the mirror held firm and the exorcist backed away in confusion as he saw it block the hit without a single crack or blemish on its ornate surface. Issei slowly stood up from the ground and the mirror followed him, hovering around the teen like a protective guardian as he glared at Fried. The exorcist just snarled as he fired his gun at Issei, only to see the mirror quickly move between the two of them and block the otherwise lethal shots. Sorry, exorcist, but I'm afraid this fragile mirror is more than strong enough to stop those weak attacks, smiled the teen. Fried backed away slightly as he saw a paper talisman materialize in Issei's hand. So you're a magic caster, are you? One of those shitty devils contracted mages. Maybe I am and maybe I'm not, replied Issei before he threw the talisman at the exorcist, whom just laughed as it hit the floor beneath him. Pretty shitty mage if you ask me, if you can only throw paper at people, taunted Fried as stepped on the talisman. Fiery heavens, called Issei in response as the talisman beneath the exorcist's feet suddenly erupted into a pillar of flames and engulfed Fried. The insane exorcist cried out in pain as he quickly leapt out of the pillar and threw his flaming priest's cloak to the side. You'll pay for that, you piece of shit, snarled Fried as Issei saw a long burn running down his cheek. Why, looks to me like an improvement, he replied as the pillar of flames died down and left a ring of fire that began to spread. Father Fried, is everything okay? I heard shouting, said a familiar female voice, making Issei's eyes widen as he saw Asia walk into the house and gasp at the wide corpse on the ground. That's right, you're a newbie, aren't you? Well, take a good long look, Asia-chan. This is what we do. We kill shitty devils, and all who consort with them, laughed Fried, sadistically as he pointed towards the teen. Issei, exclaimed Asia as she stared at the teen in shock. Asia, run, get out of here now. He yelled at her. Oh, you two know each other, do you? A heretical witch and a shitty devil lover? Now isn't that disgusting? Snarled Fried as he grabbed Asia by the neck and threw her at the wall where she fell down to the ground. Asia, cried Issei as he threw another talisman at Fried, only to see the exorcist dodge to the side as the pillar of fire erupted right next to him. Don't worry, I won't kill her. My boss told me not to. But she never said anything about me not having some fun with her, replied the exorcist as he had his lips in anticipation. You bastard, raged Issei, and this time 3 talismans appeared in his hand, causing Fried's eyes to widen as he dived behind a wall that was quickly reduced to smoking rumble. Ooh, that killing intent is nice. I think I'm in love, taunted Fried from his smoking cover. Smoke began filling the house and the building gave a loud groan as the flames from Issei's talisman spread throughout the house, weakened the building's support structures. Issei's mirror quickly moved to block the trio of bullets that fired out of the smoke-obscured exorcist, only for Issei's eyes to widen as Fried took advantage of this blind spot and got in close. You see, that's the problem with you shitty magic casters. You don't know how to get your hands dirty. Once the enemy gets in close, it's all over for you, laughed Fried as he began a relentless assault on Issei, not giving him time to summon any more talismans. The mirror was a good shield, but it couldn't handle blocking 2 attacks at once, and Issei was forced to duck as another trio of bullets flew over his head while the mirror blocked a decapitating swing from the light sword. Realizing this, Fried continued using the mirror shield as a blind spot and began inflicting numerous cuts along Issei's body, causing the teen to grunt in pain as his body began aching again. However, while this strategy did help the exorcist, it also made him predictable as Issei noted the repeating pattern occurring from the attacks, always striking for the blind spot. As Fried began another attack, Issei grinned as he sent a punch into his newly created blind spot and was rewarded with the shocked face of the exorcist, a red gauntlet slamming into his gut and sending him flying. A Longinus, cried Fried as he was sent through the wall and into the next room, the building once again shaking as yet another supporting structure collapsed. Frigid heaven, cried Issei as the hole between 2 rooms was blocked by a wall of ice, the combination of the growing smoke and ice barrier obscuring the other room from view. Damn shitty mage, growled Fried as he stumbled back to his feet and heard a noise above him and saw the ceiling begin to crack, the house finally beginning to give after the constant abuse it had been taking. Cursing again, the exorcist quickly ran out of the room before searching for the knocked-out nun as the building began collapsing. If he left her to die, then Rainier would have his head after all. Growling in frustration, he threw Asia over his shoulder and sprinted out of the burning building just as the roof finally caved in. Sighing in relief, Fried dropped the nun to the ground and watched the burning remains of the building for any signs that the teen had survived, only to see nothing but fire and smoke. Oh, are you still there, you shitty devil lover? Come on out, or I might decide to have some fun with the little witch. Fried waited, but there was still no sign of movement from within the rubble. Eventually giving up, he walked back over to Asia, whom appeared to be finally beginning to wake up. Well, hello there, witch. Now where were we? He asked with a sadistic grin as Asia began backing away fearfully on the ground. Eventually the nun felt her back hit a fence and could only watch fearfully as Fried approached and pushed her down to the ground before straddling her. An unsullied nun gets defiled by a priest, huh? Is it just me, or is that kinda hot? As the exorcist stowed his 2 weapons in their holsters, an uncharacteristic smile grew on Asia's face before she reached up to his neck. With a strength that defied her petite form, Asia then lifted Fried up off the ground by his neck. Gotcha, she smiled, smugly. What? You damn traitor, coughed out the exorcist as the grip on his neck tightened. Asia's smile just widened. Traitor. Oh please, I was never on your side to begin with. The nun then began singing what sounded like an odd nursery rhyme. I'm going to shapeshift, I will shapeshift. I am you are me. I'm going to shapeshift, I shapeshifted. I am you, and you are me. Fried's eyes widened as he saw a familiar red gauntlet appear on the nun's arm while that damned mirror emerged from hiding behind her back and once again started hovering around them. Asia was then covered in a soft glow before her form faded away like cracked glass, and Issei was standing in her place, a triumphant smirk on his face. You little shit, choked out the exorcist only to be interrupted as Issei put more pressure around his neck. You weren't very smart, were you, exorcist? You didn't stop to wonder why I blocked off vision between those 2 rooms. Nor did you even take the time to check your surroundings before indulging in your fun. If you had just stopped to look around, you would have seen Asia's unconscious body over there, informed Issei with a grin as he gestured towards the body of the nun leaning against a tree. The teen then materialized a talisman in his hand. Now you're going to tell me all I want to know, or I'm going to shove this talisman right where it hurts. I hear burns are quite painful to heal in those areas. However, before Issei could so much as blink, his mirror instantly swung around and blocked a projectile that came sailing at his head, distracting the teen and creating an opening for Fried. The exorcist quickly grabbed his sword from its holster and inflicted a narrow cut along the teen's, causing Issei to let go of his neck by reflex. Issei groaned as he heard the familiar sound of flapping wings and looked up to see Rainier and another fallen angel he didn't recognize flying in the sky above him. Hello again, Rainier. I should have guessed you were behind this little scheme. Trying to kill another human off, are you? I thought you would have learnt your lesson after what I did to OOC Mittelt, he growled as the boosted gear started glowing again. That was you, cried the fallen angel as she remembered how Mittal just went missing from the middle of the church. They thought she just ran away, but apparently they were mistaken. Damn it, Fried grabbed that damn nun and prepared to retreat. Rainier, we outnumber him 3-1, let's just take him out now, argued Cuchulainn as Fried picked up Asia's body. You're not going anywhere, exorcist. Frigid heaven, snarled Issei as he blocked off Fried from the exit with an ice pillar. Issei then had to throw up another couple of pillars of ice to block off the light spears being sent at him by the two fallen angels in retaliation, only to dive to the side as Fried dropped Asia and rushed towards him. Unfortunately, the exorcist was too quick and gave Issei a nasty stab wound in the gut, causing Issei to cry out in pain before punching Fried in the face with his gauntlet and bringing a smile to the teen's face as he heard the satisfying sound of the exorcist's jaw breaking. See, Rainier, this kid is nothing special, let's just end this now, laughed Cuchulainn as she rushed towards the teen's wounded form, only to back off as a pillar of fire erupted between her and her target. As the pillar died down, they all saw Issei panting heavily on one knee, holding his stab wound with a grimace on his face. Upon seeing this, Cuchulainn let out a mocking laugh while Rainier and Fried cautiously approached Issei, keeping their guards up. How much energy do you have left after casting all those spells, you novice mage? Now that you're low on energy, you're as good as dead, boosted gear or not, gloated Cuchulainn while Rainier and Fried began to back away slightly as a grin grew on Issei's face. True, the main weakness with magic casters is their lack of defense should they run out of energy, acknowledged the teen as his mirror began glowing with a purple light and his rune necklace from Scathach began to feel hot. Everyone in the burning remains of the house felt a strange atmosphere descend upon them as they heard Issei's voice become laced with that of a female's god who resides in Izumo. The mirror in front of the teen began levitating high in the air as they all saw 12 purple glowing Afuta talismans materialize before surrounding the mirror and its wielder. Aesthetically certain, breath of the soul. The ground beneath them started shaking as multiple torii made of purple light erupted from the earth and surrounded the entire area. Fried and Rainier continued backing away while Cuchulainn just kept staring at their new surroundings in shock. Residing in the mountains and watery heavens, Amaterasu. Let this freely become the proof of purification, called Issei, and the energy that had been charging in the area suddenly began flowing into the glowing mirror at an alarming rate. The mirror then moved to levitate above Issei as the teen leapt into the air and grabbed the noble phantasm before slamming it into the ground as he landed. Thy name is weighted stone of Tamamo. Become the sacred treasure, mirror of Yuka. They were all blinded as Issei was engulfed in an enormous pillar of purple light, no one noticing the teen's rune necklace cracking as everyone heard a loud voice call out, "Eightfold blessing of Amaterasu." Cuchulainn just watched as the pillar of light was absorbed into Issei's body, and instantly the teen looked up at her with a triumphant grin, his body radiating energy as he summoned numerous talismans in both his hands. The fallen angel backed up slightly as she turned back to her two companions, only to find them and the nun's body missing. What the? Rainier, Fried, where did you bastards go? She called out in anger. Well, fallen angel, looks like you've been abandoned, commented Issei in amusement, making her turn back to him in disbelief. Merciful sky, shouted the teen as a ring seemed to glow around him briefly, and Cuchulainn felt the very area around her turn hostile. Issei didn't offer her any sympathy though as he threw all his talismans at the fallen angel. Cuchulainn tried to dodge, but Issei had spread the talismans out too widely and she was caught in a large pillar of fire. The heat was unbearable and Cuchulainn felt the feathers on her wings beginning to catch alight as she quickly escaped the pillar and crashed to the ground. You're still breathing, huh? You fallen angels really are more robust than I give you credit for. Any human would have died from those burns instantly, observed Issei as he approached. Cuchulainn struggled to her feet as she summoned another light spear and tried to ignore the pain burning throughout her body. Throwing her spear, she watched in dismay as the hovering mirror intercepted it as Issei continued to approach, the flames behind him giving the teen a hellish look as they illuminated the area, the street lights long since destroyed. Where did they take her? He demanded. Why do you care? She only arrived here 2 days ago, scoffed Cuchulainn, only to flinch as Issei summoned another talisman. I'm asking the questions here, fallen angel, growled the teen, but before he could continue his interrogation they both heard the sounds of sirens growing louder in the distance. Looks like you're out of time, human. I'm not telling you anything, coughed Cuchulainn with a triumphant smile before leaping into the air and flying as fast as her damaged wings would let her. So be it then, replied the teen coldly as he grabbed the archer card and summoned Tauropolos. Knocking an arrow, Issei then materialized another talisman before wrapping it around the arrow and sighting down on the fleeing fallen angel. Taking a deep breath, Issei released the arrow, which went sailing into Cuchulainn before bursting into a pillar of flames. As the mirror and bow faded and transformed back into their respective cards, Issei just watched as the pillar faded before he quickly leapt over the nearby fence and rushed home as the emergency services finally arrived on scene to put out the fire. Elsewhere at the Hayadu residence, two Celts were happily enjoying their first ever pizza. Issei is late, noted Morrigan with a frown. Scathach just sighed. Morgan, I told you to just relax. Honestly, what could go wrong in only 20 minutes? Breaking news. A nearby housing complex has recently burnt down. Thankfully, there are only 2 casualties reported so far, a male resident and a so far unidentified female. Due to the nature of the male's death, police have concluded that foul play is likely. So far, no group has claimed responsibility, but police believe local Yakuza are responsible. Morgan and Scathach both turned to see the TV report that Mr. Hayadu was watching before shrugging their shoulders and continuing to indulge in their newly found favorite food as they heard a knock on the door. See, that's probably him now. I told you everything would be fine, assured Scathach as she got up from the table and answered the door, only to have Issei collapse in her arms. That was the day Issei realized he shouldn't tempt fate. It was also the day that he realized that fate would find a way to screw him over regardless. Both Tsukuyomi and Amaterasu froze as they felt an incredibly familiar yet impossible power begin to draw energy from their homeland's ley lines. Amaterasu just dropped her tea mug in shock, not noticing or caring that the cup shattered on the ground and the tea began to soak into her kimono. Amaterasu, do you feel that? Asked Tsukuyomi in shock. The sun goddess just nodded in silence, too stunned to speak as the power continued siphoning off energy from the ley lines. Tsukuyomi could understand her reaction. After all, it wasn't every day you felt someone with the exact same power as you. That's not possible, whispered Amaterasu, softly with wide eyes. Tsukuyomi nodded in agreement. This new power felt exactly like his sister's. Granted that it was much weaker, but still the resemblance between the two was so close that they were near identical. In fact, if Tsukuyomi didn't know better, he would have thought that there were 2 of Amaterasu, the one standing before him and the weaker one draining the ley lines. Is it your chosen priestess? Asked Tsukuyomi, only to see Amaterasu shake her head with a frown. No, Yasaka can only access the ley lines in a near Kyoto, plus she would be taking much more power than this individual, replied the sun goddess. Besides, I know what her power feels like, and this is far too similar to my own to be hers. Could it be a fragment left behind after your experience in the mortal world? Questioned Tsukuyomi softly, knowing how sensitive the topic was for her. Possible, but I thought I collected all my fragments after the killing stone was broken. For one of them to not only remain hidden but gain sentience after so many years, let alone how it retains the ability to access the ley lines, frowned Amaterasu. It is odd, so what do you want to do? Go and collect it? Asked Tsukuyomi, curiously, only to frown as they felt the power disappear as it stopped draining the ley lines. Tsukuyomi and Amaterasu blinked as they tried to sense it again, only to fail as it seemed to literally disappear off the face of the planet. The 2 Shinto gods just looked at each other in shock. It would seem this fragment is quite good at masking itself, commented the moon god. Indeed, I'll send word to our followers in Kyoto to be on the lookout for it. In the meantime, I'll keep my eyes on the ley lines. If it revealed itself before to use them, it might do the same again, agreed Amaterasu with a sigh. And if you do find this individual, what will you do then? Questioned her counterpart. The sun goddess was silent as a thoughtful look crossed her face. Caster include state. STR, F. Con, F. AGI, C. MGI, B. LCK, E. Boosted gear gift, A. Type, anti-unit. Maximum number of targets, depends on the energy being transferred. An evolution of the basic boosted gear Longinus. The boosted gear gift retains all the abilities of the original sacred gear but also has the ability to transfer the increased power to other people or objects. The transferred power can be performed on multiple people, objects at the same time. However, this decreases the efficiency and some of the power will be lost in the transfer. This can also be used on a certain part of the user's body, such as the eyes, for enhanced vision. Eightfold Blessing of Amaterasu, E. Type, Anti-Army. Maximum amount of targets, 100 people. A divine treasure from the land of the dead. This mirror is the temporarily released form of the weighted stone of Tamamo. Once activated, this noble phantasm draws an energy from its surroundings, including living organisms such as the user's opponents, to allow the user to cast spells without draining their own reserves. It was once able to bring back the dead and was originally an X-rank anti-world noble phantasm capable of covering a country. However, during the Moon Cell Holy Grail War, restrictions were placed on it, reducing it to a D rank and limiting the amount of energy that can be stored. Witchcraft, A. Also known as Maleficium, this type of spellcasting is similar to the Dakini heavenly methods. This type of magic functions differently from magecraft. Instead of using the existing materials from the environment to fuel the spells, it recomposes them within the caster's own body. This lowers the prana cost of spells cast using this method. Aside from its potent combat abilities, this type of spellcasting is also used for other purposes, including methods to discern one's time of death. Combat spells. Fiery Heavens, a curse that manifests as a talisman that then detonates into a large pillar of fire at the caster's command. Frigid Heavens, a curse that manifests as a talisman that creates a large pillar of ice at the caster's command. Merciful Sky, a mantra that greatly increases the potency of spells used by the caster by approximately 400% of the original. Divinity, B. Due to Tamayo's soul being created from Amaterasu's and because of her being a unique facet of the sun goddess herself, she has divinity equaling a god's. When Issei includes this card, a large portion of this divinity is transferred over to him. Shapeshift. B. Like all Kitsune, Tamamo no Mi was infamous for her ability to hide her form from others, eventually leading to her being hunted down and executed. This skill allows Issei to change his form into that of another or to alter his own appearance. However, due to the reduced rank, he cannot hold the transformation indefinitely like Tamamo herself.